the night sky erupted with thunder, and a god appeared before the protagonist and declared that the magical kingdom was overcrowded and no new members were being accepted. The protagonist walked closer to the edge of the cliff, holding his sword in his hand, to speak one-on-one with the giant image of the god. God struck with lightning and told the boy not to be stubborn because thunder would strike and then our hero would die. But the warrior stood motionless. Bai Shu, a practitioner in the period of tribulation, replied that he had trained hard for 300 years to ascend to immortality, so no one would stop him today. The god became angry with the hero, shouted that he was insolent, and directed lightning with his palm straight at the guy to strike him for obeying. Lightning struck the rock on which our hero stood, sending huge rocks flying into the air. But the boy flew up, leaving a trail of flame behind him. Protecting himself with the power of fire, Bai Shu declared that if a god hindered him, then he was ready to kill the gods as well. Surrounding himself with a fiery aura, the boy flew high above the ground and directed a stream of fiery energy against the god. The lightning god opened his mouth wide and screamed as a huge stream of magical firepower tried to hit him. Our hero's eyes glowed a bright red light as he continued to attack the god with the power of fire, saying what would happen if the heavens stopped him. He screamed loudly and directed all his fiery power against the deity to break through to the world of immortals. After this attack, the thunder god disappeared, leaving behind a thick fog, behind which a bright light could be seen leading to the heavens. Bai Shu smiled faintly and looked hopefully at the bright light blinding his eyes. He had defeated the evil god. The main character confidently jumped forward. He was sure that in front of him was a portal that would lead him to a magical kingdom. In the shadows of the street, two guys were beating up a guy sitting on the ground, accusing him of daring to steal their brother Hu's woman. It turned out that our hero, after passing through the heavenly portal, found himself in the body of a guy named Li Jian. At first he thought he had entered a magical kingdom. The hooligans continued to bully the boy, grinning evilly as the beaten Li Jian sat on the asphalt in front of them. Li Jian remained silent, so the bully shouted, asking if he was mute, and swung his fist to hit the guy again. Our hero saw that this guy had no fluctuations in spiritual power, which meant he was definitely not in a magical kingdom, and was able to easily stop his fist with his hand. Li Jian, shielding himself with his hand, looked at the bully with red eyes and asked in a cold voice if he was finished yet. The attacker clenched his teeth and tensed up. He didn't understand why the hell this guy had suddenly become so strong. The protagonist stood up from the ground and with one blow of his knee, threw the bully away from himself so that he flew back and screamed in pain, falling to the ground. The second hooligan charged his fist with power and shouted that he would teach Li Jian a lesson. And our hero felt strange, because he could not use spiritual power. The muscular giant shouted that Li Jian would now learn the true power of superpowers, but our hero was not afraid. The protagonist's eyes widened when he heard about the superpowers this hooligan had. The big guy tried to pounce on Li Jian with a fist charged with supernatural power, but the guy managed to dodge. A moment later, he found himself behind the bully and said that he might have lost his spiritual strength. But with such a level of ability, the enemy definitely would not defeat him. The hooligan didn't have time to answer a word, when a moment later he received a strong punch to the stomach from our hero and screamed loudly in pain. Li Jian's blow was so powerful that the big man began to thrash around in the air across the street, hitting and then being thrown off the stone walls. The villain rolled his eyes and stuck out his tongue. A bump appeared on his forehead, and his face was covered in abrasions from our hero's attack. The big guy flinched and was terrified to the point of horror when he saw Legion in the air above him, who was preparing to attack the guy again. Seeing the enemy's superior strength, the hooligans simultaneously fell to their knees in front of Li Jian to surrender. The beaten boys began to shout that they admitted their guilt and begged our hero to let them go, and Li Jian told them to get lost. They ran away, shouting that they needed to quickly tell the boss that this idiot Li Jian seemed to have awakened superpowers. The protagonist perked up when he heard his name for the first time in this world, and memories began to awaken in his head. Fear and horror appeared in the boy's eyes as he was plunged into the memories of Li Jian's past. It was as if he was back on the day of the car accident. The guy standing in the rain and watching it. Our hero saw that Li Jian lost his parents in an accident as a child. And then the little boy was adopted by his mother's friend Liu Yuran. As a result of the injury, the boy developed autism at a young age, which made him the subject of ridicule at school. The guy concluded that the deliberate cutting of the sky did not help him rise, but, on the contrary, forced him to turn into a mortal and end up in this strange world. The young man, thinking about the superpowers of people in this world, was startled when some girl ran up and shouted his name. It was Jiti, a girl with pink hair, who ran to the boy's aid with a worried face and asked why he was being bullied. She gave him healing energy and advised him to just run away if he didn't want to fight. Jitsi was the daughter of Liu Yiren, Li Jian's adoptive mother. The hero realized that the two were bullying him because Li Jian was close to her. And after each such beating, Jitsi used her superpowers to heal the guy. Jitsi said it was good that he was beaten a little this time. Otherwise, given the level of her abilities, the guy would have had to go to the hospital. But Li Jian didn't listen to her. He removed his hand and wondered if superpowers could be magic in his understanding. The boy's eyes widened and he stared at the girl when she flicked him on the forehead for not paying attention to her words. GC asked the young man, who was lost in his thoughts, why he was silent. The protagonist asked the pink-haired girl how ordinary mortals could hurt him. The girl wondered if the boy's autism had turned into schizophrenia, and Li Jian suspected that she was looking down on him. Zizi didn't take the guy's question seriously, asked him to forget about it, and suggested that they go home. The girl grabbed Li Jian by the hand and dragged the stunned guy along with her, saying that his mother was already waiting for them at home. On the way home, Li Jian concluded that this world was completely different from his previous one, where there were endless tall buildings and cars that easily traveled hundreds of miles. He also noticed that people of all ages dressed poorly, exposing their skin. But he even liked the fact that he would be freed from yet another shackle of his past world. The boy understood that superpowers were the dominant force in this world, but he didn't know whether cultivators would be affected by superpowers. The protagonist concluded that the path to recreating another world was indeed difficult. And even if it was difficult, he still intended to achieve his main desire of ascension. The following events took place on East Street in District A8, where Li Jian lived with his foster family. Cici happily walked out of the elevator and said that they were finally home. Li Jian followed after the girl, but the girl's expression changed after a second. She was very scared when she saw someone in front of her and screamed, asking why he was here. The main character became wary and curious about who could have scared his new little sister so much. This mysterious man came closer, and the first thing our hero noticed was his shiny white leather shoes. A man with bright blue eyes and gray hair looked at GC intently and greeted her. It turned out that he was her father, but the daughter was clearly not happy to see him. She asked what he was doing there. The old man replied that he had just come to talk to her mother about something. The girl's mother herself showed up. The red-haired girl angrily shouted the name of her ex-husband, Ji Chengtian. The enraged woman told the man to get out of there. He straightened his tie, smirked, and said that it seemed Liu Yuran was not very happy to see him. Ji Chengtian asked his daughter not to worry and promised that he would come to her in a couple of days. He wanted to touch her, but Ji screamed at him not to do so. Proudly raising his chin, the man declared that she would not be able to escape him anyway, and walked towards the exit, keeping his hands in his pockets. Li Jian knew that this man had heavily interfered and controlled the lives of his ex-wife and daughter, but there was no more information in the guy's memory. Liu Yuran and his daughter cried and hugged, and the boy concluded that the old man's appearance did not bode well, so he should cultivate as quickly as possible. When it got dark outside, the guy decided to go for a walk in the park. He covered his face with his hand and thought about what was happening in this strange world. He felt tired because of Jitsi and Liu Yuran, who were first hysterical and then fell asleep, and decided that it would be better to do some practice. Li Jin sat on the bench in a meditative posture and closed his eyes, hoping that the true owner of the body would be able to cultivate immortality with his spiritual essence. The first thing the guy decided to do was to use the technique of introducing qi into the body and nourishing the human spirit with the spirit of heaven. He knew that ancient spirit was a technique he had created on his own in his past life. It could condense the absorbed spiritual energy to strengthen its realm. The boy's body was surrounded by a magical blue light. When he began to practice, he concluded that the aura of this strange world was very thin. Li Yuan teleported to the spiritual realm and realized that even with the ancient spiritual energy, she could only condense 3 spiritual powers. The guy was sweating from the tension. He knew that he had to persevere, no matter how difficult it was, because qi, penetrating the muscles and veins, supports nature and strengthens the spirit. During the practice, the protagonist felt as if his entire body was engulfed in flames. The veins on his skin bulged, and he clenched his teeth tightly. As he erupted into a powerful stream of flames, he wondered if this feeling could indicate that he had obtained a body that was inherent to the rare Tao body. The spiritual energy here was so subtle that Li Jian could cultivate it in the blink of an eye, and he had already reached the 5th level of qi refining. The main character had to take a break from practice when a woman's pleas for help were heard in the park at night. It was a girl with blue hair. The guy immediately opened his eyes and became alert because he heard that someone needed help. Li Jian saw the girl trip while running for her life and fall flat on the asphalt right in front of him. A hooligan ran after her, saying that she had nowhere left to run, and she screamed at him not to come near her and trembled with fear. The girl was unable to rise from the ground. She extended a trembling hand and began to beg our hero to help her. In response, the protagonist looked intently and silently at the stranger, his red eyes flashing. The bully pointed his finger at Li Jian and shouted at the boy to go about his business and not interfere. Our hero turned around, looked at the villain and said that, "It turns out there are bastards everywhere." This made the purple-haired guy even more angry. He shouted that Li Jian asked for it and activated his superpower. He used his hands to release a stream of energy towards Li Jian, shouting that today the boy would experience the power of second-level superpowers. Li Jian was indifferent to this, and upon seeing the thunder attribute, he decided that it was time to try out the results of today's cultivation. When the villain's stream of power was already a few centimeters from our hero's face, he simply froze in the air, hardening. The hooligan was shocked. The flow of his magical energy hardened. Even his hands were shackled. He was shocked that his thunder and lightning did not hurt Li Jian. The boy was horrified when Li Jian went on the attack, saying that only short-sighted imbeciles would focus on superpower levels. The villain offered to discuss everything with Li Jian, but it was too late. A moment later, he received a crushing blow to the stomach. The guy collapsed to the ground, foam coming out of his mouth, and the main character declared that you can't get rid of everyone with superpowers. The protagonist became wary and looked away when he noticed another threat. But it turned out that it was the stranger he had saved, who hugged the guy from behind as a sign of gratitude. The girl, blushing with embarrassment, sniffed Li Jian's clothes and told him how delicious he smelled. The protagonist glanced back and thought that the stranger had too much blood circulation, which meant that something was wrong with her. The guy apologized to the girl in advance, and then turned around and grabbed her wrist so sharply that she only had time to open her mouth. Afterwards, Li Jian prepared 2 fingers and charged them with true qi to cure the stranger. The blue-haired girl screamed in pain as our hero began to poke her with his fingers, healing her. After this, the stranger immediately felt better and admitted to the guy that she felt better. But a moment later, the girl lost consciousness. Li Jian picked her up and thought that she now needed to drink tea to wake up. But then another guy appeared in front of our hero. He screamed for the bastard to take his hands off his sister, his fists blazing with magical fire. It was Gu Tianju, a tall, red-haired guy in a suit who possessed a third-level ability. The protagonist was indifferent to the appearance of another aggressive guy and saw that he also had superpowers. The brother of the rescued stranger rushed forward, swinging his fist charged with fiery power, and shouted that he would kill Li Jian. Li Jian threw the stranger, who was sleeping at the time, back so that the girl could rest on the bench. When Gu Tianju tried to hit him, Li Jian easily dodged and told the guy that he was doing it too slowly. He immediately grabbed the guy's hand and said that although his cultivation level was not higher than the 5th level of qi refining, he could deal with such people without magic. Afterwards, he threw the red-haired guy right against the tree. He hit his back and grimaced in pain. Gu Tianju fell to the ground with a thud, and our hero raised one leg to teach him another lesson. The red-haired boy thought that Li Jian was too fast, and he couldn't parry his attacks, and guessed that the opponent was from the Supreme Academy. The protagonist looked down at him with a demonic gaze and asked if Gu had just said that he wanted to kill him. Li Jian put his foot on the guy's head and pinned him to the ground. Gu Tianju's whole body trembled as he tried to get up from the ground. The boy activated his superpowers again and shouted that Li Jian could humiliate him, but he didn't dare touch his sister. Our hero began to closely follow the red-haired guy, assuming that he wanted to use some kind of technique against him. Li Jian quickly jumped back as his opponent erupted into huge flames. Gu Tianju activated the flame burst technique and shouted that his strength was enough to deal with the guy. The protagonist stood calmly with his hands in his pockets, protecting himself with his aura, and knew that the barrier field inherent in the Dao body could weaken all blows. The red-haired guy tensed up. He guessed that Li Jian's superpowers were earth elemental since his flames didn't affect him. But on the other hand, he saw that the opponent had no ability at all, so he shouted, asking who Li Jian was anyway. Li Jian advised the boy to take better care of himself, because his blood was boiling. His heart couldn't take it, and he might blow himself up right now. Our hero was right. Gu Tianju's eyes showed great concern. He turned pale and began to groan. The red-haired guy couldn't take it anymore and fell to his knees. His whole body was shaking. He grabbed his heart and started screaming in pain. When Li Jian picked the boy up, grabbed his hand and put 2 fingers on it, Gu asked Li what else he wanted to do to him. The protagonist did not answer the questions but waved his hand, preparing his index and middle fingers. Gu Tianju screamed in fright as Li Jian began to hit him with 2 fingers at different points on his body. Li Jian crossed his arms over his chest and asked the guy in the suit how he felt now after the procedure. The red-haired boy was stunned, holding his heart and sweating. He asked Li Jian if he was really saving him. Our hero explained that Gu simply misunderstood everything. The guy wanted to protect his sister and had no intention of killing Tianju. At that moment, the stranger with blue hair began to come to her senses. The girl slowly opened her eyes. The girl was stunned when she saw her brother. She asked what he was doing there, and Li Jian noticed that she had woken up. The blue-haired stranger awkwardly apologized to Li Jian for saving her, and her brother was shocked that our hero had nothing to do with it. The red-haired guy winced in anger when his little sister admitted that she had been drugged at a bar and that some young man had harassed her. Gu Tianju felt ashamed, scratched his head and apologized to Li Jian for his mistake, and Li Jian decided to leave now that all the misunderstandings had been resolved. Suddenly, a bearded old man with a security guard appeared in the park, laughed, and suggested that they simply discuss it if it was a misunderstanding. 2 strangers came closer. The main character looked at them and asked who they were. An elderly man sitting in a wheelchair introduced himself as Gu Wen, the boy's grandfather, and there were 2 guards standing behind him. The old man said that if it weren't for the help of his little friend, meaning Li Jian, his dear grandson would have literally exploded. Li Jian turned and left, declining his grandfather's offer when he asked if the boy would like to visit his humble home as a token of gratitude. Gu Wen said that he was well versed in the secrets of ancient monuments, and he saw that Li Jian's abilities were incredibly high, and he had only read about such power in books. The old man turned his head, looked at our hero, and admitted that he was curious about where the protagonist learned all this. Li Jian paused and thought that there was no fluctuation in spiritual power around Gu Wen, but it seemed like he could sense the changes in the guy's spiritual power, meaning he wasn't just an ordinary old man. The protagonist did not reveal his secrets. He walked away, telling the old man that it did not matter where he got this knowledge. Gu Tianju asked his grandfather who this Li Jian was, because his body and strength were very unusual. The blushing and enamored girl admitted that she still thought Li Jian was cute, and that he might even help their grandfather solve his leg problem. Grandfather strictly ordered his grandchildren not to tell anyone about what happened, and asked Tianju to get information about our hero. The old man thought that if Li Jian really turned out to be legendary, his Gu family would prosper. The protagonist returned home, where his half-sister Jiqi was, and on the dresser there was a framed photo of the whole family gathered together. Lu Yiran gave her adopted son a new uniform because school started today. Li Jian smiled and thanked her. Zizi was stunned by her brother's sudden politeness and said that Li Jian was acting very strange today. The girl hugged her mother and told her that Liu Yiran had specially chosen a uniform for the boy, and that the purchase cost 3 months of her salary. Looking at the uniform, Li Jian thought that the Liu family was not rich, so he seemed to be a truly full-fledged member of the family. Liu Yiran got angry because her daughter said that even her mother doesn't buy her things like that, and she reminded her that she always buys her all sorts of crap. Watching the girls, the guy thought how well they treated him, which meant he should definitely take this family under his protection. It was the school day at Yajun University, an international aristocratic college where students with superpowers study, and everyone on the street noticed Li Jian. Li Jian came here accompanied by his sister. Jitsi told her brother that he looked much better in his new clothes. One of the students started whispering to his friend behind his back, saying how stupid Li Jian was, unlike his sister, the school beauty. Our hero understood that Li initially had no strength at all, but he never thought that because of his illness he would become an object of ridicule for those strong children. As he was walking to the university, 2 students blocked the guy's path. They immediately called our hero a fool. Ziza felt awkward, grabbed her brother's hand, and suggested that they leave so as not to run into those hooligans again. The gang was led by Chen Hu, who told Li Jian not to think that they would treat him well if he wore good clothes. Li Jian knew that Chen Hu was quite a rich and influential man in this university, and had often pestered Li before because he was close to his lover, Ziqi. A hooligan with a gold chain around his neck grabbed our hero by the jacket and declared that it was time to settle the score with him, and Jici tried to stop him. The protagonist pierced the bully with a cold gaze and ordered him to take his dirty hands off him. Li Jian repeated this again, and then suddenly grabbed Chen Hu's hand and twisted it back without much effort. The big man Chen Hu trembled all over and screamed at the whole university courtyard, clutching his arm because he was in a lot of pain. Jici sincerely did not understand why her brother had become so strong. A crowd had gathered who believed that Chen Hu, with his 5th level of strength, would now defeat our hero. The protagonist became thoughtful when he heard from the students that his opponent had 5th level abilities. He knew that the cultivation system was divided into 8 levels, and the initial level of abilities was divided into 9 levels. The 5th level ability in this world is equivalent to the 5th level of Qi refining cultivation, according to Li Jian. However, the guy doesn't know how strong a person's abilities are at this level. Meanwhile, Chen Hu was puzzled as to why this paralytic had become so strong. Chen Hu gritted his teeth in anger and shouted at our hero that a fool who had awakened abilities within himself was still a fool. He shouted that if Li Jian dared to joke with him, he would kill him. And at that moment, his friends rushed to pounce on our hero. Zizi protected her brother with her back and became indignant, asking the hooligans what they were doing on university grounds. She closed her eyes in fear when the bully almost hit her in the face with his fist, shouting that Chen Hu's father was the manager of the university, so he was in charge here. The protagonist suddenly grabbed his little sister by the waist to protect her from an attack by a gang of hooligans. The pink-haired girl looked at her brother in confusion as the big man's fist flew past her without hitting her. One of Chen Hu's henchmen let out a loud grunt of pain as our hero deftly kicked him in the torso. GC looked at her brother and couldn't understand where he got so much power from. She was already beginning to believe that the guy had awakened his superpowers. The girl's expression turned frightened as she noticed something and shouted at Li Jian to be careful. Another guy wanted to attack the guy from behind, who said that he had just awakened the crystal energy yesterday, so he would now paint Li Jian's face. Li Jian noticed this and tried to push his opponent back with his elbow, but in his place there was only a blue glowing silhouette. The hooligan who had awakened the crystal energy moved across the battle arena as quickly as the wind. He shouted to Li Jian that he was here. The protagonist found it interesting that the method of using the wind to move was similar to the basic skill of wind control. The enemy was terrified when Li Jian finally managed to catch up with him and swing his hand to attack the guy. One punch from Li Jian was enough to knock out the bully, and the other guys were also scared when they saw it. Chen Hu shouted that his friends were two idiots and that he should do it himself. He activated his superpowers and rushed forward. The boy shouted while casting the Shining Strike spell and approached Li Jian, holding a fist emitting a bright light in front of him. Chen Hu has been awakening his superpowers since childhood, so he can already use a Shining Strike, which is far superior in power to strikes of the same level. As he was about to attack Li Jian, he thought that fighting such a brainless person who had just awakened his power was as easy as crushing an ant. But our hero was just smirking right in his face as the guy's fist stopped centimeters from his face. Chen Hu was at a loss when his spell failed to work. He stood frozen with a trembling fist, and Li Jian stopped him with just one finger. In front of Li Jian's strength, Chen Hu felt like a small ant. He didn't understand how he was doing this, and why the opponent's aura suddenly became so strong. Chen Hu lost his balance under Li Jian's force, tripped, and began to fall backwards onto the asphalt. He shouted that it was simply impossible, as only 6th level abilities could stop his Shining Strike, and Li Jian had only just awakened his powers. Li Jian thought that the opponent's 5th level abilities were disappointing, but such creatures should know their place. After all, he had promised to protect the Liu family. Chen Hu, sitting on the ground, trembled with fear as Li Jian approached, asking what he wanted to do with him and trying to explain who he was. The protagonist set his wrist and told the bully to listen to him, and declared that from that day on he had to watch his words and actions. Afterwards, Chen Hu's piercing screams echoed throughout the entire university campus when our hero decided to teach him a lesson. The crowd of students were delighted that Chen Hu had finally been taught a lesson, and they were shocked that Li Jian had changed so much. The bully, beaten by the main character, lay on the ground and cried, no longer able to resist. Li Jian glanced sideways at his sister when GC ran up to him and said that the boy had indeed awakened his superpowers. The pink-haired girl grabbed his hand and said that she was very glad that the guy could now fight back. The protagonist blushed with embarrassment when GC unexpectedly kissed the guy on the cheek. The next action took place in a nightclub, where girls in revealing outfits danced on a pole for the guests. The bully, previously beaten by our hero, trembling with fear in front of his boss, confessed what he received from Li Jian today. A man with a long, thick beard took a drag on his cigar and told his subordinate what a pity it was. "Mr. Wanjing," Chen Xiao asked the boy, "what was the point of losers like them if Chen Hu couldn't make it?" As the boy begged the master to spare him, Chen Xiao activated his blue aura and grinned evilly. He put the cigar to the subordinate's forehead and pierced him with his magical power. The guy shook and opened his mouth wide in pain. Having gotten rid of the petty bully, Chen Xiao ordered his assistant to find out everything that had happened, since this was the first time his son had been humiliated. Ren Wukong, the ideologist of superpowers, bowed and asked the master to leave the young master's problem to him. Chen Xiao asked his assistant not to overexert himself, as he was allowing his son to personally experience the consequences of Wanjin's provocation. When Ji Si and Li Dian were walking through the city, the girl warned him that he might be in trouble because the Chen Hu family was quite powerful. But Li Jian was thinking about how he could reach the 7th level of qi refining in less than a month, in a university where there was much more spiritual energy. GC hit her brother and was indignant that he was not listening to her. And then Li Jian had to distract herself from her dreams of the 9th level of qi purification. The girl was shocked. She thought that this was the end, and his condition was getting worse when Li Jian called this place cool. As the boys walked past a shop window, the main character looked at his reflection in the glass and became noticeably wary. He immediately shielded his frightened girlfriend with his hand when suddenly shards of glass flew around. GC looked at our hero in confusion as he activated his power and extended his hand, illuminated by a bright blue aura. The protagonist forced the entire crowd that was around him to fly aside in order to clear the space around him. The street began to fill with smoke. Ordinary citizens panicked. They began to run in different directions and shout for help. The frightened Jitsi clung to her brother and stood still, while the protagonist carefully observed the situation around her. The girl noticed that Li Jian had a wound on her face from the glass, and the protagonist told her that everything was fine. The protagonist looked at his hand and thought that dispersing spiritual energy to protect others allowed this attack to break through the true Dao body. Li Jian became wary and shielded his sister with his back when a guy in black shoes and dark trousers appeared in front of him. It was Ren Wukong, the guy with his hands in his pockets, who said that it was quite interesting that Li, who had just awakened his abilities, was able to repel his attack. GC wanted the guy to leave and not waste his time on the manipulative Wukong, but Li Jian was not going to, because he had finally found a worthy opponent. Ren Wukong asked whether Li Jian was pretending to be like this, or whether he was truly a fool, and asked him to think carefully whether Li had touched anything that shouldn't have been touched. A distraught Wukong activated his aura, and shouted that he had no intention of holding back, even though his boss had asked him to be more careful. The girl was very scared for Li Jian when Wukong remotely lifted the guy into the air. A purple force surrounded our hero, but the main character didn't panic. He looked down at his opponent and thought that this technique was familiar to him. Bound by Ren Wukong's magical power, the boy was thrown straight into the wall with such force that the facade shattered into pieces. Wukong screamed, telling our hero to go to hell, and threw a whole bunch of huge rocks at the guy while Li Jin sat on the floor. Zizi shouted the boy's name when a deafening explosion and a bright blue flash appeared in the place where he was sitting. The pink-haired girl couldn't hold back her tears and screams. She screamed at the bastard Ren that he killed Li Jian. Wukong, smiling, told the girl not to scream, because even though the master didn't need her, he wouldn't mind feeling more blood on his hands. The man stopped and turned around when he noticed something suspicious. It turned out that our hero was completely fine. He broke through the pile of stones and rushed forward, holding a piece of rebar in his hand. Flying past the stones, the protagonist cast a red demonic glance at his opponent and said that he had interesting handwriting. Ren Wukong froze in shock. He did not understand how it was possible that the main character was alive after taking it. The man immediately surrounded himself with energy for protection and shouted, asking Li Jin what kind of superpower he had awakened within himself. But the main character didn't answer him. He quickly approached the enemy, keeping his eyes closed. A moment later, Li Jian opened his eyes and frowned angrily, his eyes turning into two balls of glowing yellow light. As our hero was in the air, about to attack Ren Wukong, the latter preemptively released two giant magical bone hands to grab the guy. Li Jian didn't panic. He knew that there were disciples in the Tiantong group who used these techniques, which were considered strong. The boy stared at Ren Wukong with red eyes and said that the man could not harm him using his old tricks. Ren Wukong collapsed to the ground as Li Jian destroyed his giant bone arms and moved down to deal with the man as well. Coughing up blood, the man screamed that it was impossible, not understanding how Li Jian had defeated his Shadowless. Ren Wukong did not give up. He took a menacing stance, activated his red flaming aura, and commanded Li Jian to attack him again. Using his superpowers, Ren Wukong lifted a pile of concrete blocks into the air to attack Li Jian again, and our hero prepared to defend himself. Holding the rebar in his hands, the protagonist decided to use the Lin Yu sword technique. 4 types. Swinging the iron rebar, Li Jian easily cut the concrete blocks into small pieces, leaving bright orange streaks in the air. Ren Wukong was speechless as he looked up to the sky and saw his opponent block his attack with ease. He froze in fear when he saw the image of Li Jian in a robe in front of him, who seemed to be on fire, holding a sword in front of him, not a piece of rebar. Li Jian, having transformed the rebar into a real magic sword, rushed straight through the enemy, leaving behind thick smoke. Ren Wukong was defeated. The man admitted that he had just been defeated by an idiot who had only recently awakened his superpowers. Turning around, Li Jian told the man that he had good skills, but he didn't know how to develop them, which was why he lost. The man with the red tie was exhausted, covered in bruises, lying flat on the ground and coughing, not answering Li Jian. The protagonist was confused when he tried to mechanically put the weapon behind his back, but remembered that he was not wearing his old suit. Smiling awkwardly, Li Jian thought that this world was not like the immortal world he had lived in before. Worried, GC ran up to the guy and asked how he was. He replied that such weaklings were not capable of injuring him, and the girl admitted that Li had scared her to death. Ren Wukong crawled on the ground, trying to get up, and shouted that it was not over yet. And if they insulted Wang Jin again, the master would make the boys' lives hell. The frightened girl asked Li Jian if they were going to provoke any influential people. She was at a loss when she heard a stranger's voice. Someone asked who this Wang Jin gang was. It turned out that Gu Tianju came with his sister and a crowd of guards, and he asked who dared to insult his Gu family. Ren Wukong, still unable to get up from the ground, screamed in fear when he heard the red-haired boy talk about the Gu family. The main character noticed a girl with blue hair who started running towards him. Smiling happily, she hugged Li Jian and called him her hero, saying that he had made her try so hard to find him. The girl kept up with our hero. She said how delicious he always smelled, and the perplexed Li Jian did not understand what these guys were doing here. An angry GC asked the guy who the girl was, and she introduced herself as Gu Tianren, Li Jian's friend. Frowning with intense jealousy, GC looked at the guy from under her brows and asked why she hadn't known about this sweet friend before. The protagonist told Gu Tianren to leave him alone and removed her hands, saying that he did not know them. The girl was offended by his gesture. Elder brother Gu told his younger sister to come to him and not to bother Mr. Li anymore. The red-haired boy made a gesture of respect towards Li Jian and admitted that he was naive and uneducated. Ren Wukong was shocked because he knew that the Gu family was very famous in all fields and influential in the economy, politics, science, and other fields of Kangxing City. The Wanjing family was not even a match for the Gu family, but Li Jian treated the Gu family members with such disdain that Ren Wukong was astonished. Lying on the ground, the man screamed that this simply couldn't be true, that the Gu family really respected Li Jian that much. The protagonist flashed a crazy look at the man and asked if he really wanted to fight again since he couldn't calm down. Ren Wukong began to frantically bang his head on the ground, screaming and begging Mr. Li to spare him. as he was simply following Chen Xiao's orders. Li Jin thought that he didn't expect that his personal dispute with Chen Hu would reach the point of using his family's power. Gu Tianju said that Chen Xiao was previously just a puppy raised by Uncle Li An, and after leaving the Gu family, he decided to make money by forming a gang. Having entrusted all of this to Gu, Li Jian finally warned Ren Wukong that he would have to answer for everything if he dared to pursue him in the future. Confused, Zizi asked Li Jian what was going on and whether the red-haired guy was really from the powerful Gu family. Gu Tianju gestured with his hands again and told the boy that he would like to invite Li Jian to the Gu household to express their gratitude. Li Jian replied that there was no need for that, because the Gu family was so powerful that he didn't have to do anything, and nothing would have happened to Gu Tianren anyway. The protagonist turned around and walked away, and Gu Tianju asked the gentleman to think about his proposal. Gu Tianxin caught up with our hero and asked him to go with them, otherwise her grandfather would scold him. Li Jian looked at the blue-haired girl and let out a questioning hum when he noticed something was wrong. The guy hugged the girl by the waist and listened to her breathing, noticing that it was very weak, and she opened her mouth in amazement. Blushing with embarrassment, Gu Tianxin asked the protagonist what he was going to do to her. Su Sai was furious when she saw Li Jian start to grope the girl, checking her health, and the red-haired guy thought that even a gentleman could not resist worldly temptations. The protagonist took off the necklace from Gu Tianxin's neck and saw in front of him an amulet called the Treasure of the Earth. Jisi decided that Li Dian had fallen ill again and had suddenly become very interested in some strange little stones. Gu explained that it was an amulet from her grandfather's ancient collection that nourished the soul and warded off evil spirits, and Li thought it wouldn't hurt to check out the collection. Therefore, the protagonist changed his mind and agreed to go to the Gu family mansion, because the heavenly treasures could be useful to him in cultivation. Soon, Li Dian, Jisi, and the Gu family members were already approaching the gate that led to the territory of the luxurious estate. When our hero entered inside, a table with many delicious dishes was already waiting for him, and Grandpa Gu was sitting at the table. Jisi was amazed when she saw the luxurious table. She wondered if she had really come into a noble family with special rules of etiquette. The head of the family said that his dear friend had gone to great lengths to make his home shine and asked Li Jian to sit down. The first thing our hero did was show his grandfather the amulet and ask him where he got this thing from. It was clear from the old man's face that he tensed up when he heard this question from the boy. The grandfather fell silent for a moment, but afterward, Gu admitted that he had a whole huge collection of these old and dilapidated things and asked if this amulet was really special since it attracted the guy's attention. Li Jian replied that since the old man had a huge collection, he should know what was so special about them. But Jitsi did not understand what they were talking about. Grandpa laughed and said he could see that Li knew something about antiques and asked if he would like to have his entire collection appraised. The old man turned to Tianren and Tianju, asking them to take care of Miss Ji for now, while he and his dear friend went to another hall. A frightened Jitsi asked Li Jian where he was going. Gu Tianju told her not to worry and assured her that her grandfather would not harm him. The old man led our hero. Li Jian thought that there might be too many magical treasures in this world for immortal cultivators. He was curious about where they all came from in this world, because these magical treasures were clearly not created by superpowers. The head of the family and our hero took the elevator down to the 4th floor. When the door opened, the old man called Li Jian to follow him. They found themselves in a dark room. In front of them was a large door with a secure lock, leading to the hall where the collection is kept. When the protagonist noticed the golden door handles, he immediately noticed an extraordinary aura. A faint smile appeared on Li Jian's face, and he became very curious about what was hidden behind this door. The head of the Gu family and our hero entered a spacious hall with many shelves on which the elderly man's collection was stored. Suddenly, the old man started coughing into his handkerchief. This alarmed the main character. He wanted to ask what was wrong with him. Grandpa Gu told his dear friend Li not to worry, explaining that coughing was an old habit. But the blood on the napkin told a different story. Soon they arrived at the place. Li Jian saw in front of him several wooden tables with books and boxes. The old man declared that his entire collection was kept there and allowed the curious boy to freely examine it closer. As Li looked at the treasures, he wondered why there was no trace of immortal cultivators left in this world if there were so many magical treasures. Li admitted that his grandfather's collection was large, but the quality left much to be desired. Only a few treasures could interest a practitioner at the Qi Foundation stage. The old man thought that Li Jian was exactly the one he needed because he had spent so much effort on collecting the collection. But it did not impress the guy at all. As he manipulated his wheelchair, the grandfather admitted that he felt quite ashamed of not being able to please his children. Mr. Gu stated that he had another thing that he unfortunately didn't know how to use, and asked Li for help in figuring it out. The protagonist glanced at the gold ring with a red stone, which stood like a particularly valuable exhibit on a velvet pillow under a glass dome. The guy grinned. He concluded that the aura he initially felt here came from this ring. The old man said that anyone who touched this cursed ring would go mad, and in the worst case, would simply burn alive from the black flames erupting from within. The protagonist turned around and looked at Mr. Gu, wondering if his grandfather was trying to test him. Undeterred by his grandfather's words, Li Jian tried to explain to him that this ring was not cursed at all. Our hero declared that this was not a curse, but Wuju, the name of this rare magical treasure. When Li Jian said this word, the ring activated and began to emit a red aura. It instantly flew out, breaking through the glass. The grandfather was stunned. He wondered if the main character really knew the true name of this decoration. The protagonist extended his hand, and in an instant, the Wuju ring was on his middle finger, flashing with a red light. The magical power emitted by this ring only increased. A vortex of red energy filled everything within a radius of several meters. The head of the Gu family shouted, trying to stop his dear friend. The protective magic sphere protected him from the effects of the cursed ring. Grandpa froze in shock when he looked at Li Jian and saw something that really surprised him. The red magical flame did not touch our hero at all, as if Li Jian had become the rightful owner and master of the power of this ring. The old man then decided for sure that Li Jian was the very person he had been waiting to meet his whole life. The protagonist looked at the ring and knew that it was not a treasure at all, but Wuju would greatly help him achieve his own goals. Li Jian closed his eyes and mentally commanded the Wuju ring to send him to another space. A moment later, the young man found himself in a spiritual space inside the ring. He was standing on hot magma, and everything around was filled with acrid smoke. The guy glanced back because he felt that he was not the only living being inside this space. Li Jian was right. He saw behind him the three-headed hellhound, a fantastic dog with 3 heads, baring its teeth and hissing at him. He knew that in his past life, the master had tried his best to tame the three-headed dog from hell, and he did not expect to meet him after being reborn in another world. The three-headed hellhound barked at our hero, opening 3 mouths, from which erupted a huge destructive magical flame. Li Jian remained calm and protected himself with a magic sphere, assuming that this hellish creature was angry at him. This angered our hero. He screamed, "How can his consciousness be compared with the consciousness of a wild dog that has lost its body?" And then the three-headed dog was about to attack. The protagonist flashed his red demonic eyes, mad with anger, and shouted, ordering the hellhound to sit. Surprisingly, the three-headed hellhound changed its mind about attacking our hero and landed on the ground at a distance, but still grinned at the guy. The dogs were dissatisfied, but did not take action to attack Li Jian, who then activated his powerful red aura. Above our hero's head appeared the image of a giant demon head with a mad smile, in whose forehead was a crystal emitting red rays. Li Jian, engulfed in red magical flames, looked down at the dog and once again ordered it to sit and obey him. Then a clear fear appeared on the faces of the three-headed hellhound. They no longer grinned so boldly at our hero. A moment later, the three-headed dog from hell turned into a harmless dog. He whined in fear and decreased in size many times over. Li Jian stroked the dog and told him to remember that from now on he was his master, and if the dog allowed himself to show disobedience, he would be punished. The dog looked at his new owner with fear when he said, his demonic eyes flashing, that the dog's soul would be crushed if he disobeyed. Soon Li Jian returned back. He knew that the hellhound only had a soul left, but in the Wuju ring, he could create a physical body for himself. He knew that the dog would be useful to him in the future, because if Li Jian became stronger, the dog would be even more powerful. Grandpa Gu cried out in delight that his dear friend Li was indeed the person he had been looking for, and his entire family was now very happy. But a moment later, the old man coughed so hard that he turned pale. His glasses flew off his face, and blood poured from his mouth. The main character looked warily at his grandfather, who suddenly became very ill. The old man's smart wheelchair loudly announced that Gu's vital signs were unstable and that medical attention was urgently needed. Li Jian did not lose his composure. He was ready to provide medical assistance to the old man who was no longer showing signs of life. The boy suddenly pressed his fingers against the old man's pale hand to check Grandpa Gu's pulse. Using his superpowers, Li was able to scan the old man's entire body and realized that it was the result of Hengsen Ren's poison. He wondered who dared to poison the head of such a powerful family as Gu. The protagonist knew that none of this concerned him, but he was ready to save his grandfather's life in gratitude for acquiring the Wuju ring. Just when Li Jian was about to heal his grandfather by charging his hand with healing power, the old man's worried children came running to help. They decided that our hero wanted to harm their father, so they shouted at the bastard to get away from his grandfather. The doctor immediately began checking old man Gu's heartbeat, and the angry son asked Li Jian what he had done to his father. The protagonist tried to explain that he was currently trying to save the life of the head of the Gu family, but the man didn't believe him. He shouted, asking if he was really that stupid, and it was obvious that Li wanted to harm the old man. Li Jian didn't like these words. His ring began to emit an ominous aura. He thought what an ignorant idiot stood in front of him. Gu Tiansheng and Tianju came running and shouted, asking what happened to Grandpa and why the man was arguing with Mr. Li. The old man's son shouted that he shouldn't call the brat sir, and that his grandfather was really so stupid that he believed such a charlatan. Tianjiu tried to explain everything to his uncle, but he shouted that he believed what he saw, and right now his father's health was more important, so he would deal with the red-haired guy later. The protagonist stood and grinned, wondering how this ignorant man was going to cure this disease. Uncle Gu turned to Dr. Andrew for help, and the doctor, wearing a white coat, charged his hand with healing energy and said that he would do everything in his power. The blonde doctor decided to use hydrotherapy for treatment, using his healing superpower. He directed a stream of magical water at the grandfather, and our hero stood and thought that it was already useless, because the poison had penetrated the old man's heart. But the doctor still managed to get Grandpa to regain consciousness, and Mr. Gu began coughing up blood again. Uncle Gu and his grandchildren cried out in fear when they saw that their old man had come to his senses but was still feeling unwell. Dr. Andrew apologized that his abilities were too weak to help the old man, so it was worth preparing for his funeral. Tianxian refused to believe it. She screamed that everything would be fine with her grandfather, but Uncle Gu assured the doctor that it was not his fault and everything was fine. The man shouted, pointing his finger at our hero, that it was all the brat's fault, and Li must have done something to Grandpa while they were gone. The granddaughter asked him to stop and wanted Li Jian to try to do something because she didn't want her grandfather to die. Uncle Gu shouted that he was against it. He was outraged that Tianxian wanted this guy who had harmed the old man to touch him again. Li Jian crossed his arms and calmly said that if they continued to waste time, there would be nothing to help old man Gu. Uncle Gu shouted, accusing Li of being presumptuous and declaring that he had no say in this house and that the chief healer of the city was Mr. Andrew. Li Jian said that the man had already prevented the boy from helping his father several times, which meant he really doubted his skills. The guy grinned and asked if the man really had any ulterior motives and was now deliberately stalling for time. The man with the sparse mustache fell silent, clenching his teeth in anger, and a bead of sweat ran down his face from the tension. Mr. Gu Jr. shouted, "Did Li still dare to argue with him?" and ordered the bodyguards to arrest the murderer. The protagonist thought he was dealing with a bunch of idiots and looked at his Wuju ring to activate it. The guy made a gesture with his hand and ordered the three-headed hellhound to come out of the ring space and play with the ill-wishers. An angry three-headed hellhound appeared behind our hero, now back to its former size and looking terrifying. The guards were seriously scared. It was the first time they had seen a summoned creature of such proportions, and the sight was terrifying to them. Gu Tianju was astonished. Even he couldn't reach such a level of beast summoning, and he thought that Mr. Li was truly unrivaled. Frightened, Uncle Gu collapsed to the ground and began to back away, asking our hero who he was. In response, Li Jian looked at the man with a mad demonic gaze and said that he had better be more polite. Otherwise, he would not be able to cope with the consequences. After Li subdued the bastard, he looked at the old man and realized that he could remove the toxins from his body, even though the grandfather had a problem with blood and qi deficiency. The protagonist made a gesture with his hands, after which everything around was illuminated by a bright magical light, and cast the freeze spell. With his superpower, the boy held 9 needles in the air between his palms, which were filled with healing power. Grandfather Gu's grandchildren looked at Li's work with admiration, and his uncle laughed, watching with interest what this guy could do. The protagonist, concentrating, waved his hand, sending all those sharp needles straight into the acupuncture points on the old man's body. While the grandfather sat in the chair with his eyes closed, the charged needles had already begun to work, hitting points on his face and chest. Old man Gu sweated profusely during the procedure, and Li Jian's miraculous needles began to draw out the evil toxins from Grandpa's body. Dr. Andrew was stunned when he saw the guy using Chinese acupuncture, and Tianxian seemed to have no idea what it was. The doctor told the girl that acupuncture is the best medical technique in the country, but these days doctors use superpowers much more often. When the doctor admitted that he had only heard of acupuncture, Li Jian turned around and said that there was a lot of information about this practice. The needles in the old man's body continued to act and suck out all the poison that had accumulated in Mr. Gu's body from the acupuncture points. Li Jian placed his palm on his grandfather's heart and said that the last remnants of poison in the heart vessels needed to be expelled by using a surge of energy. The boy became confused when the vortex of his healing energy, hovering around him and his grandfather, became much stronger and more chaotic. A moment later, the needles flew out of the grandfather's body, and he regained consciousness and began coughing again, spitting out dark blood. Tianxian and Tianju were afraid for their grandfather when they saw that he had started coughing loudly again. They ran up to the old man. The red-haired guy assumed that Mr. Li had failed. Uncle Gu smiled smugly and reminded everyone that he had said that Li Jian would not be able to cure Grandpa. But the man turned out to be wrong. The head of the family finally opened his eyes, and the granddaughter noticed that her grandfather had woken up. The grandchildren hugged their grandfather and cried, claiming that he had scared them to death, but he laughed and reassured them, saying that everything was fine. The head of the family's son was stunned. He couldn't believe that our hero had actually managed to cure the old man. Grandpa Gu looked at his palms and admitted that this was the first time he felt this good since he got sick. He thanked his dear friend for healing him. Li replied that he saved him only because he was there now. But in the future, the old man would have to pray if someone poisoned him again. Tianchen and Tianju were both shocked when they heard that it turned out that their grandfather was a victim of poisoning and not a mysterious illness. Uncle Gu intervened and said that no one could poison the old man under the protection of the Gu family, and his father's health had deteriorated due to his obsession with supernormal abilities. The man backed away when our hero turned around and accused him of continuing to slander, saying that it was Li who had offended Mr. Gu. Then the grandchildren thought. Uncle Tianchen always seemed a little strange, and Tianju remembered that the old man's health deteriorated when he started taking Uncle Damien's medicine. When the grandfather had listened to his grandchildren's reasoning, he put his hand on the control panel on his chair to move closer. Uncle Damien attacked his nephew and accused him of believing the first person he met instead of his uncle, and he asked him to calm down. The head of the family looked at his son with anger in his eyes, suspecting that he really wanted to harm him. Grandfather showed Li Jian a bottle of the medicine he had been taking all along and asked if his son could try it to prove his innocence. Li took a closer look at the medicine, and Damien screamed, asking if his father doubted his own son, accusing Li of deliberately setting him up. The man was taken aback when Li Jian handed him a jar of purple liquid and offered to drink it since it was no longer poison. Trying to get out of it, Damien asked his angry father how he could be so careless with his medications. Andrew admitted that he remembered Mr. Gu telling him that the medicine was made from natural herbs and was completely safe for ordinary people. Realizing he had been found out, Damien screamed at the doctor to shut up and pulled out his gun, firing a bullet straight into the blonde man. Noticing this, the protagonist immediately rushed forward at supernatural speed in order to save the innocent from death. Li Jin easily stopped the bullet with 2 fingers in front of the doctor's face and declared that this could be considered an admission that the medicine was poisoned. The head of the family could no longer contain his anger at his son. He demanded that Damien explain what all this meant. Damien, holding the gun to Andrew's face, shouted that it was the doctor who poisoned the medicine and framed the man, and the doctor justified himself by saying that he would not have dared to do such a thing. With his red eyes flashing, the protagonist concluded that Damien would not give up until he saw the Yellow River. Li Jian lunged forward and with a deft movement of his hand, broke the man's pistol into 2 pieces using only his index finger. Damien closed his eyes and covered himself with his hands. As a result of Li Jian's attack, the left sleeve of the man's jacket was torn to shreds. Gu Tianju was surprised when he saw a red birthmark on his uncle's hand, and his granddaughter also became curious about what it was. Dr. Andrew explained that it didn't look like a birthmark, but more like a scar from poison eating away at the skin. Li listened to the doctor, who ruled that Damien was poisoning Gu Lao's medicine with crushed red root, which over time penetrated the man's skin and took several years of his life. The man was shocked when he heard that he had also been poisoned. He panicked and started screaming that he didn't want to die. Damien fell to his knees in front of Li Jian and shouted that there were only a couple of people in China who could be cured of the red root poison, and began to beg for help. Tian Shen was shocked that it was actually her uncle who gave her grandfather the poison, and Mr. Gu sat silently, his head bowed down, darkened by grief. The protagonist casually kicked the villain and told him to get lost, not wanting to cure the man of the red root poison. Then Damien screamed at his father, admitting that he was wrong and that because of his obsession he had made a huge mistake. Old Man Gu placed his hand on his son's head and said that Damien had no place in the Gu family after he wanted to kill his father and slandered others. The grandfather looked at his son with a disdainful look and said that it would be better for the man to go to the inspection and refresh his memory. The man became terrified when he heard about the inspection. He knew about this place where they mocked the guilty. He shouted to his father that the inspector's department was an inhuman place, but the guards had already grabbed Damien by the arms to drag him away. Resisting, Damien tried to shout to his dad, but the old man did not answer him, and the guards continued to lead him out of the hall. Gu Tianju asked his sister not to be sad, because it was fortunate that Li Jian was here today. Otherwise, their grandfather would not have been saved. Old Man Gu apologized to his dear friend and said that he was feeling great now and had something else he wanted to discuss with Li. The grandfather's face became serious, and he asked the boy if he knew where the belief about the Wuju ring came from. Old Man Gu and our hero decided to chat about the belief in the Wuju ring in the master's spacious private office. Li Jian sat across from the old man at his desk, and the old man handed over some photographs and asked his dear friend to look at them. The main character took the photographs in his hand and began to carefully examine the old pictures. He saw an ancient building with bas-reliefs in the photo, and the guy immediately guessed that these were cultivator relics. Mr. Gu said that when he was young, he discovered a tomb and sent people to explore it, and most of the old treasures were found there. Li Jian knew that ruins of this scale could be from the era of spiritual cultivation, and most likely there was something else valuable hidden underground that would help him in cultivation. When Li asked where the ruins were now, Gu explained that during the investigation, his subordinates had made a foolish mistake and triggered a mechanism that self-destructed the ruins. The tomb had collapsed into a pile of huge stones, so Li Jian would not be able to see them in person according to his grandfather. Old Man Gu said that he would try to find the rest of the relics for the boy if he needed them so much. Our hero asked if it was funny that a researcher of superpowers wanted to help him with his practice, and the grandfather replied that it was a long and winding story. When Gu was young, he was very obsessed with power and money and thought that with supernatural powers, he could get everything at once. But after carefully researching superpowers, Lao Chen realized that superpowers had huge drawbacks. Enormous power destroyed the human mind, and subjects turned into real monsters, mindlessly destroying everything in their path. Then, in the laboratory, the frightened scientist urgently called a doctor, who injected the green medicine into the test subject to calm him down. But the flask containing the green substance broke, after which something irreparable happened in the laboratory. The subjects went berserk again and brutally killed everyone, but Gu had no idea that he had long since sunk into the depths of the abyss, like a tormented soul trapped in darkness. As Grandpa Gu recounted these terrifying events from his youth, his hand began to visibly shake. He told Li Jian that the power of human superpowers far exceeded that of ordinary people, and he was afraid that naive people would repeat his mistakes. From the old man's story, Li Jian learned that the creation of superpowers is the creation of immortals who can become possessed by evil spirits. Gu said that he dared not ask anything in return from his dear friend, but if Li could teach his grandfather the art of innocence and brilliance, he would entrust the fate of the family only to Jian. The old man became nervous when the protagonist silently placed the old photos back on the table before giving him an answer. The protagonist stood up, turned around, and left, saying that only those who had discovered ancient religions could discuss the terms. Meanwhile, Chen Xiao sat alone in the middle of his nightclub. Everything around him was destroyed. Broken vases and furniture lay on the floor. Red wine was spilled everywhere. Previously beaten but now joyful, Chen Hu walked into the club and asked his father if the man had taught Li Jian a lesson to avenge his son. The guy fell silent when he saw the devastation around him. He wondered what gang his old bastard father had gotten involved with this time. He was shocked when he saw his beaten father. The boy could not believe his eyes. He screamed, asking who did this to him. Chen Xiao stood up and knocked his son down, shouting that he was a useless piece of shit who only ever caused him trouble. Putting his palm to his again beaten face, the boy asked his father why he hit him. A man with a thick red beard shouted, demanding that his useless son get out of his sight. The reason for the destruction in the club was that Gu Tianju had visited it earlier, and his people had smashed everything inside because the Wanjis dared to insult Mr. Li. Chen Xiao yelled at his son that he was a cocky bastard for choosing Li Jian out of all people to fight. Ren Wukong tried to reassure his master, as the main priority now was to entertain their esteemed guests from the east. Chen Xiao told his subordinate to hurry up and promised that Wukong would regret being born if he screwed up this time too. The next day, our hero went to Yajun University, where he was studying, and the weather was sunny outside. The guy was walking down the corridor with GC, and the girl asked what the guy had talked about with Mr. Gu last night. Yesterday, the girl noticed that when her grandfather left, his face was blank. But when he went out to see the boy off, he was all beaming with joy. Without going into details, the protagonist told Jitsi that they had discussed some deals with Mr. Gu. The pink-haired girl immediately imagined the picture, thinking that the deal was about Li Jian marrying Grandpa Gu's granddaughter. Zitzi shuddered and felt uneasy, hoping that Li Jian was not going to marry Gu Tianxian. Trying to get these thoughts out of her head, the girl closed her eyes and screamed that this couldn't be, and Li Jian asked her why not. The young man was perplexed when the girl, flushed with anger, declared that Li Jian had no right to abandon her and her mother. The protagonist turned his head sharply to the other side and became alert when he heard someone shout his name. It was Chen Hu, who was walking menacingly down the corridor. The guys around thought that they would finally witness a new show, and Chen Hu came to settle scores with Li Jian. Chen Hu and his friend, gritting their teeth in anger, pushed off the ground and rushed forward together, approaching our hero. But they didn't attack Li Jian, but fell to their knees in front of him and shouted that they were wrong, and now at Yangjun University, Mr. Jian would have the final say. The students were stunned that Brother Hu was talking to this fool like that. Someone suggested that Li Jian had supporters, and they decided not to provoke our hero either. The main character told the guy to get lost and not come near him and GC anymore. And then he and the girl turned around and left. Zitzi looked down in fear when she felt the phone vibrating in her skirt pocket. The pink-haired girl immediately took out her phone and looked at the screen to read the notification. A look of horror appeared on Jitzi's face as she read the message, but she remained silent and didn't say a word. Noticing the girl's strange expression, Li Jian asked what was wrong, and Jitsi became even more nervous. Hiding the phone with Dunfang Yuanshu's message, she assured the guy that nothing had happened and asked him to hurry up, as classes would start soon. A few days later, on a sunny Saturday, our hero was practicing at the stadium belonging to Yajun University. The students noticed that Li Jian was sitting in a strange position. Someone said that they knew that this was the guy's special state, and the blonde asked his friends to gossip more quietly. The protagonist sat in a meditative pose on a concrete bench, radiating streams of energy. The concrete block beneath him began to crack. These bright blue lightning bolts began to approach the three students who were standing below and discussing our hero. The three boys grimaced as they felt the powerful force of Qi Lijian overtake them. The blonde complained about the sharp cold, one of the guys couldn't move his legs, and they began to accuse him of being to blame for Li Jian hearing an insult directed at him and taking revenge on them. Opening his eyes slightly, Li Jian noticed that there were three students standing below him, who he had touched with his energy. Our hero thought that they were just a bunch of unremarkable people who couldn't even stand the aura that he involuntarily exuded. The boy made a gesture with his hand, and with the power of thought forced his aura to leave the students who were suffering below. The three students suddenly began to fall to the ground as Li Jian's aura released them. The guys were horrified. They did not understand what phenomenon they had just encountered. The blonde suggested that Li Jian was the firstborn of chaos. The frightened students cautiously turned their gazes back to look at Li Jian, who was sitting behind them. At this time, the main character, maintaining peace, silently looked at the guys, not taking his cold gaze away. The students rushed forward, simultaneously apologizing to our hero and admitting their mistake. Li Jian was now at the 7th level of Qi refining. This was his limit now, and he regretted that he didn't know when Grandpa Gu would find a place full of spiritual energy. The boy held the phone to his ear and greeted his adoptive mother when she called him. He was scared when the woman screamed into the phone that Ji Chengtian had just come home and dragged his daughter Jixi away somewhere. Meanwhile, Jixi's father, who had kidnapped his own daughter the day before, brought her to a luxurious high-rise building. The pink-haired girl wasn't happy to spend time with her dad, but he encouraged her to follow him, telling her how good she was. Jixi agreed to help her father, but on the condition that after that they would stop being father and daughter. When the old man tried to hug her, she broke free and screamed, telling him to let her go, and Ji Chengtian promised that he would not interfere in their lives anymore. A grin appeared on the man's face. He was in anticipation when they finally arrived at the door leading to the right room. The man opened the door, and Jixi saw a spacious hall in front of her, in the middle of which stood a guy in a burgundy jacket. The young man, leaning his face on his palm, told Jixi that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The action continued to unfold at the Drunken Dragon Hotel, where the girl was taken by her father to force her to meet the guy. When Li Jian, having found out his friend's location from his mother, arrived at the hotel, the staff informed him that the establishment was temporarily closed. But the protagonist was not ready to give up so easily. He looked sternly at the employee and asked where Jixi was now. The hotel staff knew that they couldn't let this guy disturb the Eastern Lord who had invited Jixi to his luxurious banquet. The bearded maitre d' brazenly lied to our hero that he had no idea who they were talking about and strongly recommended that he leave the hotel grounds. The protagonist frowned and ordered his friend to step aside, but the maitre d' held out his hand in front of the guy to keep him out. The hotel staff became angry, and after their leader shouted that they would now talk to Legion differently, they rushed forward. A crowd of guys in red jackets surrounded our hero, swinging their hands and bats at him, but Li Jian remained calm. They were stunned when they saw that Li Jian had defensive superpowers and was protected by a dome. The protagonist flashed his red eyes, looking away before dealing with the offenders. He released his destructive aura, and bright streaks of blue light struck the opponents, sending the guys flying in different directions. The maitre d' fell to the ground and shouted that their hotel was booked by an Oriental family today, and Li Jian would not get away with it if he entered. The protagonist shouted, asking the bearded man once again where Jixi was now. Chen Xiao and Ren Wukong came out. The red-haired man asked the hotel employee why he was making such a noise here and warned that their guest would have no trouble kicking him out of the country. The maitre d' pointed his finger at Li Jian and shouted that the problems were caused by this man. Chen Xiao approached the guy and asked where this boy came from who dared to make a mess on his territory, and ordered Li to be thrown into the pool. Ren Wukong approached the boss and whispered in his ear that it was not just a simple guy standing in front of him, but Li Jian himself. When Chen Xiao realized this, his mouth opened wide in shock and he was speechless, and the cigar fell out of his hand and fell to the ground. The man immediately began apologizing profusely to Li Jian and asked what brought him to his hotel, and the guy demanded to know where Jixi was now. Chen Xiao himself had no idea, but Ren Wukong's assistant explained to him that the Eastern Lord had invited this girl and that they were now together. The red-haired bearded man thought about what to do in this situation, and Chen Xiao was sweating from the tension. The man ordered the hotel staff to immediately take his friend Li to Jixi, who was currently relaxing with friends in a luxury room. Ren Wukong warned his boss that if he let Li Jian into the hotel now, the Eastern Lord would not forgive them so easily. Chen Xiao shouted, asking what else he could do because if they didn't let the boy in, they would have problems with the Gu family. The man ordered his assistant to go to the Gu family and tell them everything to gain their favor. Ren Wukong obeyed. Meanwhile, Jixi's father sat on the white sofa in the hotel room, quietly drinking coffee alone. Taking a sip of the hot drink, he thought that he had not expected everything to be so simple, and was sure that now a bright streak would come for his family. Smiling maliciously, he mentally turned to his daughter and asked her to understand him, because all people chase fame and money. The man understood that he had to sacrifice his daughter to reach an agreement with the Dongfang family, and he was not averse to doing so. Mr. G looked to the side when he noticed an unfamiliar guy in black pants standing next to him. The man began drinking coffee again, declaring that all people were a herd that could not do anything worthwhile. Seeing that the guy wasn't leaving, Mr. G got up from the sofa, called him an idiot, and told him to get out of there. He wanted to shout something to our hero, but he didn't have time, because Li Jian grabbed him by the throat with his hand, and he grunted. Li Jian lifted the man off the ground with one hand and began to strangle him, calling him a man who betrayed his own daughter. The man demanded that the boy let him go, but Li Jian was adamant. He declared that Mr. G would die by his hand. Frowning angrily, the boy easily threw the old man straight into the wall, wanting him to disappear, and he began to cough loudly. The frightened man thought that it was a demon in front of him, not Li Jian. The guy didn't look like his former self at all. Meanwhile, Jitsi was sitting at a table opposite a guy in a red jacket, who told the girl that she was as irresistible as before. The boy extended his hand and said that Jitsi's eyes sparkled like precious stones, and he lost his head as soon as he saw them. The pink-haired girl tensed as the boy reached out his hand and was about to touch her face with his finger. Zizi was against it. She threw the guy's hand away and told him not to touch it. The young man asked her not to frown, because he was just joking. The girl got up and left, saying that she was leaving because dinner was already over, and Ji Chentian had simply invited her to eat with the guy. After taking a sip of red wine, the guy allowed Jitsi to leave, saying that he would not stop her. The young man asked the girl if she had thought about what her father would do to her mother if she left now. Zizi blushed with anger but was forced to stop. The guy asked the girl to sit down and stay with him a little longer. Pouring more wine, the guy apologized to the cutie, saying that he knew he hadn't made the best impression on her, but he also had a hard time suppressing his emotions. Reluctantly, Jitsi forced herself to sit back down, and the young man admitted that he had actually come to dot the I's and cross the T's. Flashing his white teeth, he offered the girl some more wine to discuss everything, and reminded her that she could trust him. Suspecting something, Jitsi took a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't understand why the guy had become so kind, but she knew that she shouldn't upset him. Otherwise, her father would offend her mother. The guy knew that he had mixed an intoxicating solution he had bought on the black market into his wine, and that whoever drank it would fall madly in love with the person sitting across from him. Suddenly, the door that led to the hotel restaurant hall reserved for two shattered into many pieces. The guy in the red jacket was perplexed, and Jitsi turned around sharply when she heard the noise. The young man clenched his teeth in anger. He did not understand who this man was who dared to interfere with them now. The main character appeared at the threshold, confidently walking silently into the hall, passing the wooden splinters. Li Jian, his face filled with anger, looked at the guy sitting at the table and declared that he had come to pick up Jitsi. The pink-haired girl immediately ran up to our hero. She was clearly glad to see Li Jian here. The protagonist continued to glare at the guy, who immediately realized that the idiot he had heard about earlier was standing in front of him. The boy from the Eastern family stood up and immediately charged his hand with aura. He asked if Li Jian was planning to mess things up for him. The young man's hand began to emit a bright blue light, and small, sharp magical crystals began to fly around it. He swung his fist and screamed, wishing our hero a quick death, and launched a stream of sharp crystals straight at Li Jian. Zitai was scared when she saw this. Li Jian asked her not to be afraid. He was ready to repel the attack of the guy in the maroon jacket. Bright tongues of flame appeared behind our hero, and he declared to his opponent that he had lost all control. Li Jian attacked the guy with a wave of fiery destructive aura, which immediately knocked the Eastern family member off his feet. The protagonist threw the villain away from himself with such force that he began to groan loudly and cough up blood. A powerful blast wave threw the young man to the far end of the room. He landed, hitting his back on the table. He looked at our hero with fear, sitting on the floor, and Li Jian came closer, and the guy did not understand where he got such strength from. The protagonist showed the boy a palm that was emitting a bright yellow light and declared that he must teach a lesson to the one who insulted his family. After these words, a powerful explosion was heard in the restaurant hall of the Drunken Dragon Hotel, which was caused by Li Jian's magical power. When the smoke cleared, a large metal shield was revealed, held by a stranger with strong, muscular arms. It turned out that it was Ji Laikun, a level 9 bodyguard of the Dongfang family, who protected his young master with a shield made of an ultra-resistant metal alloy. Laikun tried to explain to the master that Li Jian's strength should not be underestimated, but he did not calm down and shouted that he would kill this freak. The bodyguard fell silent and glanced sideways, thinking about something after his master refused to leave the room. He decided to accept the challenge and agreed with the young master. Laikun was ready to deal with Li Jian here and now. The main character immediately realized what kind of shield it was and told the guys that today he would show them some tricks. Laikun accused Li Jian of being strong but overconfident, and declared that no one dared to harm the young master. The tall, muscular bodyguard declared that he would rip out our hero's heart today, after which he pulled out a large machine gun. The shooting started, Lai Kun fired a burst of machine gun fire at our hero, and the vases and furniture in the restaurant shattered into pieces. Li Jian deftly dodged all the bullets. He thought that the guard had an interesting ability to collect true energy in the body and then reproduce it. The protagonist still believed that this was just a mediocre imitation of real cultivation, and quietly approached Lai Kun to attack. The young gentleman's bodyguard cried out in pain as our hero approached unnoticed and punched him in the torso. Then Lai Kun, clenching his teeth in anger, decided to use a melee weapon, his fist turning into a large, sharp knife. The big guy tried to attack Li Jian, but he easily dodged to the side, closing his eyes, so he was not hurt. Our hero frowned and grabbed the muscular bodyguard's arm, then counterattacked. He performed the move and threw the big guy over his back so that he fell to the floor and screamed in pain, spitting out blood. As Lai Kun lay defeated on the floor, he opened his mouth, and Li Jian noticed a glowing red sphere in his mouth. It turned out to be a cannon that was built into his mouth, and Lai Kun fired it straight into the protagonist's face. Lai Kun was frightened when he saw that this was also useless, because our hero intercepted all the bullets with his hand and said that the guard was acting too slowly. The bodyguard was shocked that Li Jian stopped even his advanced attack. He didn't understand where the guy got such speed from. The protagonist counterattacked, swinging his leg, after which a powerful explosion was heard in the restaurant hall again. The bodyguard was not injured because he was wearing a protective suit. In the concrete rubble, he could not believe that people with such speed and strength as Li Jian existed. Lai Kun was thrown back as our hero landed back on the floor moments later, causing a shockwave. The big guy decided to use another powerful gun against Li Jian, wondering if the guy really possessed an extremely rare combination of superpowers. He turned pale with fear when he noticed that Li Jian was already standing behind him at this moment. Although he had been in front of him a moment ago, the protagonist kicked the muscular guy with one leg, sending him flying back with a whistle. Afterwards, Li Jian activated the red dragon magic seal to use another move against the bodyguard. Chen Xiao, who was standing outside at the time, ducked as a huge stream of flames erupted from the top floor of his hotel. The red-haired man turned around and wondered what was going on in his hotel, because they didn't want any trouble. The Daifeng family bodyguard, injured after the fight with Li Jian, angrily punched the floor, smashing it into concrete shards. Having no strength to fight any longer, the man asked our hero where he got such strong abilities. Li Jian, who was standing opposite the guard, did not answer his question, but suggested that Lai Kun think about it himself. The protagonist stated that the gap between them was gigantic, and he did not value his life, while Lai Kun was a creature with a human face, but the soul of a beast. With a syringe at the ready, Lai Kun declared that his loyalty was unwavering, and as soon as he entered the Dongfang family, he began to obey them unquestioningly, and this was his principle of being a person. The man shouted that no matter what happened, he would complete the task, and injected himself with an energy booster of the NB type, which gives strength for a while, but affects life expectancy. Lai Kun started screaming loudly like a beast when the energy booster took effect. His veins bulged. He started to grow in size. His eyes turned red. Li Jian became wary. He saw that there was an energy bubbling inside the man, similar to spiritual power, but it was slightly different from it. When the substance took effect, the bodyguard's eyes turned red and began to glow, and he screamed before attacking our hero. The man's hands turned into two large machine guns, and he fired numerous bullets at the main character. The restaurant hall was filled with streaks of fire. Li Jian put his palm in front of him to protect himself from the fire and bullets with a magical dome. A crack appeared on the magic dome. And then the protagonist thought that this enemy attack was clearly stronger than the previous one. The guy smirked and said it was time to end this, snapping his fingers to activate his Wuju ring. An enraged three-headed hellhound rushed out from the space of the Wuju ring and immediately attacked Lai Kun. Lai Kun came to his senses when he saw the giant monster. He realized that Li Jian's power was the superpower to summon such beasts. The bodyguard of the Daifeng family did not give up. He released several grenades from his palm, causing an explosion that damaged the hellhound. 3 guns appeared from the man's body, which were already ready to fire at the enemies. He screamed, wishing them to die. The dogs became angry and, growling, opened their mouths and released a powerful wave of their demonic power at Lai Kun. Lai Kun's clothes were in tatters and acrid smoke filled the area, but the bodyguard stood firm and shouted that he would not give up. The protagonist appeared behind the man and declared that the outcome was obvious to him. He was ready to finish off Lai Kun. Li Jian cast the spell Jiaoxu Sword, First Style, and the magic blade dealt fatal damage to the bodyguard. Created by Bai Shu, now Li Jian, the Jiaoxu Sword has 6 styles: accumulation, direction, feeling, thought, fusion, and awareness. And in the cultivation world, it is one of the most powerful. At first, Li Jian used the cluster style. The magic sword pierces the enemy, namely his heart. After this move, Lai Kun collapsed to the ground, and the protagonist turned his back to the defeated enemy. The boy understood that in a world ruled by superpowers, his interest in cultivating immortality would never dry up. When it was all over, Zizi ran up to our hero. hugged him tightly and admitted that she was scared to death. The protagonist told his friend that everything was fine and the three-headed hellhound would not harm the girl. The girl asked if Li Jian had summoned this dog and wondered where he got the ability to summon animals in the first place. As they left, Jitsi couldn't take her eyes off the cute little dog, and Li Jian explained to her that it was his subordinate. The young master tried to get to his feet with the help of his father. He was amazed that the degenerate had defeated a level 9th bodyguard. He was filled with rage because in his entire life, no one had dared to openly attack him in the presence of a member of the Dongfang family. It was not so easy for Ziqi and Li Jian to leave the hotel, because they were soon surrounded by a whole crowd of armed guards. The guy in the maroon jacket grinned and asked our hero if he thought he could leave this hotel alive. Suddenly, everyone heard Grandpa Du's voice. The man appeared and said that they needed to take care of the family. The young master was clearly scared when he had not yet seen Grandpa Du, but had already heard a familiar voice. Surrounded by bodyguards, Mr. Du asked the man in the maroon jacket if he valued the Du family. The guy replied that he had forgotten that there was a Gu family that had nothing better to do than constantly cross the Dongfang family. The young man didn't understand why the head of the Du family was now, since it was usually impossible to invite him to a personal meeting. Looking at the old man, he sincerely did not understand what Grandpa Du was doing here, since he didn't even show up at the Chamber of Commerce. The man in the blue shirt began to stutter and sweat. He was stunned when he saw Mr. Du himself in front of him. Then, Junior Dongfang understood why that idiot Li Jian was acting openly. It was all because of the Gu family's support. Old Man Gu asked Li if he was angry that, due to his carelessness, 2 ungrateful people had offended him. And the boy replied that everything was fine. The old man said that he felt terribly embarrassed in front of the boys, and he asked Li to take Mrs. Jisi to a quiet place and rest himself. Turning around to leave, the protagonist said one last thing to the guy in the red jacket, that he was lucky to be alive today. He began to be indignant that Li Jian, hiding behind the Gu family, still dared to say something about preserving life. Mr. Gu warned the young man that insulting Li Jian was tantamount to insulting the Gu family, since Li Jian had once saved his life. The bodyguards grabbed the boy to teach him some manners, but he didn't understand why this loser was so important to the old man, since their families had worked together for so long. Grandfather replied that the Dongfang family could not be his family's partner because Li Jian was the future heir of the Gu family. The guy was outraged that Mr. Gu was seriously considering siding with this idiot, and the old man declared that his family would accept the fight since Dongfang was declaring war on them. The young master understood that a quarrel with the Gu family would certainly result in trouble for him, and the head of the family would punish him for it. The young man in the red jacket looked with fear at the big man's fist, which he swung to teach the boy a lesson. The gentleman from the Dongfang family didn't even have time to say anything before he received a powerful punch to the face from a Gu family guard. Old man Gu turned his back on him, and the boy told him in a quiet, trembling voice that he admitted he was wrong and would never do that again. Turning around, the formidable grandfather told the boy that Li Jian's insult was unforgivable and that the young man deserved this lesson. Soon, Mr. Ji, Jisi's father, was also punished. A cup flew at his head and broke into many pieces. The man looked down guiltily after receiving the punishment from the young master of the Dongfang family. Lying on a hospital bed, bandaged from his injuries, Dongfang told the man that Li Jian was the son of Ji's ex-wife and that he had an unusual relationship with the Gu family. Zi began to justify himself by saying that he really didn't know this, and that he had just been informed that customers had cancelled their orders and the Ji family had suffered great losses. Enraged, the boy cursed Li Jian and the entire Gu family, and said that it would be much easier if the head of the family did not seek to obtain the results of the research into the Gu family's superpowers. Pouring boiling water into a cup, Ji began to flatter the guy, saying that he had a high status, so it was inappropriate to dirty his hands, and the Gu family was not so easy to harm. The white-haired man said that they could get rid of Li Jian with someone else's help, and Dongfang Jr. demanded to explain in more detail, but the young master immediately understood what kind of strange hands Ji was talking about, and then an ominous smile appeared on his face. The following events took place in the Ji family's apartment. GC decided to take a bath with rose petals after a hard day. She petted the dog and confessed to him that Li Jian had changed a little lately and was saying strange things, but he was no longer so weak. Hugging the dog, the girl said that Li Jian had awakened a very powerful superpower within himself and was now doing something she had never seen before. Thinking about what her friend was like when he became serious, the girl began to hit herself in the face and scream, driving away bad thoughts. Meanwhile, our hero was sitting on the sofa in the living room and spending his free time reading a book. Li Bin had to look up from his reading and looked away when he heard someone knocking on the door. The protagonist approached the front door, where someone was brazenly knocking. He decided that Dongfang had not accepted defeat and sent him a mercenary. But through the door, the guy felt the warm breath coming from the man, so he dared to open it. Li Jian opened the door and saw a tall, muscular guy standing in front of him. He immediately asked him what he was doing here. The protagonist's guess turned out to be correct. Lai Kun, the Dongfang family's bodyguard, was standing behind the door, already holding a bladed weapon at the ready. And in the hallway lay several bodyguards in black suits, whom Lycun easily dealt with in order to get to the door of Li Jian's apartment. Lycun fell to his knees in front of Li Jian and shouted that the guy's heart was good and his abilities were strong, so he wanted to become his subordinate. Even though Lycun had already left the Dongfang family, our hero simply closed the door in front of him, saying that he did not want to dirty his hands with him. The man grabbed the door and shouted that he was wrong. He begged Li Jian to forgive him and promised that he was ready to do any job. The protagonist asked why the former bodyguard of the Dongfang family was acting like this now. Lycun admitted that he loved reading novels about heroes like Li Jian since childhood, and he had never seen such superpowers before, and he wanted to become like him. The boy started banging his head on the floor and screaming, begging Mr. Li to let him stay or else just kill him. The protagonist suspected something. It was hard for him to believe that Dongfang's henchmen would so easily renounce this family and want to be loyal to him. Li Jian thought that Lycun's physique and abilities were different from others, so the guy could be useful to him. The guy agreed to accept Lycun into his team and gave him his first assignment to watch the front door. The protagonist was startled when he returned to the house and saw Ji, the girl drying herself after a bath and asking who had come. Li Jian explained that Lycun had come and would now protect the girl and her mother if he was not around. The guy heard someone knocking on the door again. He opened it and asked the guest if he had come on some urgent matter. It turned out that it was Gu Tianxian. She smiled sweetly and waved to our hero, saying hello to him. Zizi did not hide her displeasure at the appearance of the uninvited guest. Tianxian explained that her grandfather asked her to convey something to Li Jian. The two guards placed the cases on the floor, and the girl relayed her grandfather's words that their family had no treasure worthy of Li Jian. Tianxian invited Li Jian to look at something, and the guards showed our hero a whole collection of colorful artifacts. Gigi was unhappy with what was happening. She didn't understand why Mr. Gu was sending something to her friend again, intending to appease him. Looking at the treasures, Li Jian thought that he could use this magic weapon to make more advanced ones. Li Jian noticed that the only thing missing was a horn. Tianxian explained that her grandfather had a horn in his antique shop, and he wanted the boy to come and get it himself. Zizi blushed with rage when the protagonist told Gu Tianxian that he would go to the antique shop right away. She didn't want her friend and Tianxian to leave in the middle of the night, so she shouted that going to the store so late could be dangerous. The protagonist and Gu Tianxian turned around and looked at Ji with bewilderment, not understanding what was dangerous about it. Li Jian thought about it, guessing that Zizi was acting this way because she was still worried about what happened today. So our hero told Gu Tianxian that it would be better to go tomorrow morning, and the girl replied that she would come to see him tomorrow morning. When the young man closed the front door, he asked Ji not to worry so much anymore. Zizi blushed and looked at Li Jian with loving eyes as he placed his hands on her shoulders and declared that he would not allow anyone to hurt her. The pink-haired girl looked down at the floor and explained that she was worried not about herself, but about Li Jian, who might be kidnapped. The protagonist scratched his head, not understanding why he could be kidnapped, and Ji turned around, puffed out her cheeks in anger and screamed, calling her friend a fool. The next day, as planned, Li Jian went to the antique shop owned by Grandpa Gu. Gu Tianxian brought him there, and at the entrance the girl was greeted by a gray-haired man who works there. The friendly old man, the store manager Zhang Ming, who did not have any superpowers, asked who it was with Gu. Gu Tianxian was very happy to spend time alone with Li Jian. She was beaming with happiness. She introduced him to the manager. Zhang Ming apologized to our hero and offered to lead the distinguished guests inside, knowing that they had come for Mr. Gu's antiques. Presenting a glass-protected cube with a forge inside, Zhang Ming asked Li Jian to check the artifact, which no one had ever touched before. The man was stunned when the protagonist frowned, looked at the cube, and said that it was a low-quality product that needed to be gotten rid of. Zhang Ming shouted that this was the treasure of their store, but our hero's attention was drawn to something else, so he looked away. Li Jian turned around and noticed the aura emanating from the other exhibits covered with cloth. The protagonist confidently walked in that direction. Tianxian asked him to wait for her, and the manager shouted at Li Jian not to go there. But our hero didn't listen to anyone and went to the farthest corner of the store, where things emitting a powerful aura were kept. The boy turned around and asked Zhang Ming what about the product that was now in front of him. A stunned Zhang Ming shouted that this was an untouchable commodity and asked to look at something else since he had spent a lot of money to seal it. The main character didn't listen to the man. He extended his hand and, using his superpowers, instantly dismantled the wall into bricks. The closer the guy got to the door, the more he felt this powerful energy. He understood that this product was meant for him. Zhang Ming asked Ms. Gu what level Mr. Li was, and she replied that she had no idea, which left the old man even more shocked. Gu Tianxian wasn't worried about our hero at all. She told the man that she knew her friend was very strong. Surrounding himself with his powerful aura, the protagonist approached the door behind which that extraordinary treasure was kept. It turned out that Li Jian, Gu Tianxian, and Zhang Ming were not the only three in this store. There was a man sitting under the ceiling who was watching our hero. Without a hint of fear, Li Jian opened the door to the room that housed the artifact that had so intrigued him. The find didn't impress him much. In the middle of the spacious hall stood a horn of divine quality, but for him it was merely passable. Jiang Ming tried to gently stop Mr. Li, but Mr. Li, ignoring the man, ordered the forge to break. The protagonist affected the divine quality horn with his superpower, and Li Jian's energy surrounded the large pot. Two narrow slits, the eyes of the forge, began to awaken. They glowed a bright purple color and began to emit energy. Soon the forge finally woke up and began to spew out a huge amount of energy, which filled the entire space. Li Jian asked Horn if he had finally woken up, and the antique shop owner crouched down and covered his head, shouting that they were all finished. A huge stream of dark energy continued to erupt from the large pot, after which the boys heard a loud, evil laugh from there. A giant demonic beast with horns, similar to a man, flew out, opened its mouth and screamed that it was very hungry. Gu Tianxian was stunned when she saw that the horn was alive. She had never seen anything like it before, and began to encourage Li Jian. The giant demonic beast leaned over our hero and began to stick out its tongue, shouting that it wanted to eat Li Jian's brains. The giant continued to scream angrily. Our hero remained calm and stood motionless, and Jiang Ming believed that they were all corpses. The beast attempted to attack the protagonist, threatening to eat his brains, but Li Jian stopped it using his defensive superpowers. The force of the giant monster threw our hero back several meters, but Li Jian remained firmly on his feet. The boy looked at the monster with a cold gaze, noting its waywardness, and declared that it was time to teach the hellish beast a lesson. The protagonist decided to use the Ling Yu sword technique, second style, against the giant while he still wanted to get the guy's brains. Li Jian extended two fingers charged with his aura and used the choke technique to subdue the hell beast. The monster opened its mouth wide and panicked as our hero's magic sword began to circle around it, applying a stranglehold. This was enough to turn the giant into a small, harmless piglet, who collapsed to the floor and complained that he was in pain. He looked at our hero with fear when he approached him and set a condition. Either he serves him or dies. Tianxian ran up and asked Li Jian if it was all over. Jiang Ming admitted to Mr. Li that he had scared him to death. When Li Jian noticed something suspicious, he held up two charged fingers and asked someone how long it would take to kill him. The pursuer immediately fell to the floor with a crash, breaking the wooden beams on which he had previously been hanging from the ceiling. The frightened guy in the black mask began to frantically apologize to Mr. Li, and our hero demanded to know who his customer was. The guy started swearing that he would explain everything to the boss, shouting and asking Li Jian to calm down, just so that he wouldn't touch him. It turned out that he was just stalling for time. The next second he shouted that Li Jian would now meet the King of Hell and used a low-level spider net against him. The protagonist reacted indifferently, the magic ropes tied around his neck, but Li Jian did not take any action. The mercenary began to panic when he saw that his web had no effect on Li Jian, even though it was stronger than steel. Li Jian removed the spider web from his neck as if it were a simple thread and told the beast to show him what it could do. Behind the main character, a giant hellish monster appeared again, baring its teeth and screaming that it wanted brains. At that very second, a huge demonic boar pounced on the stunned mercenary, who did not understand what was happening. The guy's spider web was useless in this situation. The black energy of the hellish monster had already completely enveloped him. He only had time to look the monster in the face, which was still grinning and loudly screaming that it wanted to get other people's brains. But then, our hero stopped his new subordinate and reminded him that the monster was now his servant, and his old habits must be eradicated. Li Jian walked up to the guy who had just been attacked by the monster and crouched down in front of him to take a closer look. The guy noticed the sleeve of the villain's sweater. It had an ominous pentagram depicted on it. Antique shop owner Jiang Ming was terrified when he recognized the pentagram as the symbol of the Church of Blood Demons. The Church of Blood Demons is an exclusive organization of assassins that has existed for thousands of years and answers to no one. According to the old man, they are crazy fanatics who will do anything to achieve their goals, and they usually take orders from rich and influential clients. Jiang Ming asked Mr. Li who he had crossed, and the young man answered honestly that it was Dongfang Yuanshuo. The old man was shocked that Li had quarreled with Dongfang Yuanshuo himself, and Tianxian immediately started calling her grandfather because she was furious. When the granddaughter told her grandfather that Dongfang had sent a hitman, the old man replied that the Gu family would not ignore it. Meanwhile, Dongfang Yuanshuo was spending time in a bar restaurant with girls. He was thinking about Li Jian, believing that the guy brought trouble on himself. The young gentleman with a bandage on his head turned around sharply when he noticed several big guys behind him. Soon, these tall, muscular men were already carrying Yuanshuo on their shoulders, and he was indignant and shouting, asking how they dared to kidnap him. The bodyguards threw Dongfang Jr. into the backseat of a black car, and the boy shouted that his family would cut off their heads for this. When the young gentleman tried to get up to see who was sitting in front, he noticed a familiar person. He was taken aback when he saw the Dongfang family's butler, Xin Yun, sitting in the front seat. When they arrived at the place, Xin Yun started dragging the guy by the hair towards the Gu family mansion. And the guy was shouting, asking what he was doing. The Dongfang family's butler roughly put his foot on the boy's head, pinning him to the ground to stop him from screaming. Xin Yun stated that the young master must be aware of the consequences of his actions and respect the Gu family. The butler shouted that he, Xin Yun, was apologizing on behalf of the Dongfang family, and he hoped that Mr. Gu did not hold a grudge against them and would change his mind about ending the cooperation. The man kicked the young master with all his might and shouted that Yuan Shuo had insulted the Gu family due to his age, and that he had personally come to apologize. Tianju went outside and asked the butler to leave, because his grandfather told him that they had insulted their benefactor and were now the enemy of their family. Gu Tianju reminded the butler Xin Yun that it was important for the Dongfang family to maintain the family tradition now. Butler Xin Yun told the boy that the Dongfang family was acting at its own discretion in this matter. Gu Sr., watching all this from the balcony, told our hero that after what happened, the Dongfang family would not allow such a thing to happen again. The old man admitted that he had not called the protagonist only for this reason and declared that he had found what Li Jian was looking for. Soon, the black premium car that belonged to the Dongfang family was already returning home in the rays of the setting sun. Butler Xin Yun was talking to his boss on the phone. Yuan Shuo heard him talking to his father. The man told him that the head of the family had asked him to tell the boy that he did not consider him a worthy candidate to succeed his business. Yuan Shuo began to pat the butler's shoulders and shout, begging the man to beg his father to forgive him, because Li Jian was to blame for everything. But the butler was adamant, and in response to his pleas, he rudely threw the young gentleman out of the car right onto the asphalt in the middle of the road. Finally, Xin Yun advised the young master to take care of himself, since Yuan Shuo was now persona non grata in his own family. The car drove away, leaving behind clouds of exhaust fumes, and Yuan Shuo was left in the middle of the street, abandoned and alone. The boy shouted, threatening that Xin Yun's father's dog would be the first on the list to be eliminated when he became the head of the family and dealt with him, Li Jian, and Gu. In the evening, in his bedroom, our hero sat on the bed. He lit the forge to throw in the treasures that old man Gu had given him earlier. Li Jian closed his eyes and used his mind to envelop all of these treasures in his energy and directed them into the fire inside the furnace. Then the guy used his superpower on a large pot, and thick, acrid smoke began to pour out of it. It was time to start the creation process. The protagonist made a gesture with his hands before activating it. A hellish boar appeared from the furnace. He laughed and shouted that everything was ready. Showing his master the treasures he had made, Li Jian saw that the magic weapons he had obtained were all aimed at defense, and any master could break them in a few blows. The hellish boar did not leave his master alone. He kept saying that he was hungry and really wanted to eat. While Ji-Chi was practicing yoga in her room, she was disturbed by our hero, who asked her to take a break for a minute. The girl noticed the jewelry in her friend's hands and asked Li Jian when he had acquired it. Li Jian placed the pendant around Ji-Chi's neck and said that he personally made the ornament to protect her, and that it would give him peace of mind. He immediately headed out. The girl asked where he was going. He explained that the Gu family had prepared something for him. The pink-haired girl was upset, but she let him go and asked him to come home quickly. When the protagonist stepped outside the apartment, he was immediately greeted loudly by Lai Kun, who was guarding the house outside. Without saying anything, Li Jian used his superpowers to place a gold bracelet on his subordinate's wrist. Lai Kun looked at the decoration in bewilderment and asked his master what it was. The protagonist explained that this thing would help the guy in his training and ordered his subordinate to continue guarding the door. Finally, Li Jian warned Lai Kun that his life would immediately turn into hell if he made even one mistake. When night fell, Li Jian, Gu Tianxin, and her older brother met in a warehouse in the suburbs of Qingchang City. Along the way, Gu Tianju explained to our hero that the underground fighting ring located here is called Black Crow. According to him, these are black market fights involving people with superpowers, and the owner of the ring is an eccentric person. The protagonist asked if Gu Tianju and Tianxin could really apply there, even though the ring owner did not allow members of the Gu family to enter. Gu's subordinate had sealed the door in advance. Tianju explained that this was to ensure that the entrance would be reduced to rubble in the event of an unforeseen circumstance. Gu Tianxin went inside first and reassured Li Jian, telling him that he could go in with peace of mind and rely on them. The protagonist asked the guys if they were sure about this, and they entered a magical elevator that teleported them to the ring. The red-haired guy said that their low levels don't matter here because the participants wear ability suppression bracelets. Li Jian sighed heavily and thought that in his previous world, people with such a mindset did not live long. Gu Tianxin only managed to utter one sound before our hero grabbed her by the shoulders and began poking her with his fingers at different points on her body. She screamed, not understanding what was happening, as Li Jian continued his treatment, now pressing on her stomach. The protagonist let go of the frightened girl. Gu Tianju screamed, not understanding what just happened. The red-haired boy didn't have time to do anything before he was next. and Li Jian also poked him with his finger. Gu Tianju suddenly turned into a beast engulfed in flames, roaring and his eyes emitting a bright light. Gu's superpower was out of control. He didn't understand what Mr. Li had just done to him, and Jian told him to concentrate on his feelings. The boy obeyed, closed his eyes and tried to concentrate on his feelings. He noticed that his flame no longer burned him. He felt like the flames had become a part of him. He understood how to use the power correctly, and Gu's shirt was torn to shreds. Tianxian was frightened and screamed, asking her brother if it was dangerous. Tianju calmed her down, saying that now the flame did not harm him. The girl admitted that she had also changed, and was now enveloped in a pleasant aroma that was similar to the scent of her benefactor. The protagonist explained that he simply removed the seals from their qi, and this was the guy's reward for leading him to the ruins. Gu Tianxian and Tianju bowed before him and began to thank him. The guy promised that he would become a great master and go through fire and water for him. The guys entered the underground arena Black Raven. There were a lot of people inside. Some were arguing about the matches, and some were lying beaten on the floor. The Gu siblings were dressed in black robes. The girl noticed how many bandits there were here, and Tianju advised Li Jian to be careful here. The red-haired guy said that branches of death arenas have spread all over the world. This is just one of the rings, and the organizers have serious connections. The place, which was uncontrolled by anyone, according to Gu, became a haven for robbers. Even right now there was a fight in the club. Gu Tianxian, holding on to our hero, was scared when she saw someone fighting. Even the Gu family has no power here. Gu advised the boys to be wary of opponents with red bracelets. These are executioners who have hundreds of fatal battles under their belts. Gu Tianxian was frightened when a creepy man with a missing tooth noticed her and asked if they knew each other. The man thought that Tianxian was the girl from the movie and reached out to look at the girl's face closer. But our hero immediately intervened and hit the creepy man, who fell onto a wooden table and broke it with his back. The man was no longer acting so confident. He was sitting on the floor crouched, his eyes filled with fear, as Li told him to get lost. Afterwards, some big guy with a red bracelet on his wrist put his hand on the main character's shoulder and called him. It was Luo Shan, a huge muscular man, who asked Li Jian why he had come here to make a fuss and demanded that he kneel down and admit his mistake. Gu Tianxian and Tianju were afraid for our hero. The guy shouted that the big guy had a red bracelet, so Li should be more careful. But Li Jian wasn't the least bit afraid of him, and the big guy Luo Shan was wary, because our hero emitted a very strong aura, even though he was young. The head of the underground arena, Xiang Nan, came out and asked Luo Shan to calm down, saying that these were his respected guests. They were newbies and therefore did not know the rules. The big guy turned around and shouted one last time that Li Jian's ass was saved by the arena leader. But he shouldn't think that he wouldn't remember it later. Xiang Nan said that Luo Shan is one of the best fighters in his arena, and he has a slightly hot temper, so he is often rude. The leader led the boys to a more suitable place for guests and placed a bottle of wine from his collection on the table, offering Li Jian a drink. The protagonist became wary. He looked to the side and felt that somewhere nearby there was a relic of an immortal cultivator. Tianju reminded Mr. Xiangnan that, according to the previously agreed upon conditions, he and his sister would participate in the duel and asked if Li Jian could do the same. The boss agreed but warned the guys that they would be responsible for all the consequences. He didn't mind, because the boss wouldn't lose any money in a mortal duel anyway. Gu Tianxian and Tianju were worried about our hero, and the girl suggested that her friend reconsider, because a duel to the death is very dangerous. But the main character didn't answer them. Tianxian wondered why the guy was just standing there silently with his eyes closed. At this time, Li Jian used his senses to figure out what kind of relic it was and where it was hidden, and he realized that it was a soul-stealing relic. The young man came to his senses and told the head of the club to reserve a place for him because he was going to the ruins. Tianxian and her older brother were glad that the boy would go with them to watch their fight. They thought that he was also worried about them. The joyful guys started shouting that they would definitely not let Mr. Li down, but our hero decided that he needed to deal with the relic first. The brutal battles in the death arena had already begun, and a jubilant crowd had gathered in the stands, rooting for their favorites. The boys waved their fists and shouted, egging on the fighters they had bet on. Two men were fighting in a circular arena, using magical abilities. One of the spectators was our hero. He watched the fight and thought that in the past, immortal cultivators also often fought to the death and the audience liked it. The insidious relic stole souls, but had no effect on the remaining souls, so our hero decided to enter with a part of his soul to avoid putting himself at risk. Li Jian thought that there was only one thing left to do. Sitting at the table, he carefully, using 2 fingers, directed the flow of energy into the floor. This piece of soul went to the ruins of the immortal cultivator, which was located directly below the death arena. Floating around the hall like a ghost, Li Jian knew that immortal cultivators erected such structures in places where spiritual power accumulated. This was to ensure that time would not affect the contents of the vaults in any way. But the boy did not understand why there was so much fuss with this relic. The protagonist became wary when a stone statue of a man wearing a crown with fangs came to life and began flying around the hall. Lai wasn't surprised to see a crowd of stone guardians in front of him, left behind by the cultivator in case anyone split the soul and entered the ruins. Frowning, our hero asked the guard how he, a little demon, dared to stand in his way. The protagonist used Heavenly Key Rift, and a bright blue flash appeared in the center of the hall, instantly destroying all the guards. Having gotten rid of them so easily, Li Jian concluded that the guards were low-level weapons, and what he needed was located deeper. A look of fear and worry appeared on Li Jian's face when someone appeared in the ruins again, wanting to protect the relic. The young cultivator was taken aback when he saw the soul-stealing monster in front of him, a giant red beast with 3 eyes. Having appeared in the ruins, using a piece of his soul, our hero continued to watch the monster devouring souls. Li Jian extended 2 fingers charged with his aura and declared that it was time to teach this huge, hellish beast a lesson. The boy decided to use Lin Ye's sword technique, the second style, against the soul-devouring monster and send dozens of magical blades at it. The beast roared loudly as Li Jian used the curse path, and under his command, all of those swords attacked the monster at once. The hellish beast, deprived of its life force, collapsed to the floor, but our hero noticed strange footprints emitting a red aura that lay nearby. Then the cultivator decided to use the same spell again, but this time the magic swords pierced the floor where those marks were. The protagonist noticed that he could not sense the exact direction of the formation. Most likely, it was hidden from prying eyes. Standing at the head of the deceased soul-devouring monster, Li Jian turned around when he heard someone calling for help. The guy saw a girl wearing glasses nearby, who was tied up lying on the floor in the middle of a magic circle. The girl in the black skirt was named Xiang Ying. She couldn't move because of the chains that bound her entire body. She called for help. Xiang Ying screamed in fear when our hero managed to free the girl from the chains with one movement, freeing her. The girl was delighted and thanked her savior. She asked what his name was and whether her father had sent him here. The protagonist realized that he had just discovered a formation. He told the girl that she needed to return to her body if she wanted to live. Xiang Ying agreed and asked Li Jian if she would come with her because she was afraid to be alone, and our hero sat down on the floor and closed his eyes. The girl couldn't take her eyes off Li Jian as she flew away from the ruins back to her owl body, finding our hero. Although cold, handsome, after the deed was done, Li Jian woke up in his body on the platform again. All that was left was to wait for her in front of the entrance to the ruins. Li Jian, arms crossed over his chest, continued to watch the battlefield as wine and a plate of fruit were served to him as an honored guest. The next doubles match was between the Mo brothers, Mo Qian and Mo Huo, and the guests from the Gu family, Gu Tianjin and Gu Tianju, and the audience was delighted. The spectators began to openly mock the Gu siblings, wondering how long these guys would last in the arena. Most were ready to bet on the Mo brothers. They believed that this was their unconditional victory. Meanwhile, the Gus entered the ring. Mo Qian and Mo Huo were already in the arena, and one of the brothers said that in the arena of death, one must be prepared to part with one's life. The boy took out his sword and declared that they were no longer afraid of anything after how many times they had been on the brink of death, and that the spoiled children should regret their decision. Tianjin told her brother that their opponents looked strong, and he asked her not to be afraid because victory would be easy thanks to Mr. Li's help. Gu, holding his fists charged with flames at the ready, rushed forward to attack. His younger sister also launched blue crystals at the opponents. Tianju flew up from the ground and was about to use the uncatchable flame technique against Mo. Many flaming fists flew towards the guy, but Mo easily dodged all those fists using the flash move. He smiled, asking if Gu really wanted to beat him in agility. Gu Tianju tensed up because he was shocked by the supersonic speed of his opponent moving in the ring. The red-haired boy became even more frightened when he barely managed to dodge Mo's knife strike. Gu Tianju decided to immediately counterattack and kicked his opponent, but he managed to dodge at the last moment. Before the boy could even blink, Mo was immediately behind him, accusing Gu's grandson of his unprofessional movements. The red-haired boy panicked when Mo threw something black right into his eyes, causing the boy to lose the ability to see anything. Afterwards, Mo shouted that it was time for Tianju to try his blade, and Gu screamed in pain as Mo struck him in the back with the blade. Gu Tianzhen was afraid for her elder brother when she saw that Mo had attacked him to the point that he could no longer stand firmly on his feet. Second brother Mo shouted, telling the girl to think better of herself. And at that very moment, he used a rock attack on her. The crowd was rooting for the Mo brothers, cheering and egging them on to deal with the Gu family members as brutally as possible. The old man who sat next to our hero informed him that he had lost and did not understand why such bad students as Gu had agreed to fight. Gu Tianju sat on the ground, and Mo told the rich kid that his game was over because his blade was poisonous, but asked him not to worry because they would take care of his sister. Trying to get to his feet, Gu said that if he were Mo, he wouldn't be so confident. The opponent asked the guy what he was mumbling about. Tianju activated his fiery superpower again, swung his fist, and declared that thanks to Mr. Li, he had become a different person. The red-haired boy shouted furiously, ordering Mo to ignite and slammed his fist on the ground, causing a powerful fire to erupt. The flames began to drain the enemy's life force, and he screamed, asking how Gu was still moving and whether he was poisoned. Gu Tianju told his opponent that he wouldn't be taken in so easily by the counterfeit poison from the black market. The red-haired boy realized that his flame was so elusive that the toxins entering his body did not have time to harm him, and once again mentally thanked Li Jian for this. Younger brother Mo panicked when he saw the powerful magical flames consuming his closest person. When the battle was over, some of the spectators were sad because they had lost everything, while others had bet on Gu and were happy that they would now pay off all their debts. Safe and sound, Gu Tianzhen and her older brother approached the protagonist, and the girl asked Mr. Li if they had done well. Li Jian crossed his arms and told the boys that he had nothing positive to say, and Gu apologized to him for letting him down. But then our hero decided to praise the guys, smiled, and admitted that their fight was impressive. The guy advised them to put in more effort to reach a completely different level. They were delighted and shouted that they would work tirelessly. The Gus started and looked away sharply when the ringleader came and congratulated them on winning the competition. The leader said that their performance was something amazing, and their control over their superpowers was so perfect that he wanted to take part himself. Gu Tianju responded by asking Mr. Xiangnan not to bother with pleasantries, and said that it was time for him and his sister to leave. The red-haired guy was visibly scared when the boss said he would fulfill his promise, but the fighter with the red bracelet challenged Li to a duel, so the matter had to be postponed. Gu began to get indignant, because they had fulfilled their part of the deal and taken part in the duel, and he was still challenging their friend to the arena. Xiangnan explained that these were the rules of the Black Crow, and the opponent with the red bracelet had the right to challenge anyone to a fight, so Li Jian agreed. The protagonist stood up from the bench and declared that there was little chance that the head of the club would be able to realize his plans, since he was relying on the will of fate. Li Jian turned and left, and Tianjin and her elder brother bowed, wished him luck, and promised to watch his fight closely. The protagonist went through a red scanner to get tested after he put on the bracelet. The guy realized that the organizers had just equipped him with a magical weapon to suppress cultivation, and he found it to be a pretty good device. One of the workers said it was strange that the young man's strength was an order of magnitude higher than average, even though he was not a cheater. A colleague advised him to give up, because Li Jian would still die in the arena, since the blood demon himself would be fighting against him. After Li Jian confidently approached the gate that would lead him straight to the arena, there were only a few minutes left before the fight. As Li walked, the host addressed the dear viewers and announced that the next fight would soon begin, and one of its participants would be a newcomer named Li Jian. Our hero walked confidently into the arena and stopped. He saw an opponent in front of him emitting a bright red aura. The host announced that the newcomer's opponent had been on the brink of death more than once, and that he was the strongest of all the red blood demon bracelets. The blood demon, aka Luo Shan, stepped into the arena and grinned ominously, looking straight into the eyes of his opponent. All the spectators started shouting in support of the blood demon. They wanted Luo Shan to defeat our hero, because they had bet all their money on him. Luo Shan took a step closer to our hero and said that they met again, as he had promised earlier that this would happen. The host announced the start of the duel. The blood demon waved his hand, leaving behind a red streak of aura, and shouted that he wanted to see Li Jian's strength. The man knew that his blood would have exploded Li Jian's body if his bracelet hadn't interfered, and our hero protected himself from the attack with a defensive dome. The blood demon saw his opponent go on the defensive and screamed, asking how much longer he could hold out. The protagonist stood motionless, defending himself from the blood demon's attacks, and carefully watched the enemy's actions. Li Jian stomped his foot on the floor with such force that it shattered into stones and decided to use the Lingy Blade technique, the second style. The boy charged the stones with his energy and raised them into the air in order to use Bihua's breath against his opponent. The blood demon saw that his opponent controlled the stones. The guy's abilities impressed him, and he was ready to counterattack. Luoshan tried to stop the stones that were flying at him with his blood energy, which enveloped them. The man was taken aback when he turned around and saw that Li Jian was already ready to attack Luoshan from the air. He didn't have time to repel our hero's next attack. Li Jian successfully struck the man's torso with a charged stone. The blow sent the blood demon flying into the far corner of the arena, leaving trails of dust behind him, followed by a bright flash. The spectators began to worry about the guy they had bet on, and they shouted at Mr. Shan to deal with this bastard. The protagonist slowly approached the enemy, and the blood demon admitted that he had underestimated Li Jian's strength. The big guy smiled ominously, dug his nails into the stone floor, destroying it, and was ready to attack again. The muscular giant pulled a huge stone out of the floor and raised it above his head, preparing to throw it at the boy. The protagonist went on the defensive again, activating a protective dome so that the giant stone did not harm him. But the magical sphere began to crack under the influence of the spiked stone, so our hero became noticeably wary. Afterwards, the stone turned into a huge red crystal, which finally destroyed our hero's defensive shield. In a short period of time, the blood demon figured out how to best penetrate Li Jian's defense, despite his meager abilities. So our hero praised him. Luo Shan smiled madly and shouted, asking why Li Jian doubted him, since he was the strongest red bracelet and the invincible king of the arena. The man shouted that he intended to use the blood that Li Jian had spilled, and the boy noticed how the scratch on his face began to be sucked away. A moment later, a deafening explosion was heard. The blood demon used the enemy's wound to attack him from a distance. Gu Tianjin and her older brother became worried about Mr. Li when they saw an explosion right next to him. The crowd began to laugh and cheer, praising the gentleman for his mind-blowing performance and agreeing that there was nothing more interesting than a fight to the death. Gu Tianju began to lament. He screamed, thinking that Mr. Li could not survive, and all because he brought him to this arena. The blood demon became wary. He did not understand why the victory signal had not sounded yet, because he thought that Li was already dead. Luoshan was shocked and screamed, asking how he survived, when Li Jian appeared in front of him and said that the blood demon was more interesting than he thought. The guy admitted that another opponent would have probably died after such an attack. But unfortunately, the blood demon's opponent today was Li Jian. The blood demon decided to go on the attack again. He saw that there was blood on his opponent's face, which meant he wouldn't be able to beat the red bracelet, but he didn't manage to attack. A moment later, the big guy froze in place when Li Jian threw several small lightning bolts at him. Luoshan panicked, his whole body trembling, not understanding where his strength had gone, and our hero threw off his cloak and declared that the time had come. It was time to use the Jiao Shu blade. The protagonist extended 2 fingers forward and waved them, activating this technique. The protagonist ordered the enemy to fall, after which a giant stream of bright yellow energy knocked the blood demon off his feet. Luoshan started coughing loudly after receiving damage. This attack against him was fatal in the duel. Afterwards, the big man fell to the ground, losing consciousness, and Li Jian still held his hand in front of him, performing the spell. The spectators were confused and scared, not understanding what had happened and why Mr. Shan had just fallen. For a moment, Li Jian felt like he was fighting to the death as the host solemnly announced our hero's victory. The protagonist silently left this arena because he needed to return to the ruins to continue searching for the relic. Spectators who had bet on Luoshan were indignant because they had lost money. There was a mysterious masked man in the hall who silently watched the events. When the young man took off his glasses, it turned out that it was Dongfang Yuanshuo, who had been secretly watching our hero fight. Tianjin and Tianju ran after Li Jian, shouting how much they admired him. And the guy replied that one day they would also grow to his level. They were delighted and promised to work hard. And Li Jian closed his eyes and concluded that Luoshan's skills were worthy of praise, because after the battle, his body's defense had improved. The head of the club approached them and said that Mr. Li was like a god. He asked how he managed to defeat the strongest fighter among the red bracelets. The old man smiled slyly, revealing his 2 large front teeth, and made a gesture with his hand, inviting the boys to lead them to the exit. The head of the underground arena opened the door that led down the steps and ordered the boys to follow him. The protagonist and his friends obediently followed Mr. Xiangnan as they descended the steps in the gloomy room. Xiangnan apologized for his insolence, but asked why they were interested in this place. Gu replied that Mr. Li had personal reasons for it. The leader warned that he was not exaggerating when he said that anyone who went there was doomed to die. And his little Xiangying also fell into a coma after that. He turned around, looked at our hero, and said that Mr. Li could have built a successful career in the arena, and it would be a shame if something happened to him in the ruins. The old man was stunned and shouted, asking the protagonist again when Li Jian stated that his daughter Xiangying was completely fine. The man froze in shock. He turned pale. His whole body trembled, because he had spent a lot of effort, money, and time to pull his daughter out of a coma. But so far, everything had been unsuccessful. At that moment, Xiangnan received a call that his daughter had come to and come out of her coma, and the old man shouted, asking how she was. Xiangnan didn't understand how Li Jian knew this. He assumed that the guy saved her daughter, but the guy said that he already knew where to go, so the man didn't have to bother. As Li Jian went into the depths of the ruins, he advised the old man to visit his daughter, who cried out in great gratitude to our hero. Tianjin also didn't understand when Li Jian managed to save the club leader's daughter. Her brother replied that Mr. Li's magic was beyond their understanding. At this time, the red blood demon bracelet was lying in the clinic after the battle. He tore off his catheter and began to scream, cursing Li Jian. The angry man stood up. He wanted to take revenge on Li Jian. The doctor tried to stop him because the big man's wounds had not yet healed. They both perked up when an unknown guy in a black mask entered the room and announced that it seemed they had a common enemy. Dongfang Yuanshuo took off his mask and cap and offered the blood demon to join forces against the protagonist. Somewhere beneath the death arena, beyond the ruins of the immortal cultivator, the protagonist, Gu Tianjin, and her brother continued on their way. It was very gloomy inside. There were stone ruins everywhere. Gu Tianjin complained about the unpleasant smell in this place. Gu Tianju noticed that there were traces of terrible battles here. and the guy thought that our hero had already been in these ruins. Meanwhile, the protagonist knew that the soul-stealing system outside the ruins had failed. He saw this from the black branches in the corner. It was decided to go even further. The guy used magic to put a seal on the wall and destroy it. Li Jin explained to the boys that a barrier had been installed at the entrance to prevent anyone from disturbing the owner. And they saw a statue of a giant demon in front of them. When Li Jian disturbed him, the demon activated and opened its mouth wide, growling, demanding that the boy give him something. The protagonist looked askance at the monster, assuming that it wanted to swallow him up. The monster had only one eye. The pupil was in the shape of a flower. The eye emitted a bright red light. Under the influence of this eye, the pile of skulls that were buried in this tomb began to awaken. The protagonist, without taking his hands out of his pockets, easily dealt with the demon. The monster's red eye split into two parts. Gu Tianzhen and her elder brother were shocked when they saw that Mr. Li had killed the demon with just one glance. The barrier was destroyed, so our heroes were able to continue their journey through the tomb, surrounded by walls of human skulls. It turned out that Dongfang and the blood demon were watching them. Luoshan admitted that after many years of working here, he had not even guessed about this place. Dongfang Yuanshuo turned to the man in the red jacket who was standing behind him and declared that it was time to play his trump cards. The boy brought with him a stranger in a mask that hid his face. This man possessed the 9th level of abilities and an unknown power. Dongfang also took with him a big guy with an ugly face, who also possessed a similar level of ability. Meanwhile, Li Jian and his friends continued to wander through the ruins. The situation changed. They noticed the branches of dead trees. There were torches hanging on the walls that burned with a blue flame, so it was not completely dark in the tomb. The guys were still walking surrounded by skulls. Tianzhen noticed that the further they went, the more pungent the smell became. Li Jin understood that the girl felt spiritual power, which meant that a great future awaited her. The protagonist stopped and extended his hand to the side to slow down the boys when they found themselves near some kind of cave. Tianju asked what was wrong. Our hero told them to be quiet. Then the brother and sister meekly covered their mouths with their hands and fell silent. The three boys carefully peered out from around the corner and saw a giant blue flame in front of them, in which the faces of the monsters could be discerned. A frightened Tianju asked what it was, and our hero explained that ancient cultivators often used ghosts as guards. After waiting for a while, Li Jian said that they could move on. And when the ghost left, the three began to walk forward in the tomb again. Soon they found themselves in a room where there were 2 chairs and a table, and various treasures were piled up around them. Li Jian and Mr. Gu's grandchildren boldly approached to examine this treasure room in more detail. Tianju noted how many magical weapons there were, and the blue-haired girl asked who used to live here. Gu Tianjin noticed a small chest on the floor. It was emitting an ominous red aura. Before she could think of anything, she fell under the hypnotic influence of the chest. The creature in her head began asking her to help and free it. A ghost of a demon with 2 pairs of eyes and a sinister smile burst out of the chest and began to make frightening sounds. Gu Tianjin froze in place as the monster aimed at her, ready to take possession of her. The red-haired boy was scared for his sister when he noticed that she was in trouble. He shouted at her. The ghost had already begun to absorb the girl, enveloping her from different sides. She screamed, demanding to be let go, and the monster declared that her body now belonged to him. The protagonist extended 2 fingers forward and concentrated energy at their tips to save Tianjin from the monster. Li Jian used a magic blade. A bright long beam immediately scattered the red ghost to the sides, passing through the girl. The girl opened her mouth and arched her back as Li Jian's energy passed through her, freeing her from the demon's shackles. A frightened Gu Tianju immediately picked up his younger sister and asked if she was okay. The girl came to her senses and asked what happened. After destroying the ghost, Li Jian received a jade pendant. He knew that the blood sects used such pendants, which meant they were dealing with one of its representatives. He did not understand why the same sects existed in his world and this world. And then he remembered that the paths to Taoism were laid through 3,000 worlds. The protagonist knew that the ancient relics were imbued with great spiritual energy, and he suspected that he was already close to his goal. Li Jin's eyes immediately lit up red. The guy turned around sharply and looked behind him in fear. Someone burst into the tomb with a roar. Bright blue lightning flashed, and stones flew in all directions. It was the blood demon and Dongfang's minions. Luoshan warned the boy that this was not an arena, and he would not restrain himself here. In order to protect Gu Tianzhen and her elder brother, the protagonist immediately placed a protective seal on them and told them to stand there. Luoshan laughed ominously and declared that the protagonist would now experience great despair. The big guy immediately tried to pounce on our hero, screaming for him to die, using his bloody magical power. Luckily, the blood crystals that Luoshan launched at our hero flew over his head because he ducked in time. One of the bloody magic crystals hit the stone wall of the tomb, leaving a crack in it. When Luoshan tried to attack Li Jian again, the boy protected himself with a magical dome and remained unharmed. Tianju was indignant at the shamelessness of the red bracelet for losing in the arena. and his sister wondered if Li could handle them. Li Jian thought that the red bracelet's abilities were average, but it penetrated the defense without any problems, and was ready to repel another attack. The protagonist jumped when the two big guys tried to hit him and dodged. He knew that the enemy was worthy of his peak strength. It was time to counterattack. Li Jian charged his true qi into 2 fingers to use the magic weapon. The guy knew that this battle would awaken true energy in him, and this would be a big leap for his improvement, so he was not against the fight. The protagonist activated his magic blade and began to skillfully swing it, leaving bright streaks of yellow light in the air. The guy managed to hit the enemy several times, but the blood demon said that these were just childish tricks. Luo Shan screamed, calling our hero a worthless son of a bitch, and prepared his blood to use for the attack. The blood demon's red bracelet transformed his own blood into razor-sharp crystals to attack his opponent. Li Jian knew that when the blood coagulated, the spiritual power inside would accumulate, causing an explosion, and this was apparently Luo Shan's trump card. The protagonist decided to use the Lin Ye sword technique, 4th style, destruction technique to destroy these crystals. The guy managed to cope with this, but a moment later, another opponent was flying towards him, a fat man with a mohawk, who was ready to attack. After dodging, Li Jian guessed that it was a decoy, and that this weirdo's body resembled a forest spirit that could heal itself. The big guy, turning his back to our hero, grinned, a whole field of sharp crystals protruding from his back, emitting an ominous aura. A moment later, there was an explosion. The blood crystals instantly grew thousands of times in size, destroying everything in their path. Dongfang Jr., who was watching the fight from the corner, thought that Li Jian had brought trouble upon himself. Tianju saw that one fighter was able to heal himself and give another fighter his blood as a weapon, and his sister began to worry about Mr. Li. The protagonist decided to use Lin Ye's sword technique, 5th style, moonlight technique. He lowered the blade, after which a light silhouette of the moon formed around him. The blood demon approached the fat man with the mohawk, who was trying to get up from the floor and asked if he was still alive. Luo Shan told our hero that the carcass in his hands could heal itself, but it could not grow brains, and asked Li if he thought he could hold out that long. Closing his eyes, the protagonist replied that if this was all the blood demon was capable of, then the guy had clearly overestimated him. The protagonist extended his sword forward. He used the Jiao Sui blade, the 1-power spell, to attack the red bracelet. After striking the big guy once, Li Jian landed on the ground with a thud to strike the blood demon again. The guy was sure that the next blow for the enemy would be fatal. He swung his sword, inflicting a lot of damage on the blood demon. After this, Luo Shan was unable to stay on his feet and fell face down on the ground, unable to fight back. The blood demon looked with fear at the blade, the tip of which our hero pressed directly to the enemy's neck. Luo Shan tried to get up, and Li Jian stood in front of him, holding his blade ready to get rid of the big guy at any moment. The big guy laughed and said that without the restraining bracelets, he could explode like a volcano and attack with lava, so Li Jian would not escape from him. But then the smile immediately disappeared from the man's face. He did not understand how this was possible. The blood demon turned pale, because everything did not go according to his plan. The power of the red bracelet's blood disappeared as soon as it approached our hero. He sincerely did not understand how this was possible. The protagonist raised his blade above himself and told his enemy that it was time to end this. But something interrupted the guy. He looked warily to the side when he noticed a threat from another opponent. Li Jian defended himself with his blade in time. The bullet hit the blade directly, then ricocheted off and flew past. The main character carefully looked behind him and noticed this bullet, which seemed to be electrified and was emitting lightning. The blood demon took advantage of the moment and grabbed the fat man with the mohawk by the scruff of his neck to use him to attack our hero. The bullet charged with lightning energy dealt damage to Li Jian. The boy fell to his knees, his body smoking and pierced by electricity. A masked man with a gun entered the arena, and the blood demon explained that this fat man not only helps him regenerate blood, but also benefits from gas, heat, and even electricity. The warhead used by the mysterious masked fighter was made of a super powerful current that can pierce any matter. The masked man readied his gun to fire another shot, and the blood demon suggested that Li Jian finally admit his defeat. Our hero was not at all impressed by the guy's abilities, and he had no intention of giving up. Instead, Li Jian snapped his fingers and pulled out his trump card. The protagonist summoned a 3-headed hellhound and challenged his opponents to find out once and for all who Li Jian was. The 3-headed hellhound roared loudly, spewing hellish red flames from its 3 mouths to attack its opponents. The blood demon and his 2 assistants tensed up and shouted, asking if this schoolboy could really summon high-ranking beasts. The mysterious masked man readied his gun with a high-powered electric bullet to protect himself from the hellhound. He fired, the bullet instantly creating a thick and high wall of ice in front of him to protect the men from the hellish flames. Luo Shan shouted that the ice wall wouldn't help. He suggested the man freeze the dog, because he controls the elements, and the man accused the big guy of stupidity because this is not ordinary fire. The blood demon screamed, asking the others to cover him while he killed the brat. The man with the gun agreed to help. At this time, the ice wall was already completely destroyed. The three-headed hellhound grabbed the fat man with the mohawk in its mouth. The man with the straps on his face was saved. The hellhound loosened its grip, after which the fat man fell back to the floor with a squeal. Luo Shan sent the three-headed hellhound to hell and decided to use his signature bloody power against the giant, terrifying monster. The three-headed hellhound growled even louder as the magically charged blood hit them and detonated. The powerful red bracelet winced in fear when he noticed the presence of our hero behind him, ready to attack with a sword. The protagonist attempted to strike the blade, leaving a bright streak of light in the air, but the blood demon managed to dodge at the last moment. Out of the corner of his eye, Li Jian noticed a bullet flying towards him again. This time, the masked man charged it with fiery energy. The bullet created a powerful fire tornado around Li Jian, and the boy stood at the very epicenter of the whirlwind of flames. Then, Luo Shan decided that the protagonist had been caught. He swung his fist, preparing bloody force to attack the guy. But he didn't succeed because Li Jian got ahead of the curve and plunged his blade into his opponent's body, despite the fiery tornado around him. After Li Jian made a gesture with his hand and commanded the whirlwind of fire to simply disappear, the tornado began to gradually subside. Meanwhile, the masked man held his gun at the ready, but a bright yellow light, the power of our hero, overtook his weapon. Suddenly, everything around the mysterious 9th-rank fighter burst into flames, and he himself was caught in the destructive flames, so the masked man left the fight forever. Luo Shan didn't understand what had happened, and whether his partner had been unable to cope with his strength. Li Jian saw that the man's superpower was similar to the 5 elements' heavenly control, and it was an ordinary modified spell. He knew that self-regeneration consisted of using the spiritual energy within the body, the reserves of which sooner or later ran out. Luo Shan was stunned when he looked at the fat man who could heal himself and saw that even he had not healed this time. The panicked blood demon screamed, asking what Li Jian was. Our hero came closer and replied that this was unnecessary information for him. The giant muscular man decided to take a drastic step and began to melt, turning into lava. Using the trick he had left for emergencies, Luo Shan jumped up and shouted that he would die, but he would take Li Jian with him. Afterwards, an incredibly powerful explosion erupted, because Luo Shan had the ability to explode himself, turning his body into lava. When the smoke cleared, it turned out that our hero was completely fine, as was the three-headed hellhound, and all that remained of the blood demon was a small red round crystal. Li Jian took the crystal in his hand. He already knew what it was, and Gu Tianzhen came running, worried about her friend, and her brother was stunned that they were all dead. The protagonist replied that no, there was still one enemy left, and he prepared a yellow crystal to deal with him too. Li Jian threw the crystal to the side, causing a loud explosion to sound, and the one who had been hiding around the corner all this time screamed loudly. The guys saw Dongfang Yuanshou in front of them. The guy was wounded after our hero's attack. He was lying on the ground, clutching his leg. Dongfang fell to his knees and began to scream, admitting his guilt. He promised to do whatever the guy asked, even become his dog, if only Li Jian would not kill him. Yuanshou closed his eyes as our hero approached him, screaming for mercy, while Li Jian simply walked past, holding dozens of large stones at the ready. The guy in the red sweater was in shock when, after a couple of seconds, he realized that he was still alive, and the main character walked past with his eyes closed. Dongfang thanked Li for saving his life and ran away. Tianzhen did not understand why Li let him go, and Tianzhu explained to his sister that their friend had a kind heart. As Yuanshou ran away, he smiled ominously, thinking that Li Jian was a fool to let him go, and that he would pay for his kindness one day. The boy became wary when, while trying to escape from the tomb, he noticed how many green ghostly hands with sharp nails overtook him. When the green ghosts grabbed Dongfang, he shouted that Li Jian was a shameless bastard, and Gu Tianzhen and her brother looked up in fear. Gu Tianzhu said that villains always get what they deserve, and it seemed like Mr. Li just didn't want to get his hands dirty with this guy. Jumping over rocks charged with Li Jian's power, Gu Tianzhen and her brother tried to catch up with our hero. The brother and sister caught up with Mr. Li and stopped behind him. Li Jian stood silently in front of the unusual metal statue. It was a large lamb's skull on an iron pedestal, with an old cracked blade thrust into the skull right between the eyes. Li Jian realized that without those scoundrels, he would have had to put in more effort to find this place, and this surprise came as a surprise. He grabbed the hilt of the blade. The boy saw that the sword was forged from a meteorite crystal, and even in this state it was incredibly valuable. The protagonist pulled the sword out of the lamb's skull. Li Jian understood that he had come to this ruined tomb for something other than that. When the boy did this, the lamb's skull woke up. Yellow eyes appeared in the sockets, and the hole in the forehead began to bleed. Our hero stood motionless and watched with complete calm as the skull gradually spewed out more and more blood. Afterwards, the lamb's skull began to spew blood out of itself like a fountain, and the red liquid began to flood everything around. Gu Tianzhen was scared and grabbed her brother because of how much blood there was, and the guy advised Li to be careful because it could be a trap. The protagonist closed his eyes and declared that the boys would have to deal with the remaining magical weapons in the ruins themselves. Tianju was perplexed. Without explaining anything else to the boys, Li Jian took a step forward to carefully step into the red puddle. The guy found himself in another dimension. He dived into a deep river of blood and began to confidently swim down, as if he had already been in a similar place. Tianjin began to worry that it might be dangerous. Tianju asked her not to worry, because Mr. Li had everything under control. At least Tianju hoped that was the case, while our hero sank deeper and deeper into the bottom of the bloody pond. When the guy reached a certain point, he found himself in a completely different space. Now everything around was painted blue, so our hero landed in the boiling bloody soul, the secret kingdom of the spiritual eye. He found himself on the ground from which giant horns protruded. Li Jian noticed the withered flower. He knew that the spiritual eye is the center of the creation of the world. It releases all spiritual energy. And surprisingly, the spiritual energy of the kingdom here was not as strong as he had previously imagined. He decided to use his power. The guy launched a stream of power into the withered flower. It was immediately torn from the stem. The flower was enveloped in a bright yellow transparent sphere. Li Jian knew that this flower only grows in places where energy is abundant. But due to the lack of energy, it stopped growing here. The protagonist unfurled the flower into petals, which were charged with his energy, and released them into the air. He was curious about where the eye was now. The petals of a withered flower led our hero to a building that was destroyed. Leaving only the foundation in ruins, Li Jian walked forward confidently to take a closer look at the place. Surrounded only by stones and broken columns, the main character hid behind one of the large stones and kept quiet. He looked warily at something in front of him. The guy saw that someone had placed a seal on the flow of spiritual energy. In front of him was a large stone sphere that was sealed. Li Jian touched the black symbols written on the ground, curious about what kind of power this man possessed. When our hero did this, it was like an earthquake. Rocks flew up, the ground rose right beneath him. A large magical seal appeared on the foundation of the destroyed building, emitting a bright turquoise light. Behind the bright blue flash, the paw of the hairy monster that guarded this ruined building with the spiritual eye appeared. An incarnate beast of the 9th level of Qi refining appeared before Li Jian and declared that those who intruded into the Forbidden Lands must die. Li Jian was surprised that the 9th level beast had such a developed intelligence. He asked the monster who it served. The 9th level incarnate beast leaped high above the ground and, instead of giving a clear answer, repeated once again that those who invaded the Forbidden Lands must die. The beast with twisted horns released its dark energy and shouted that Li Jian would pay. It was hostile. The protagonist was taken aback and looked up, silently observing the actions of the enraged monster guarding this place. The guy realized that the beast was not developed enough to communicate. Most likely, its owner had sealed the energy here. But Li did not understand why. While the beast tried to attack Li Jian, the boy deftly dodged the blows, the seal's aura showing that it could be removed. Li concluded that this beast needed to be purified, and he used the true body of the Tao against it, surrounding himself with a protective dome. The protagonist landed back on the ground with a thud, pulled out a magic blade and threw it at his enemy. The young cultivator commanded the blade to cut it, after which the weapon, charged with the power of a hero, went towards the beast. Li Jian used the Moon Path spell. The blade flew past the beast's face several times, forming a cross. The magic sword returned to its owner, and the giant gray beast with horns roared loudly, spitting out blood. The demonic beast took damage after our hero's attack, but did not stop repeating about trespassers. He still kept saying that the trespassers must die, and with these words he tried to attack Li Jian, but he jumped up off the ground in time. The next step in taming the hellish beast was the use of Lin Ye's blade, the second style. Only a small part of our hero's weapon remained. But the stub of the blade was still enough to use the strangulation spell against the beast and inflict even more damage on it. After this, the pendant that hung around the neck of the huge monster split into 2 equal parts. It was a devastating attack for the beast. The giant fell flat on the ground, and the protagonist jumped back, holding his blade in his hand. Li Jian frowned as he looked at the beast. Now it was time for the next step to destroy the seal. The demonic beast's face changed. Another identical eye grew next to its usual one, and its skin tone also changed to purple. The protagonist saw that the beast had revealed its true face. It now had 2 pairs of eyes, and there were also holes on its body that looked like red eyes. The demonic monster became even more angry at our hero and began to mutter something about the trespassers again. Li Jian grunted in pain as the beast reached out with its red-hot tentacle and grabbed him, preventing him from moving. Luckily, the protagonist managed to use his magic blade and cut the tentacle into several pieces, freeing himself. The boy jumped up from the ground after he was freed and launched Lin Ye's sword towards the beast again to attack it. Looking at this gigantic monster, the young cultivator was well aware that this monster was superior to him in strength. The protagonist realized that he was taking a great risk by fighting him, but he also understood that it was an opportunity. The world's cultivators are based either in heaven or on earth, and people go from the highest to the lowest. There is a colossal difference between them. The influence of cultivators is priceless. Earth cultivators were considered the most powerful masters, while heaven cultivators existed only in rumors. No one had seen them. In his past life, Lee traveled around the world and found an interesting technique called Earthwave, which requires pure and true spiritual power to use. Then the teacher helped him in this matter, so that now Li Jian will have an easier time fighting. Meanwhile, the beast released streams of energy from its 3 eyes. The protagonist tried to dodge the bright red streaks of light, the force with which the demonic beast was trying to kill the guy. Li Jian launched his blade again, trying to defend himself. He knew that the spiritual energy was now so discharged that it was almost impossible to advance in the waves of the earth. The giant beast guarding the spiritual eye sent a stream of red energy at the boy, but it hit the ground straight away, sending rocks flying everywhere. Li Jian told himself not to retreat even a single step. No matter how thorny the path was, he had no intention of retreating at all. He wanted to achieve his goal. Jumping up, the protagonist screamed, casting the slash spell. He came close to the beast and plunged the blade into it. The monster screamed loudly, clutching his face with his hand as our hero's attack was successful, and Li Jian fell to the ground. The boy saw that the seal and the soul were connected by one source, and if he wounded the soul, the seal should weaken. The protagonist's body began to absorb the power of the seal. Li Jian was ready to shatter into pieces, but to fulfill his plan, the main goal now was to achieve cultivation. So Li Jian stood face to face with the enemy and was ready to fight further. Placing 2 fingers to his face, the protagonist mentally addressed the ripples of the earth and the force of the wind, and then aloud commanded them to manifest. While the beast was destroying everything beneath it, our hero flew into the air and made a gesture with his hand, his body surrounded by streams of yellow light. Afterwards, the young man mentally turned to the spiritual sword he held in his hand and commanded it to pierce the soul of the beast. The protagonist cast the rift spell and sent out a spirit sword, which, leaving behind a bright streak of yellow light, pierced the beast. The monster began to roar even more furiously and open its mouth even wider. It began to spew out even more powerful streams of power. The streaks of bright red light did not touch the cultivator. He dodged, shouting that no one would stop him today. The monster's blood-red streams of power were aimed at the young man, but he, without giving up, was ready to attack the beast again. Holding the spirit sword in his hand, Li Jian shouted, commanding his weapon to sprinkle the air with blood and cut through thousands of bones with its wedge. Spiritual power of Qi erupted from our hero. The guy swung his hand and looked closely at the enemy. Afterwards, he cast the slash spell again and the Zanpakuto attacked the giant monster, piercing its face again. After this attack, Li Jian began to noticeably lose strength. The demon did not die. He was able to again strike the guy with his sinister power. The beast used the Eye of Vengeance against Li Jian. Dozens of red eyes appeared in the air and began to envelop the boy from all sides. The protagonist did not give up. He ordered to go back. Bright clots of spiritual Qi began to surround his body. Afterwards, dozens of powerful red beams rushed towards one point, where, according to the beast, his enemy was now located. The giant monster stopped rampaging. He saw a smoking crater in front of him. The monster believed that victory was his. The beast guarding this place calmed down. It closed its mouth and waited a little to make sure that its opponent was defeated. When everything had quieted down and only thick smoke remained in the arena, the monster turned around and walked slowly back to its lair. He had to stop and look back warily when he noticed Li Jian rise from the ashes. Safe and sound, the monster howled as it was overwhelmed by the enormous flow of the protagonist's most powerful force, and the monster was forced to return to battle. When the beast fell to the ground, Li Jian recited the spell and said, "Do not destroy, do not stand, do not harm, and do not open." The cultivation of the earth was laid. The monster opened its mouth again and bared its sharp teeth. It growled, calling for help from the red eyes that surrounded it. The spiritual Eye Seal Guardian was ready to fight again against Li Jian, who had activated his aura to the maximum. The beast went on the attack, and the protagonist used the cultivation stage, namely the fast movement technique, to dodge. When the protagonist was able to stand firmly on the ground again, he extended 2 fingers and used Lin Ye's blade technique, the first style. The boy cast the ice mirror spell, which literally froze the giant beast, surrounding it with a block of ice. But the ice was no match for this huge demonic beast. It roared loudly and got rid of it, after which it went on the attack again. However, the monster's magical weapon did not frighten our hero at all. He stood motionless and looked arrogantly at his enemy. After blocking the demonic beast's attack, Li Jian stepped aside and grabbed the blade charged with its true Qi. Now the guy's blade was like new. It emitted powerful streams of energy, and it could be used with renewed vigor against the monster. The protagonist decided to use the power of the Uexu blade, the second style, against the beast. He swung it before attacking. The young cultivator cast the pillar spell, after which the boy multiplied, and now an entire army of Li Jian was fighting against the beast. Li Jian warned the seal guard that his end had come. All of his clones were ready to pounce on the beast with swords. The giant monster froze as multiple Li Jian began to attack it with their blades at the same time, inflicting damage wherever they could. The beast opened its mouth wide in agony as the magical yellow flames began to rapidly drain its life force. There was no trace left of the monster. Li Jian didn't know who had placed him as a guard, but thanks to him, he had achieved the Earthwave technique. The protagonist dared to suggest that this power was much more powerful than his previous one, and he was curious about the reason. Li Jian had many questions but no answers. The spiritual eye would give him a huge amount of energy, and he believed that he would regain his strength. Meanwhile, Gu Tianjin felt that the smell in the tomb had become stronger, and her brother also noticed that something had changed. On the land of the spiritual eye, snow-white flowers finally began to bloom, forming a flowering meadow. Grandfather Gu, who was sitting at the table at home drinking tea at that time, also felt that something had changed. The old man, looking out the window from which an unusual breeze blew, declared that the day his family had been waiting for a long time had arrived. The following events took place on the top floor of a tall, modern building where the Dongfang family lived. The head of the Dongfang Yuan family praised Mr. Ji, saying that he was a talented young man and that his son should follow his example. Ji Xuan thanked him for his words and said that the Dongfang family has influence in the field of drug research and development, and he looks forward to cooperation. Mr. Dongfang became wary when he heard a beep in the earpiece in his ear. Someone was trying to tell their boss something. The man apologized to the guest for having to interrupt his conversation, and Ji Xuan said that everything was fine. Mr. Dongfang was told through the earpiece that they had bad news, and the man in the monocle demanded an explanation. The gentleman was informed that the indicator installed on the young gentleman's body had stopped transmitting a signal, which meant that he was dead. Upon hearing the news of his son's death, Dongfang did not show it and briefly replied that he understood everything. Zixuan asked what had happened. Dongfang Yuan lied to the young man, saying that the dogs were causing a lot of trouble, and he had already sent a subordinate to deal with it. They clinked their glasses when Yuan declared that their business was much more important, especially since the Dongfang family would prepare the goods for Zixuan in the best possible condition. The man told the boy that he would just go out to get some goods, and he took a sip of wine and asked Mr. Yuan to be kind. Dongfang Yuan walked out of the room and closed the door behind him, removing his smiling mask when he was left alone. Mr. Dongfang was furious, believing that Gu Wen had killed his son, and he intended to deal with them all once his family became part of the organization. Several days later, the protagonist was still spending time near the spiritual eye, levitating above it in a meditative pose, feeding on its energy. Suddenly, a small chest appeared near the eye, the lock of which was in the shape of a cat. The chest was shrouded in dark water. The chest landed with a splash right next to Li Jian, but the boy sat with his back to it and didn't pay any attention. A contented black cat jumped out of the chest and began to meow, happy that he was finally free. The cat, one eye blue and the other yellow, looked warily at the boy he saw nearby. The cat with a bell on its leg came closer to the protagonist, who was still busy practicing with his eyes closed. She thought she was delirious when she saw a heavenly-level Taoist in front of her. She dreamed of becoming just as talented and not having to deal with cat problems. Li Jian finally opened his eyes and noticed the presence of the cat. He looked at her with a dissatisfied look. The frightened cat meowed loudly as the protagonist, closing his eyes again, roughly pushed her away from him. The cat became angry and released her claws. She screamed, asking why Li Jian started fighting, and demanded an apology from the guy. Li Jian didn't pay any attention to her, as he was thinking about the amount of spiritual energy his body could absorb. The guy stood up and left, leaving the cat of Omen to continue to be angry. He was thinking about increasing the efficiency of the transformation of true energy. The cat blossomed with pride when our hero finally noticed her and asked if she really was looking into the heavens themselves. He turned around and asked the Omen cat how she had managed to get through the barrier here. She meowed, saying that she didn't know it. She was grabbed and shoved into this rotten box, and when she woke up, she was here. The cat was dumbfounded when our hero arrogantly replied that he had no desire to get involved with her, since she didn't even know how she ended up there. This made her angry again. The cat of omens began to change the color of her fur. She meowed, claiming that she would now become bigger. The boy looked back warily when he saw the cat trying to pounce on his back with its paws. A moment later, the cat turned into a beauty with purple hair, but her cat ears remained in place, and she told the hero that Taoists cannot lie. The girl asked him in his ear if he would allow her to become his companion, because cats are beautiful and very useful. She said that it was okay that her cultivation was only at an intermediate level, since she had not yet forgotten the basic skills. The cat girl looked at our hero with wide eyes and confusion as he gloomily told her to get lost. The boy activated a blue protective wall around himself, which pushed the cat girl back several meters. The human-shaped omen cat fell to the ground and began to drag its claws, hissing as it glared at Li Jian. The girl looked at the guy with a smirk on her face and declared that a cat never makes a mistake in her choice. Covering her face with her hand, she narrowed her multicolored cat eyes and declared that Li Jian was a true Taoist because she decided so. The protagonist looked into the girl's eye with a cat-like pupil that shimmered with cosmic hues. Li Jian's face showed obvious fear as he continued to stare straight into the omen cat girl's eyes for a while. The cat's gaze had an effect on his consciousness. Our hero became terribly scared. His pupils narrowed to the size of peas from fear. The guy seemed to find himself in his previous form again. He remembered the words about how the feeling of failure and overcoming adversity is not good. No matter how much he trained, he couldn't escape fate. These were the words he heard in his head as he knelt before the cat of omens in the form of Bai Shu. The girl extended her hand to him and, smiling slyly, declared that she would help him overcome all troubles as long as the guy was on his side. A crushed Bai Shu, who was kneeling on the ash-gray ground, stretched out his hand towards the girl with the last of his strength. But the next second he came to his senses and pulled the girl by the ear, asking if she really thought that illusions would work on him. The cat complained that she was in pain. She admitted her guilt and promised not to contradict her elders anymore and asked permission to be with him. The protagonist let go of her purple ear and said that he would help her live longer if the cat girl helped him survive the disaster. At this time, Gu Tianju and his younger sister were still in the tomb at the same place where Li Jian had left them. Tianzhen was meditating. The red-haired boy was amazed when he looked at his sister. The aura that surrounded the girl seemed impressive. A stunned Tianju asked his sister why her strength had become even greater, and she replied that she felt like meditation was giving her energy. The guy was stunned because the thought crept into his head that his sister was a genius, and he turned out to be a simple loser. The boys jumped up from the floor and became alert when they saw that the lamb statue had become active again. Tianzhen noticed that her friend Li Jian had returned, but he was not alone. A girl was following him, and they gradually emerged from the bloody pond. The red-haired guy asked who this unknown lady was who returned to the tomb with Mr. Li. The protagonist looked at the girl in bewilderment when she, blushing, introduced herself as Shui Yu, the companion of the Taoist Li. After the boys left the tomb, our hero agreed to accept the cat girl into his home, and they spent time together. At dinner, Tianzhen was unhappy that Li had a companion, but she didn't say anything about it, while Shui Yu praised the food. As Li Jian ate, he thought about the surge of energy nearby and the progress in his cultivation. He needed to find the eye as soon as possible. Tianzhen happily informed Li Jian that she had reached the 4th level, and the boy supported the girl's achievement without much emotion. Li Jian asked how her older brother was doing. He felt awkward, but he said that he was still working on improving. Tianzhu asked if the gentleman had heard about what happened to Yuan Shuo, since they were worried that they would take it out on Madame Ji and Madame Liu. The protagonist assured the boy that there was no need to worry, and that everything would be fine, while Gu Yu gnawed on the fish and meowed contentedly, praising the dish. Soon, on the roof of a tall building, our hero's subordinate, Laikun, was arguing with someone, claiming that the one he was looking for was not there. Laikun argued with the killer, who claimed that the guy was lying because he was a professional and it was impossible to deceive him. Mr. Li's subordinate became angry and warned that if the killer did not understand in words, he would have to explain everything to him with his fists. The killer shouted that he intended to demonstrate his abilities to the guy and took out his blade, after which he immediately rushed forward. The blue-haired boy screamed that his blade would pierce Laikun, but the boy held out a shield made of the strongest metal alloy in front of him. Laikun was stunned when he saw that the killer's blade had actually managed to pierce even his strongest shield. The guy declared that his task was completed, although he and Laikun had very similar strengths and even capabilities. Under his black mask, the killer hid his arrogant smile and told the wounded Laikun that he was still better. The killer went on the attack again. He screamed, casting the shining blade spell, and then Laikun dropped the shield from his hands completely. Laikun clenched his teeth in pain and anger. He understood that the wound he received would not heal for a long time due to the metal the weapon was made of. The guy decided to counterattack and shouted that the killer was celebrating too early, after which he fired a cannon at the villain. The bullet missed the enemy. He ordered the dog to be quiet because he was the best killer and cast the Blade Shake spell. Now, Laikun protected his entire body, instantly donning a suit and a helmet with a mask protecting his face. Our hero watched the battle from the roof of another building, and Shui Yu said that she had only just dozed off. And here, the carnage was in full swing. The cat girl noticed that the big guy seemed to be about to die, and asked Li Jian if he wanted to help him. Lai replied that there was no need, since ancient times battles were fought to the death, and only the chosen ones could achieve anything. So Shui Yu accused him of being insensitive. The guy believed that if a person cannot defeat an opponent of equal strength, he has no right to follow him. Meanwhile, his subordinate Laikun was suffering defeat. Laikun fell to his knees before his opponent, his strength leaving him. The killer held his blade in front of him and declared that resistance was useless. Our hero's subordinate lay on the ground and groaned in pain. His protective suit was damaged. The guy with bright blue hair had no intention of sparing his opponent. He sent him to hell and was going to attack him again. Laikun closed his eyes and began to immerse himself in memories of the past. he heard someone's voice calling his name. Xiaogu recalled a moment from his childhood. His mother asked him if he was secretly reading novels again, and he said that he wanted to live like the characters in the book. Then his mother told him that a person becomes strong by striving to protect the most valuable thing he has, and persistence is the key to success. Little Xiaogu looked at his mother with eyes shining with delight. He completely agreed with her words. The golden bracelet that Xiaogu had previously received from his boss, Li Jian, activated, and the man grabbed the blade of his opponent's sword with his bare hand. Lycan's eyes glowed red as he bent the killer's blade and declared through clenched teeth that he wanted to become stronger. The blue-haired boy was stunned when he saw that his corrosion spell didn't work against Lycan. The big man Xiaogu attacked his opponent, causing the young man in the yellow shirt to fly back. Lycan found the strength to rise to his feet again, his body erupting in a powerful yellow magical flame. The man's body was transformed. He became more muscular, partially covered in metal. Now Lycan was at the 10th level of superpowers. The killer was in shock. He did not understand how his opponent managed to grow his arm back, and the metal on his body was different. Enraged, Lycan charged his strong metal fist with magical power and swung it to pounce on the boy. Lycan's giant ghost fist attacked the killer. It was hundreds of times bigger than the guy, so he didn't have a chance. The clothes on the killer's body began to turn into rags. The guy in the black mask groaned in pain. The blue-haired boy fell to the ground, after which a bright flash of flame appeared, and all the things flew in different directions. When everything calmed down, the killer began to scream in indignation, asking Lycan why he burned his clothes. Because it was just a fight. An enraged Lycan shouted back, advising his opponent not to fool around but to watch the fight, and was ready to attack again. The main character and his cat, who were watching the fight, saw that the battle had already come to an actual end. Lycan was genuinely happy when, after his victorious fight, he noticed that his master Li was standing right behind him. Li Jian congratulated the boy on reaching the 10th level and promised that he would teach him several training methods later. The boy replied that without the bracelet he was given, his inner strength would never have been released, and he thought how kind Mr. Li was to him. Lycan stood before the gentleman, demonstrating a gesture of respect, and our hero announced that he would deal with the killer himself. The guy with blue hair warned our hero that he was a professional, so he would rather lose his life than tell anything. Not wanting to get his hands dirty, Li Jian ordered his omen cat Shuiyu to go and talk to the killer. When the cat jumped off her owner's shoulder, she stepped onto the ground again in human form, but still with a golden bell on her ankle. Shuiyu glanced coquettishly at the killer and told her master that she would do it with great pleasure. A moment later, the killer opened his eyes and was very scared. He was supposed to be on a mission but found himself in a hot bath. He became even more confused when a woman put her foot on him and asked if he didn't know where he was. In front of the guy in the bathtub, directly across from him, sat a red-haired woman. He knew her as Aunt May. She declared that he was in heaven. The stunned guy screamed, asking what she was doing there since she was supposed to go abroad, and the woman replied that she was here to reward him. The woman praised him for being a professional at intimidating and luring enemies into traps, and without him, they would not have gotten rid of Li Jian. The guy shouted that he owed his professionalism to his management, and that it was his duty to solve the head's problems, and he did not dare ask for any reward. Aunt May agreed that he was a real pro, and the frightened boy screamed, asking the woman what she was up to. The red-haired woman kept trying to seduce the guy, but he kept shouting, claiming that he treated her completely differently. Aunt May's face instantly turned sinister, as she concluded that this was the boy's last moment and took his life. The killer screamed loudly, and that was the last moment of his life. His body remained where he fell asleep before the last illusion. Lycan was shocked. He was curious about what the killer saw before he died and why he died. And Shuiyu said that she thought he was having fun. Shuiyu said that the guy was sent by the Blackwater organization, which has a person named Aunt May. But the gang is not connected to the Dongfang family. Our hero, crossing his arms over his chest, had no desire to get to the bottom of this, and ordered his subordinates to go and find out. The following action took place in the territory of the Blackwater gang, in the city of Chenghe. 3 guys in black suits were carrying bags on their backs. The Blackwater boys were carrying goods for the Mu family. One of them doubted its quality, but the other ordered to kill it, because the main thing was quantity. One of the guys looked up and noticed something flying straight towards them. This object looked like a small rocket. When the grenade hit its target, it detonated. There was a loud explosion, and the wave threw the guys in different directions. Lycan showed up and attacked these guys. He stood with a gun instead of a hand, and said that it was time to carry out a cleanup. The Blackwater gang members shouted, asking what Lycan was doing on their gang's territory, and they were ready to kill the intruder. But they didn't have time to attack Lycan because Shuiyu intervened. The girl scattered them in different directions and told them to calm down. After she dealt with them, the cat girl called the Blackwater guys weaklings who couldn't even make her laugh. Nearby, there was another bandit from Blackwater who fired a machine gun burst at our heroes, wishing them death. The girl glanced sideways at the man and declared that she could see all the bullet trajectories, so the bandit was wasting his time now. Meanwhile, Lycan launched another projectile at the surviving Blackwater bandit, who was rapidly approaching his target. When the explosion occurred, Shuiyu didn't even react. She complained of hunger and expressed the hope that the owner would invite her to dinner when all this was over. The man with long hair, who was inside the building at the time and not outside, became alert when he noticed something happening outside the window. The leader of the Blackwater gang, Blind Snake, asked why there was so much noise outside, assuming that the white tiger was causing trouble again. The guy sitting opposite didn't even have time to answer, when suddenly the main character burst into the room through the window. The blind man summoned his ghost cobra to defend himself and shouted, asking the intruder who was there. The protagonist dealt with the ghostly cobra with one swing of his sword and, at the door, asked the gang leader if he had ordered the guy's murder. The blind snake saw a cultivator with dozens of kills to his credit in front of him and said that he now understood why his best mercenary had not returned. Our hero waved his weapon again and honestly stated that he had come for the gang leader, so the man should not mess with him. The one with glasses, who had been sitting with him in the room before, came to Blind Snake's aid, and he managed to block Li Jian's attack. The protagonist frowned when he saw the man in front of him, who he believed was in the final stages of cultivation. The girl reminded Blind Man that important negotiations would take place today, which must not be disrupted under any circumstances, so that he would not have to answer to Aunt May. The Blind Snake replied that he was currently the temporary leader of the gang, and whether Lady Mu could support him depended on their cooperation. The girl, holding her green flame at the ready, glanced sideways at the blind serpent and said that she hoped that he would make the right decision. The protagonist asked why the girl, who had the ability to become an outstanding person, got involved with this gang. She became angry and shouted that it was none of his business and tried to attack Li Jian, but he easily protected himself with his shield. The protagonist looked behind him warily when he noticed an ominous creature with round red eyes. A loud cry echoed throughout the room, and someone shouted that no one dared to interfere with the Mu family's negotiations. It turned out to be a wooden cabinet that suddenly came to life and attempted to attack our hero. Li Jian increased the distance between himself and the furious furniture, wondering if the girl had brought the wardrobe to life. The girl had as her assistants not only a bulky animated wardrobe, but also a white wooden chair that stood next to her. The formidable girl with glasses warned Li Jian that if he approached her, he would regret having been born. The protagonist concluded that it was quite entertaining and grabbed his blade, which was charged with his energy. She became even more angry when she saw that the guy decided to go after her chimeras, armed with this broken blade. The girl asked him not to make her laugh and immediately cast the Flame of Atomic spell, after which her chair attacked Li Jian with blue fire. Li Jian responded with Ling Yue's sword technique and swung it, forming a crescent moon in the air. The lady with glasses was shocked when she saw that her fire, which melts metal, could not cope with this stump. The girl got scared and covered herself with her chair when she saw how easily our hero dealt with her toy. She ducked down and looked up to see that the room's ceiling had been replaced by a triangular opening that opened up to the sky. The woman realized she was in big trouble when she saw Li Jian deal with her puppet so easily. She reassured herself that nothing was lost yet, and Li Jian rushed forward to attack the girl again. The girl extended her hand forward and advised the protagonist not to underestimate her. She had no intention of giving up. A chimeric cabinet entered the battle, opening its mouth to attack the guy, and pistols rained down from it onto the ground. Observing this picture, the main character concluded that this girl knows how to subjugate a large number of chimeras. The pistol started firing at Li Jian, but the guy dodged in time, so the bullets did not harm him. Grinning, Li Jian told the girl that it was good that she had experience in the real world. But there was one thing. According to the guy, the girl had not yet grown to his level, and then he swung his blade, destroying her chimera cabinet. The chimera chair bravely defended its owner, and the gang leader, stunned by Li Jian's abilities, asked who he was. From his past life, Li Jian remembered fighting with the Tang clan. They had similar abilities, but the difference was noticeable, and the reason could be a lack of spiritual energy. In a second, the protagonist deprived the piece of furniture of its miraculous properties, and it collapsed to the ground, turning into an ordinary chair. Mu admitted defeat and suggested discussing other matters. She stated that what the guy mentioned had nothing to do with her. The protagonist demanded that the girl tell everything about the people behind them. But suddenly the stones that were lying on the floor began to rise into the air, and the space was filled with thin turquoise strings. These were the threads that Madame Mu controlled with her own hands. She said how easily Li Jian fell for her trick and activated the sonic drill. Then the girl cast the network spell, and these threads rushed straight at the guy, just as stones began to fly at him from all sides. Li Jian concluded that Mu had shown subservience to make him relax his caution, so no one could be trusted. He realized that the girl had aimed the threads at his vital organs, thinking that the guy would not have time to attack her. The stones surrounded our hero from all sides, and Li Jian turned into a rock, losing the ability to move his arms and legs. The blind snake asked Lady Mu why she was hesitating and suggested that she kill the boy. But she asked him if he really thought she was capable of doing so. Our resourceful hero cast the blade spell, which in an instant cut a huge hole in the ceiling of the house. This allowed Li Jian to free himself from the stones and threads that Lady Mu had used against him. Madame Mu began to panic, screaming and asking what was going on when she saw the enemy's abilities firsthand. With his eyes glowing red, Li Jian admitted that he had not originally planned to take the girl's life, but apparently he had no other choice. The blind snake shouted, advising the girl to use her power to the fullest. Mu simultaneously used all her chimeras against the guy. She was stunned when her chimera's atomic flame began to attack the closet itself. Not the main character. Blind Snake was also in shock. Now that the chimera cabinet stood behind our hero and obeyed him, Lady Mu asked why he was controlling her chimera. Legion told the girl to move away, and Blind Snake carefully asked if she had any other plan and asked her to quickly finish off the guy. She deduced that Li was from an influential family, so she introduced herself as Mu Fei, the second daughter of the Mu family, and apologized for her ignorance. The protagonist, keeping his hands in his pockets and controlling her chimeras, assumed that the girl was simply tired of fighting with him. Mu Fei bowed to the master and told him to make himself at home while she went to get some tea. And Blind Snake panicked, reminding her of their agreement. The girl asked the snake if he still didn't understand anything, and said that her family would not have paid attention to him if he didn't have the spiritual stones. The blind snake asked the girl how dare she say such a thing and warned that the Dongfang family and Aunt Mei would not let it go unnoticed. The man groaned before passing away after Li Jian struck him down with his blade and told him to calm down, as Dongfang and Mei would soon end up the same way as him. Meanwhile, Xiang Nan, the daughter of the head of the underground arena, recalled the moment when our hero saved her from captivity the day before. She sighed heavily, dreaming of Li Jian, who left without waiting for her to wake up. She was already planning how they would fall in love with each other and have children. The father intervened, stroked his daughter's head and told her that she needed to think about education, not about boys. He told his daughter that Li Jian was a high flyer who enjoyed the support of the Gu family, so it was unlikely that she would succeed with him. Xiang Nan smiled and asked her not to worry because one day, Li Jian would turn to the death arena for help, and the girl would see him again. After our hero dealt with the leader of the Black Water Gang, worried male subordinates ran into the room. A whole crowd of men in black suits appeared before Li Jian. They still had no idea who was standing in front of them. The protagonist stood with his back to the crowd of bandits, turning his head to the side before answering them who he was. The guy glanced sideways at the men, his red eyes flashing, and asked if they really wanted to fight him. The crowd of men all froze in fear and stared at Li Jian, sweat running down their faces, and they remained quietly silent. The bandits in black suits simultaneously fell to their knees before our hero and screamed in unison, begging him to accept them into his team. Li Jian looked at them with disdain and called the guys smart because they clearly didn't want to fight him. Zhu Wei, the second leader of the gang, said that the strongest one occupies the top position, so Blind Snake took on the role of the leader of Black Water. According to the man, the person who defeats the leader becomes their boss. These are the rules set by Aunt Mei. The main character, when he heard about Aunt Mei, about whom everyone was chattering incessantly, walked over to the chair and leaned his hand on it to sit down. The guy sat back in his chair and told his new subordinates to tell the woman that the gang leader had changed. Ms. Mu concluded that this man was used to keeping everything under his control. Mr. Li was not lacking in arrogance. She knew that Aunt Mei had a very close relationship with the Dark Pavilion, and Zhu Wei declared that they would immediately take their leave. As he left, he smirked, mentally advising Li Jian not to anger this woman, because as soon as Mei dealt with him, the position of gang leader would again pass to him. Ms. Mu told the boy that her family specializes in the production of medicinal raw materials and supplements. But due to a lack of technology, they were forced to cooperate with the gang. The girl asked hopefully if the protagonist could give her family a chance now that he was leading the Blackwater. Li Jian scratched his face and told Madame Mu that he wanted to personally see the product her family was producing. He sternly asked where they were, and the girl immediately admitted that it was a place in Clear Bay, 3 hours away by car. Li Jian told her to take him there. Mu tried to explain to him that the guy would not be allowed in without a pass, and she needed time to get permission. The main character went to the exit. He told the girl to return to him immediately as soon as she received permission to enter that place. The new leader of the Black Water Gang left the mansion and was met on the street by his new subordinates, as well as Lai Kun and Shui Yu. The cat girl was delighted when she finally saw her master. She admitted that she had been waiting for him for a long time. Li Jian told the girl to go with him, and Lai Kun ordered her to stay here to ensure that there was no commotion. Shui Yu was very pleased that the master took her with him, and ordered the big boy to stay and guard the house. The protagonist and Shui Yu returned to the Gu mansion. After a hard day, the girl returned to her cat form and enjoyed eating fish. Gu Tianjin petted the cat and advised her to eat more slowly, and Tianju brought Grandpa Gu to talk to our hero. Old Man Gu congratulated Li Jian on his strength reaching the next level, and the boy replied that he would have spent more time if his grandfather hadn't helped him. The head of the family expressed great gratitude to the guy for returning victorious from the arena and bringing his grandchildren safe and sound. Tianju said that his grandfather had specially chosen this residence for him. Nothing would hinder his cultivation here, and security was top-notch. The boy handed Mr. Li the key, and our hero noticed that even the key emanated spiritual energy, and it seemed that the family had made an effort to please him. The protagonist gladly accepted the key to the new mansion. Grandpa Gu said that it was the least his family could do for him. Li Jian began to rise from his chair when Old Man Gu reported that they had sent more people to search for the spiritual eye, and there would be results soon. The old man looked at our hero with fear as he approached him, extended his hand, and declared that they were more useful than he had expected. Grandfather Gu didn't have time to say anything before Li Jian placed 2 fingers on his forehead and began to influence him with his energy. Gu Tianju screamed, afraid for his grandfather. The boy turned pale, deeply worried about his beloved old man. Tianjin also looked warily towards her grandfather. She felt some familiar sensations. The protagonist, using his power, caused the head of the Gu family to fly out of his wheelchair and collapse onto the floor. Grandpa Gu gasped in pain as he fell backward onto the floor with such force that the glasses flew off the gray-haired old man's face. Tianju asked Mr. Li why he did this. The guy replied that he could not help but reward them since his strength had increased. The head of the Gu family tried to get up from the floor, his long gray hair covering his grandfather's face, and smoke enveloped everything around him. The old man found the strength to rise to his feet on his own. He carefully straightened his knees, helping himself with his hand. Grandpa Gu was stunned. He had lived for a long time only in a wheelchair, but now he stood up on his own feet. The elderly man screamed with delight. He declared that he could now stand on his own feet. He was overwhelmed with emotion. The red-haired boy still watched his grandfather with concern on his face. He was also stunned by this. The old man could not hold back his tears. He admitted that he had already resigned himself to spending the rest of his life in a wheelchair. The grandfather fell to his knees before our hero and said that he was grateful for his kindness and hoped that someday he could repay him in kind. The protagonist cast a cold glance at the old man and told him to be loyal to him. And then the grandfather would gain even greater power. One sunny day, the action took place on the grounds of a luxurious mansion, next to which there was a swimming pool. At this time, Aunt May was relaxing, basking in the sun in the pool. The red-haired woman turned around when her phone rang. The woman sighed heavily and complained that she was not even allowed to relax, and began to climb the stairs out of the pool. Aunt May threw on her shirt, picked up her phone, and answered the call. The red-haired woman was told something on the other end of the line, and she briefly replied to her subordinate that she understood everything. The muscular guy who was with her asked May what happened. She replied that it was nothing, just some boy who imagined himself to be the leader of her gang. The man put his hand on her shoulder and asked Aunt May if she needed his help. The woman replied that she did not, because she would teach him a lesson herself. When it got dark outside, the next events took place at another residence, built in the traditional Chinese style. Shui Yu was there too, hiding in the tall grass in the form of a cat and carefully observing what was happening around her. Tianju brought our hero here and said that this residence was designed personally by his grandfather. He asked Li if he liked the house. Looking around, the protagonist thought that this was much better than his previous shack, and told the guy that the house was tolerable. The red-haired boy said that in that case they dare not disturb Li Jian anymore, and his little sister said goodbye to him. The protagonist noticed that there was a high concentration of spiritual energy in the air, and he hoped that he could repair the blade here. Li Jian immediately sat down on the floor in a meditative pose to concentrate on repairing his weapon. The guy activated the forge for repairs and decided to use the red pearl to repair his weapon. A bloodthirsty boar emerged from the furnace and took the broken weapon and the blood pearl. Li Jian promised him his beloved brains if he helped him. The boar went back to the forge, and the cat Shui Yu said that she had no doubt that her master owned such an ancient magical cauldron. The magical cauldron activated and began to work on repairing our hero's broken blade, erupting in purple flames. Li Jian was unhappy that the cauldron was taking so long to do this. He wanted to find another cauldron, because he couldn't spend so much time repairing the sword. The eyes of the forge began to spew out even more powerful purple flame, and the cauldron stopped standing in one place. Afterwards, surrounded by purple flames, the hilt of Li Jian's repaired sword emerged from the cauldron, still glowing red-hot. The protagonist carefully watched the repair process, and in the end, the magic cauldron released all its excess energy. Li Jian finally received his sword. Its appearance had been changed. The handle was now golden and decorated with a blue stone. Our hero took his weapon in his hand and praised the boar because the sword had become better than before. But he continued to talk about brains. The guy asked him to wait because he wanted to check the blade first. After these words, he jumped high above the ground. Li Jian closed his eyes and continued to fly upward, gripping the sword tightly with both hands as he mentally activated Ling Yue's sword technique. As the boy landed with one foot on the rock, he swung his weapon, wanting to test the invisibility move. Now the blade did not leave bright, noticeable marks in the air. In stealth mode, it began to split everything in its path. The invisibility worked, and the protagonist was able to smoothly cut through the top of a huge rock and several lampposts with his blade. The guy was delighted. He could not have imagined such power in his past life. He was faced with an unusual sensation, but a moment later, our hero's expression changed dramatically. Sweat ran down his face and fear appeared in his eyes. Li Jian burst into red flames. He screamed in pain. The guy did not understand why he lost control of his strength. The guy concluded that he had poured in too much energy. He lost the ability to stay in the air and began to fall flat on the ground. The protagonist fell to the ground, raising a thick cloud of dust above him. His new sword also landed down and stuck into the ground. Li Jian saw his cat nearby and asked what it was. Shui Yu replied that it seemed like someone had experienced the paradise rebound. The cat giggled and said that her master, although he had great power, still did not know all the intricacies of the foundation of heaven. The main character was perplexed because he really didn't know what the foundation of heaven was, because the cat didn't tell him about it. Shui Yu explained that the power of the heavenly foundation lies in the release and accumulation of spiritual power, and ordinary energy should not be poured into the spiritual cauldron to prevent leakage. Transforming into a cat girl, Shui Yu said how lucky her master was to have him, as the dual cultivation would help him. Li Bin remained silent, looking at her with irritation. He asked if he couldn't use the energy he was used to, since he had a different level of strength. The girl explained that the foundation of heaven quickly absorbs ordinary energy, and it will not be possible to replenish it at the same speed. The conversation about suitable spells and the golden elixir was interrupted by Lai Kun, who came and informed the master that Lady Mu had arrived. The purple-haired girl reported to the protagonist that she had received permission for Li to visit the production site. The next day, our hero and his company immediately set off there, using an expensive black SUV. In the forest, they were met by a gray-haired man. Mrs. Mu told him that she wanted to show the deposit to a high-ranking gentleman. The old man with the monocle replied that the pass only allowed one person through, and asked which of them was the high-ranking guest. Madame Mu felt awkward because she didn't expect that this cat girl would go with Li Jian, since they couldn't let her in either. Shui Yu was extremely indignant when Madame Mu said that the girl would not be able to go with them. And for Li Jian, this was not a problem. When Lady Mu told the boy that Shui Yu was his subordinate, she became angry and shouted that she was a companion, not a subordinate. Mrs. Mu apologized to her and said that in that case, she should have taken 2 permits. But she turned her head away and shouted that she didn't need her apology. The cat's expression immediately changed, her eyes shining with delight as Madame Mu handed her a stalk of catnip. The cat girl jumped forward to grab the catnip with her hands, but screamed that she was no ordinary cat. The old man asked to see his guest out, while Shui Yu lay in the clearing licking catnip. The mine guard, Mrs. Mu, and our hero began walking along a forest path, surrounded by thick thorny vines. The grandfather with the monocle warned our hero that the medicinal herbs in this garden were of great value. They approached the huge iron doors, and the gray-haired man asked Mrs. Mu and her guest to take care of the plants. When Li Jian was allowed inside the garden, he was amazed to see how many spiritual plants there were in this place. Medicinal herbs are divided into 4 types: heavenly, earthly, and swan. The heavenly type plant can regenerate flesh and bones, and the earthly type can stop bleeding. Li knew that he couldn't handle the level of these plants at the moment, but Mrs. Mu allowed the guest to take anyone he liked. But our hero did not respond to the woman's words. She addressed him again when he walked forward, looking at some tree. He didn't expect to see a Zhuan-level spiritual herb here. His teacher in his past life would have given everything to obtain this plant. Mu warned that they had higher quality plants in the highlands, but Li Jian replied that this herb was exactly what he needed. When Li Jian used his strength to pluck this spiritual herb, the puzzled Lady Mu guessed that the guy had a sharp eye. The boy knew that spiritual herbs were difficult to turn into elixir, but in liquid form they had a much greater healing effect. So Li Jian began to use the power of water to treat the plant. The woman was shocked to see that the gentleman wanted to dissolve the herb. After the young cultivator wrapped the spiritual plant in magical grass, he clenched both his fists tightly. Madame Mu began to cover her head with her hands when Li spread his arms out to the sides, and bright green streaks filled the area around her. The worried woman asked if everything was okay with Li Jian. The guy remained silent, closed his eyes, and continued working. Bright green stripes drew even squares on the grass. Our hero had changed dramatically, and new clothes appeared on his body. He appeared in a completely new image. The guy thought that people are used to enjoying the benefits of nature, but you have to pay for everything. Taking a few steps forward, the protagonist closed his eyes again and concentrated. He touched one of the green drops with 2 fingers. By influencing the green ball, he charged it with his energy and threw it forward, repeating mentally that the strongest will survive. A powerful explosion was heard in the garden, a bright green flash blinded the eyes, and the main character returned to his former familiar appearance. The stones flew in all directions, and Mrs. Mu stood nearby in bewilderment, not understanding what Li Jian was doing. The woman thought that Mr. Lee wanted to destroy everything here, but our hero was glad that he finally understood from his own experience what spiritual grass is. The protagonist cautiously looked back, and Mrs. Mu was startled when someone shouted indignantly, asking who was there. The Mu family's daughter-in-law, Luo Chunxin, a high-level cultivator, appeared and shouted, "Is Li really tired of living since he intends to destroy her family's domain?" Mu began to apologize to the girl, and Li Jian realized that the medicinal herbs gave the Mu family a good advantage since a high-level cultivator appeared in front of him. Blushing with anger, Luo Chunxin screamed, asking why Mu didn't do anything when she saw that this man wanted to destroy their garden. The daughter-in-law pounced on the woman, screaming at her not to think she could get away with it just because she was her father's favorite. The protagonist stood up for Lady Mu and grabbed Luo's hand to prevent her from hitting her, saying that it was he who caused the commotion in the garden, not her. The girl pulled her hand away and jumped back. She screamed, demanding to know where he came from and why he still dared to defend this woman. Luo Chunxin activated Wood Breath and shouted that the guy would pay for his insolence. She wanted to attack him with 2 green spheres. Streams of green energy rushed past our hero because he managed to dodge. The guy put his hands in his pockets and asked the Mu family's daughter-in-law if this was all she could do, which made her even more angry. The girl frowned and, clenching her teeth in rage, said that Li Jian did not value his life at all, since he dared to behave like that. Luo Chunxin crossed her arms and told our hero that the boy couldn't even imagine the power she possessed. Mrs. Mu looked at her daughter-in-law in shock, and our hero asked why he couldn't imagine it. Sweating from the tension, a frightened Mrs. Mu said that her daughter-in-law was absolutely furious about what happened. Luo Chunxin summoned a green magical creature as her assistant and rushed forward to pounce on the guy. She wished for Li Jian to go to hell, and with these words the girl threw several blasts of her green power at him. Looking indifferently at these bright stripes of green light, the protagonist decided that it was time to try out his improved body. Mrs. Mu started running away, frightened by her daughter-in-law's attack, while at the same time she shouted at the guy to get out of there too. But Li Jian stood still, using his strength to protect his body from Luo Chunxin's attack. Luo Chunxin clearly didn't expect that his opponent would be able to block her attack, and she was taken aback when she saw this. When the smoke cleared, the protagonist looked at the girl with contempt and asked if she hadn't calmed down yet. Luo Chunxin became even more angry and shouted, asking where he had so much impudence, since Li was in the Mu family's territory. The girl began to draw spiritual energy from all the medicinal plants that grew nearby in order to use them for attack. So she filled herself with energy and became even stronger. The girl screamed that no one dared to humiliate her, and Li Jian himself forced her to take extreme measures. Mrs. Mu explained to the boy that his daughter-in-law had used the dancing willow leaves technique, so he needed to be careful. Li Jian saw that the opponent had decided to use a wood artifact to temporarily enhance her skills, and he realized that her current level was far from the lowest level. The woman tried to calm her daughter-in-law down, declaring that it was she who brought Mr. Li here, and that she bore full responsibility. Enraged, Chunxin asked Lady Mu who she was to tell her what to do, and she warned that she would deal with the woman too. The creature she summoned opened its mouth and began to spew out a powerful stream of green magical leaf energy. The protagonist managed to protect himself with a dome, but a few moments later a powerful explosion thundered in the garden. Mrs. Mu, covering her head with her hands, began to apologize to Mr. Li, admitting that she was very sorry and that it was her fault. The woman looked ahead in shock when she saw a picture that left her at a loss. She saw that Mr. Li was completely fine, because he protected himself from his daughter-in-law's attack with a dome. And our hero said that she was incredibly weak. The guy said that he was usually reasonable with weak people, but today it was different, since Chunxin was not averse to getting her hands dirty with blood. A yellow sphere sparkling with lightning appeared under our hero's palm. Li warned that he would not desire the girl and used the Taoist element, Thunderclap. Standing surrounded by a protective sphere, the protagonist launched a thunderclap at the negligent daughter-in-law, directing a powerful beam of power at her. Chunxin panicked. She didn't understand what had happened and why her attack hadn't managed to singe even a single hair on Li Jian's head. She ordered the creature to immediately repel the protagonist's attack, but a moment later she screamed in pain and lost her balance. Luo Chunxin, struck by the clap of thunder, collapsed to the ground and no longer had the strength to continue fighting. The girl did not understand why her strength had left her, and her spirit seemed to have weakened. She did not know how Li Jian could exist in this world. The green meadow was filled with white mist. Chunxin was trying to get to her feet when she saw Li Jian and Madame Mu approaching her. The protagonist, holding a small yellow ball over his finger, said that Chunxin should be held accountable for attempting to commit murder. Mrs. Mu asked Li not to touch her, because the family power was in the hands of her brother and his fiancée, and if something happened to her, her brother would also intervene. The protagonist replied that one day the woman's kindness would come back to haunt her, but for her safety he agreed to leave Chunxin alone. But Li Jian couldn't leave her unpunished, so he threw the ball at the girl's leg, causing her to scream in pain. Chunxin screamed, insulting Lee as a scumbag who had destroyed half of the Mu family's garden and injured her leg, and began threatening to deal with him and his entire family. The protagonist looked down ominously at the girl who would never be able to walk again. Madame Mu screamed in fear as her high-ranking guest, enraged by the girl's threats, rushed forward. Luo Chengxin's eyes widened, the blood vessels in the whites of her eyes bursting as Li Jian grabbed her to finish her off. The main character treated the girl mercilessly, lifting her above the ground with one hand, holding her by the neck, and leaving her no chance to live. Without looking at the Mu family's daughter-in-law's face, our hero, grinning faintly, held her by the neck for a while longer. Madame Mu's face turned pale as she watched this scene, and she quietly said her daughter-in-law Chengxin's name. She winced when, a couple of seconds later, her high-ranking guest released the girl, and she collapsed back to the ground. As if nothing had happened, Li Jian offered the woman to get back into business. Madame Mu was taken aback, but agreed. Almost all the herbs in the Mu family's garden were destroyed, and dead leaves and flowers of spiritual plants lay on the burnt-out clearing. Madame Mu fell to her knees and said that this was the end, because Chengxin was dead, and all the plants in the garden were destroyed. The protagonist concentrated energy on his fingers, closed his eyes, and declared that with his body and soul he nourishes all that exists. Sparks of yellow light flew towards the withered plants lying on the ground. The spiritual herbs began to feed on Li Jian's energy. Madame Mu was delighted when she saw that the medicinal herbs began to quickly revive and began to bloom and smell again. Li Jian raised his hand above his head and said that life begins from the heavens, and the heavenly path returns to the source. It was a spell to revive something. Mu was even more delighted when she saw a crystal in the guy's hand, which was a cluster of pure spiritual energy. The protagonist offered to give the woman this stone and expressed the hope that this way her family would forgive him for the mess in this garden. After this adventure, our hero was escorted back home. A member of the Mu family bowed to the guys and said goodbye as he left. The boy became wary when he noticed that the door to his new residence was open and Shui Yu's cat was still enjoying the catnip. The protagonist heard someone nearby calling for help, and he immediately realized that the voice belonged to Gu Tianjin. Li Jian quickly ran into the house and asked the blue-haired girl at the threshold what had happened. Our hero's face showed concern and bewilderment when he saw Tianjin as he walked further into the house. The girls looked at La Jian with fear. They were both sitting in the bathtub. Ziqi had previously asked her friend to stop screaming and causing a commotion. The guy apologized, saying that he just thought they were in danger, and GC didn't understand when he managed to return. Tianjin stood up and proudly declared that she had brought Cis-Ji back, and pointed out that he had made Cis-Ji blush. The main character briefly answered the girls that he did not intend to disturb them, left the bathroom and closed the door behind him. The guy sighed heavily after he was left alone with himself for a while and got rid of the company of girls. Li Jian blamed himself for being reckless. His face couldn't help but turn red after seeing his girlfriends in the bathroom. Returning to the hall, the boy saw the cat Shui Yu, who looked at her master when he entered. Turning to the girl, Shui Yu asked him what had confused him so much and said that he could turn to her, but he waved his hand and replied that it was none of her business. The girl approached Li Jian and said that she was his companion, and therefore had the right to know. But the guy coldly told her to leave. A tired Li Jian sat down on the sofa, and Shui Yu stated that he was still under the influence of the spiritual plant and offered to tell him how to prevent energy leakage. The protagonist looked at his companion with irritation and allowed her to speak. The girl said that he should take energy pills to prevent this from happening and stabilize his condition. Li Jian was visibly surprised. He admitted that he had never heard of such pills before and asked the cat girl how to get them. Shui Yu climbed onto her master's lap and said that first she needed to be fed, and then she would tell him everything. Tianjin ran into the hall, holding the hand of a blushing GC, and asked Li Jian to look at the new clothes they had bought. The girls stopped abruptly and froze, both of them blushing when they saw Shui Yu sitting on their friend's lap. A dumbfounded Tianjin asked what they were doing, and GT saw Shui Yu for the first time, who was helping her friend practice. Pushing Shui Yu away, Li Jian asked why Jisoo was not with the Gu family, why she was here, and who was accompanying her. The girl lowered her head guiltily and admitted that no one was accompanying her, and that she had come here to ask Li Jian something. The protagonist looked at the pink-haired girl and asked what exactly she wanted to ask him about. Before answering the guy, Jitsi came closer and carefully took the protagonist's hand. Blushing and looking away in embarrassment, the pink-haired girl told Li Jian that it was a personal matter. As the two of them were leaving for the street, Shui Yu said that Jisi was a very wonderful girl, and it was a pity that the master did not appreciate her at her true worth. Tianjin said that Sister Ji supported their master during difficult times, but Shui Yu was skeptical about the story. In the pavilion, Jitsi told the boy that Tianjin had already told her everything about how the boy had fought the blood demon and punished Dongfang Yuanshuo. The protagonist remained silent when the girl said that she looked pathetic because she could only hide behind their backs. The pink-haired girl said that she no longer wants to be a burden. She wants to protect herself and her mother. Li Jian looked at his friend in shock when she added that she also wanted to protect him. GC stood up from the bench and said her friend's name again before asking him something. The girl stood in front of him and found the courage to ask if Legion could teach her superpowers. The protagonist coldly refused his girlfriend, without explaining why he could not teach her superpowers. GC couldn't hold back her tears. She turned her back to him, realizing that she was too weak and was only capable of healing. She apologized to the guy, but then he said that superpowers are a weak power, and he can teach her something else. The pink-haired girl stopped, turned around and looked at her friend with hope in her eyes. And the main character decided to shock his girlfriend with the news that he was ready to teach her cultivation, and not just superpowers. The son hurriedly ran into his father's room and asked Mr. Mu, the head of the family, if he had seen what Mu Fei had done. Mu Mingxi told his father that she had been hanging around all day and had brought a weakling into their garden, who had then taken the life of his fiancée. Mu Hogan, after listening to his son's story, who demanded that his father take action, called his daughter a little bastard. The boy, clenching his teeth in anger, looked at his family with hatred when Mu Feng entered the room to tell her dad something about the Mu family's affairs. Mu Mingqi accused his sister of being an accomplice to the crime, because she simply stood and watched as his fiancé was killed. And now she had the audacity to come here. The woman claimed that Mr. Li had destroyed the garden unintentionally, and that she took responsibility for Luo Chengxin's death. Mo Feng, taking something out of her jacket pocket, asked to let her explain everything, and then they could do as they saw fit. After showing her brother and father the crystal, which consisted of pure spiritual energy, the girl asked them not to touch Mr. Li. Mu Hogan and his son looked at the top-grade crystal in shock and began to ask the girl where she got this treasure. The girl explained that Mr. Li had given her the crystal as payment for him unintentionally destroying their garden. Hogan asked if he really wanted to make amends that much. He asked who this guy was, because even the Blackwater gang didn't have such crystals. The old man asked if Li would like to cooperate with them. The girl replied that he was ready, but only on the condition that they give him full access to the family's medicinal herbs. Mu Mingqi fell silent and looked at his sister with disdain, wondering when this little bastard had become so smart. The guy took his sister by the hand and said that Mr. Li was now a wonderful friend to their family and asked her to introduce them as soon as possible. Now he was not sad about his murdered bride. He said that for their family to prosper, something had to be sacrificed, and there was no point in stirring up the past. Hogan stated that the blame for Chengxin's death lay with Mo Feng, so she would have to live alone for a couple of months and give the crystal to her brother, who would take over her position. Laughing, the guy said how sorry he was to take on such responsibility and advised his sister to find herself a husband and not worry about it. Mo Feng looked at her brother with disdain and advised him not to be so overconfident, as doing business with Li Jian was not that easy. Meanwhile, on the territory of our hero's residence, the conversation continued between Li Jian and his friend GC, who was shocked by his proposal. The guy stood up and said that he would help restore spiritual strength so that the girl could cultivate immortality, but there was one thing. Charging his fingers with his energy, the guy warned that GC would lose her innate abilities this way and asked if she was ready for this. Clenching her fist, a joyful GC replied to the protagonist that she was ready to do this if she would continue the journey with him. Yimou began cultivating the girl, rushing around the pavilion and influencing her with his power, using the Blade of Desolation, Awakening of Righteousness. The girl with pink hair was hit by a flash, after which changes began to occur within her. She felt her inner energy. The girl looked at her friend as if mesmerized, as he continued to direct flashes of energy into different points of her body. ZC screamed loudly as Li Jian's power began to make drastic changes in her body. She complained of pain and began to tremble. And the guy replied that he had cleared her meridians and that now she should feel energy fluctuations. The protagonist shouted at the girl not to resist the flow. GC closed her eyes and concentrated, agreeing. Sweat began to pour down Ziqi's face. It was difficult for her to go through the changes, but she admitted that she could feel this flow of energy. The young cultivator advised his friend to focus on the sensations in her heart in order to collect the energy in her body bit by bit. The pink-haired girl did what the master demanded of her without question. Then she was told to release energy with the power of thought. GC extended her hand forward and concentrated all her thoughts on releasing the energy, and she only succeeded a little. She couldn't bear it any longer and burst into tears, complaining about how weak she was. And Li Jian chuckled and thought about something. The protagonist's pupils glowed a bright blue, and he looked warily at his girlfriend. Li Jian didn't show it, but he was stunned when he noticed that the pink-haired girl had a very rare ethereal root. He knew that the ethereal root was a rare artifact that transformed spiritual energy into unimaginable power. There had already been a girl with such an artifact in history, and even the world of immortals feared her. GC asked the guy why he was laughing, and he smiled and told the girl that she had a promising future. Li Jian said that now they need to wait a couple of days to return to their studies, and with the rare root, they now need a lot of spiritual energy, which means they need to find the spiritual eye. Later, news reports revealed that 2 missing student cases had been reported at Tongyang College, making this the 18th such incident in the city. The presenter reported that the police currently have no leads, so the perpetrator remains at large, and that students should pay attention to their personal safety. Gu Tianjin was eating chips and watching the news when Ziqi came in and asked where Li Jian was, and was told that he had left 30 minutes ago. Zisai was taken aback when she heard that our hero had left home. She assumed that she had not made an impression on him. Tianjin warned her friend that the news said that girls were being kidnapped on the streets, but her friend reassured her that Mr. Gu would be with her. At this time, Li Jian and Xueyu arrived at the Mu family mansion. He was greeted with honors by Mu Mingqi. He flattered our hero, praising his appearance. Mu Mingqi extended his hand to greet him, but our hero did not answer him. He only asked who he was and where Mu Feng was. The guy introduced himself as brother Mu Feng and gave his name. He said that his little sister was sick, so he could not greet him in person. Mu Mingqi was angry when Li Jian simply walked past him and said that he was doing business with Mu Feng, not her family. The guy stopped Li and said that Feng had always been reckless and that they, as two men, could find a better common language, and he, as an older brother, would offer the best benefit. The protagonist looked at the sycophant with disdain and told the guy to get lost if he didn't want to end up like his fiancée. Li Jian turned around and left. Xueyu followed him, and Mu Mingqi remained standing in his courtyard, cursing because he had not been able to establish contact with Li Jian. The guy grimaced with anger at Li Jian. He thought that he was still alive only because he was useful to him, and would still crawl to him on his knees. Xueyu told her master that Mu Feng was not in the room, which meant her brother had lied, and Li Jian asked her to help him find the girl. In response, the cat girl in white gloves took our hero's hand before saying something to him. The purple-haired girl winked coquettishly at her master and asked him not to worry because she was with him. 3 hours later, Li Jian complained to his companion that they had been walking for too long, but the tired girl said that she was sure that Mo Feng was there. Xueyu said that cats have a very keen sense of smell, but they are still not close to the girl, although her legs are already very sore. The protagonist and her companion continued their journey through the mountain meadows. The girl asked what Mo Feng could be doing in such a remote place. Soon Xueyu solemnly announced that they were there. The guys saw some kind of industrial building in front of them. The cat began to beg for praise from the master, hinting that she was very useful, and without her he would not have managed. The warehouse was not empty at this time. 3 menacing men were sitting at the table, drinking and playing cards, when they noticed the appearance of uninvited guests. They stood up and grabbed their bats, seeing a cute girl in front of them. They offered to take care of the lady who was lost. But it turned out that in addition to the pretty girl, the main character, who was standing next to her, had come to the men. Xueyu became angry and pounced on the men with her sharp claws, demanding that they show respect to her master. The angry cat girl continued to kick the man guarding the warehouse, calling him a scarecrow, while our hero walked towards the entrance. The protagonist lifted the gate up to enter the warehouse and find Mo Feng, who Xueyu believed should be here. He shouted, asking why all these people were sitting in cages. In a spacious room, he saw people locked in small cages. The sun had already set, and the action continued to unfold in the warehouse, where Li made a terrible discovery. Xueyu saw that all these imprisoned people had superpowers. She asked him why he thought someone had put them in cages. After taking a closer look at the prisoners, the protagonist said that the spiritual energy in the bodies of these people was sealed. The purple-haired cat girl used her cat senses to locate Mo Feng in this warehouse. She reported that she could smell the girl faintly, meaning she was here. And Li Jian asked why there were so few guards outside then. The cat girl's face suddenly became wary, and she turned to her master when she noticed something was wrong. Xueyu complained about some strange sound. When she raised her head, she saw a snake man under the ceiling. The girl was frightened by the snake and screamed, grabbing Mr. Li by the hand, and our hero ordered this guy to show himself, because he had seen enough of them. The guy with the snake tail grinned sinisterly and said, "Who would have thought that he would find such a delicious treat in an abandoned warehouse?" Xueyu was so frightened that she lost consciousness and collapsed on the floor. And Li Jian said that he didn't expect to meet a creature disguised as a werewolf here. The guy with the snake's tail took these words of the main character as an insult. He got angry and asked Li Jian again what he called him. A guy with green glowing eyes jumped down from the ceiling and said that the puppy had lost his way and wanted to pounce on him. The half-human, half-snake creature tried to attack Li Jian, but our hero protected himself from him in time with a magic sphere. The protagonist looked at the careless guy with a cold gaze, safe in his dome. Seeing Li Jian use the protective dome, the snake guy licked his lips and released many more black aggressive snakes against our hero. The mutant rose up from the floor and cast the snake eye spell, Petrification, a bright purple aura surrounding his body. Our hero stood calmly in front of the guy with his eyes closed, and he asked if Li could really fight him like that. The werewolf warned the protagonist that under the influence of this technique, he would undergo hellish suffering until his death. After these words, the young cultivator opened his eyes, narrowed his eyes, and aimed his red demonic gaze at the enemy. Tongues of purple flame aimed at our hero, but he calmly repelled the attack using his energy. The mutant panicked when Li Jian turned his power against him, ridding the boy of his precious snake-shaped hair. Li Jian's power pierced the guy and brought him hellish suffering. He did not understand what our hero had done to him, but he could not fight back. The snake-tailed boy felt tiny compared to Li Jian, and it felt like he was being chopped into pieces. Having dodged our hero's attack, the mutant grinned and admitted that he had underestimated his opponent's abilities. The werewolf began to wrap Li Jian's defensive dome with its long snake tail and declared that it was now his turn. The guy crossed his arms in front of him and cast the Cobra Throw spell, releasing dozens of streams of dark purple energy. Then he spread his arms out to the sides, and a powerful stream of purple power erupted from his body towards Li Jian. She rushed straight into the protagonist's protective dome, but she was unable to destroy the magical sphere yet. The guy with the snake tail sank to the ground, clearly exhausted. The abandoned warehouse filled with thick smoke and multicolored sparks. The werewolf sighed heavily and complained that he had to spend so much energy to deal with the main character. His eyes widened with animal fear when Li Jian appeared from behind and asked the boy if he had lost anything. The protagonist summoned his sword Jiao Shu and cast the absorption spell to get rid of the snake-tailed guy. The frightened mutant looked up at the bright yellow light that blinded his black eyes with green pupils. The light that our hero summoned with his spell was so bright that its rays left the confines of the abandoned warehouse. The purple-haired girl, who had been lying unconscious on the floor, began to slowly open her eyes and come to her senses. The protagonist told his companion to get up, and the girl asked Li Jian where the snake that had frightened her so much was. Li Jian was just interrogating that werewolf. He demanded to know who his boss was, and the snake begged our hero not to kill him. The snake-tailed guy admitted that he was just a security guard and only knew that the Dongfang family was conducting experiments here. Our hero was frankly fed up with the Dongfang family getting in his way again, and he asked the guy if he was a werewolf. The frightened boy replied that he was not a werewolf at all. He admitted that he was an experimental subject of the Dongfang family. He said he remembers being locked in a container with some kind of liquid, after which he turned into this creature. Li Jian wondered why Dongfang was crossbreeding humans and animals, and asked Shui Yu to look after the boy while he looked for Mu Feng. The snake-tailed boy began to panic with fear when the cat girl approached him and wondered what he tasted like. In one of these cages, in the middle of an abandoned warehouse, Mu Feng was sitting. The girl was sleeping, so she didn't see that guests had come to see her. The main character quickly discovered a woman in one of the cages and came closer to help her. He realized that someone had placed a seal here from the world of immortals, and that this someone knew how to unite the spiritual power of people and animals. With his current strength, removing the seal would not be difficult. The boy extended his fingers forward and commanded the steel cage to break. The cage shattered into hundreds of pieces. Li Jian picked up Mu Feng and asked the girl, who still hadn't come to her senses, how she ended up here. When she woke up, she said that her elder brother had asked her to bring plants here. And as soon as she stepped through the door, Mu lost consciousness. The girl admitted that the request to bring herbs to the slaughterhouse did not seem strange to her. And then Li Jian remembered about demonic cultivation. The guy became wary when he realized that this was the signature of that very sect. The slaughterhouse, demonic cultivations, and herbs indicated this. A large white truck drove out of the city and into the green clearing, heading towards the place where Li Jian had discovered the Dongfang family's secret warehouse. The truck stopped near an abandoned warehouse, and a guy in black pants got out and was sitting behind the wheel. A guy with wavy red hair came to this warehouse to pick up some goods, and first he put on black gloves. A werewolf with a snake tail met the guest and said that all the goods were inside. He asked why the guy arrived so late. There were beaten guys lying around. The truck driver asked what happened. The werewolf told him that a couple of people tried to escape, but he stopped them. The customer asked where Ms. Mu was now, whom Dr. K had ordered him to pick up, and he was told that the girl was right at the exit. The red-haired boy walked up to the cage where Mrs. Mu was sitting and squatted down to take a closer look at her. Holding a toothpick in his mouth, the truck driver examined it and decided that the product was free of defects, so it was time to load it into the truck. The driver successfully loaded the cage containing Miss Mu into his truck and left the abandoned warehouse. But the real Mu remained in the warehouse, asking the guy with the snake tail whether it was really worth letting the disguised Mr. Li go alone. 10 minutes ago, Mrs. Mu asked if someone was supposed to pick up the goods today. Shui Yu answered that yes, because that's what the snake had reported to her earlier. Li Jian was perplexed when Shui Yu confessed to him that the secret recipe for eliminating the leakage of spiritual energy was hidden in these werewolves. The cat girl hugged her master and delighted him by saying that she had already come up with a plan on how to get to the enemy. Shui Yu promised Li Jian that she would tell him everything, but only on the condition that he kissed her now. The purple-haired lady stuck out her cat-like tongue, hoping that her master would agree to kiss her, but Li Jian covered the girl's mouth with his fingers and told her to get to the point, causing her to cry out in pain. Shui Yu said that she intended to cast a spell to disguise herself as a snake, and he would pretend to be Mu Feng so that he would be taken away from the warehouse. Mu Fing wasn't happy with the plan because the illusion might be exposed, but Shui Yu said there was no need to worry, because the Dongfang family wouldn't do anything to Li Jian. Ms. Mu said that she did not want to sit idly by while Li risked his life for her, and she offered to return home and tell her father everything. Soon the truck, inside which our hero was sitting in a cage, was racing along the highway. It was already dark outside. The protagonist, who had been illusioned and now looked like Mu Feng, sat obediently in the steel cage. He knew that there was a sect called the Earth Madmen who had created a demon spirit transformation technique to absorb a cultivator's spiritual energy and other characteristics. The boy knew that the cultists had become incredibly skilled at this technique, but for the same reason, they were vulnerable to the attack of the soul being devoured. The white truck stopped when the door opened. The protagonist closed his eyes so that the driver would not see that he had woken up. The truck driver took the cage containing our hero out of the car and began driving him into a tunnel that had been dug right into the rock. There were many cells inside the tunnel. People in them were begging to be killed. The driver allowed them to scream as much as they wanted, because they didn't have long to live anyway. The protagonist became wary when he felt a strange aura emanating from a person nearby. He noticed the door at the very end of the corridor, from which dark purple streams of aura were erupting. After taking a closer look at the door, Li Jian concluded that this aura definitely did not bode well. The driver entered the laboratory and informed Dr. K that the experimental subject had already arrived, and the scientist ordered her to leave it there. The crazy old scientist Dr. K was busy, so he didn't even look. There were men trapped in capsules with liquid nearby. They were unconscious and had oxygen masks attached to their faces so they could breathe while completely submerged in the liquid. Li Jin saw that in front of him were the Mo brothers, whom Tianjin had defeated in the death arena, and it seemed that even after death they could not achieve peace. Smiling madly, Dr. K said that he could now try the new solution. He couldn't wait to see how the brothers would change. The scientist introduced a new red solution through the pipes so that it would mix with the main liquid and begin to affect the brothers. Dr. K watched the changes closely as the solution was pumped through two tubes directly into the backs of the experimental subjects. The brothers felt the effect of the solution almost instantly, and suddenly their eyes widened in disbelief. The men went berserk. A red aura began to surround their bodies. They unleashed their strength and smashed the glass capsules. The red-haired guy who was guarding the cage with our hero said with disappointment that the experiment had failed again. The enraged experimental subject tried to attack the scientist, and Dr. K was outraged that the guy had broken the capsule again. Li Jian sat quietly in the cage, showing no signs of life, and the red-haired driver rushed forward to calm the boys down. The boy waved his hand, which left streaks of flame behind it, to pounce on the maddened experimental subject. He slammed his flaming fist into the face of Brother Mo, who had started acting aggressively after the new solution was introduced. The truck driver managed to knock the careless guy down so hard that he flew back a couple of meters and fell to the floor. Dr. K ordered his subordinate San to deal with the guy, otherwise the object would tear his lab apart. San said the solution seemed to be working and asked if Dr. K was sure he wanted to get rid of the guy. Brother Mo's body began to gradually change shape. His hand turned to stone. He clenched his teeth in anger and repeated, wishing the scientist death. Dr. K disagreed with his subordinate. He replied that it was nonsense and Mo was just another failed experiment. Mo, charging his stone fist with red aura, was about to pounce on the red-haired guy, who reacted calmly to this. San extended his hand, which was emitting fiery energy, and declared that it was time for Mo to rest in peace. It took the red-haired guy just a few seconds to get rid of the experimental subject, turning him into ashes. Li Jian noticed that this San was in the final stages of cultivation, and the concentration of fire energy was noticeably higher than Tianju's. When all that was left of Mo was a trace of soot on the floor, Sun shook his palms and informed Boss K that the job was done. Dr. K praised him, saying that Sun would always be his favorite, and the boy once again reminded the boss that the goods had been delivered. The scientist smiled evilly and ordered his subordinates to bring a new capsule and place Lady Mu in it. Shui Yu, squatting in front of the snake, told the master that she would have to penetrate the demon transformation spiritual technique. Already in the capsule, Li Jian thought that if Shui Yu's words were true, he would have to personally intervene to stop the leak of spiritual power. Scientist K continued his work, and in the capsule next door, the experimental subject was Chungxin, who had died the day before. The doctor called Mu Mingqi a real tyrant, since he does not allow his wife to rest in peace. He was interested in what would happen if the power of wood and the power of control were combined. He advised Mrs. Mu to endure the experiment or she would die in agony, and was ready to connect a pipe to supply the new solution. The red liquid began to flow into Li Jian's bloodstream in the form of Lady Mu through two pipes. The solution had an immediate effect on our hero. He found himself in another dimension and in another form, chained to the rocks. Everything around began to fill with a green aura. Wood energy? The guy himself was now dressed in the clothes of wood cultivators. A green ghost of a woman appeared before him. She said that he would not get rid of her. and she would haunt him forever, taking away his body and strength. The ghost attacked our hero with green magical flame. Li Jian screamed in pain but could not move. He concluded that the art of reincarnation negatively affects the spiritual essence of the original owner, and evil spirits only take advantage of this. The main character began to panic. He was in a helpless situation and wondered if the demon would really swallow him up. Grimacing in pain, the guy recalled the promises of his companion Shui Yu. He panicked and cursed. A woody green aura began to penetrate the boy's body, enveloping his entire skeleton and vital organs. The bright green magical light quickly reached Li Jian's heart, enveloping all the vessels, arteries, and veins that lead to it. Suddenly, the boy's heart turned a bright yellow color, which symbolizes the main character's energy, and the green aura began to recede. With a loud cry, the protagonist freed himself from the shackles, freed his hands from the chains, and enveloped his entire body in energy. Li Jian felt the internal energy spreading through every cell of his body like molasses. Now the energy would not leak out. Meanwhile, Dr. K saw that the power had reached 20%, but still nothing was happening, so he ordered it to be increased to 50. Having been freed, our hero no longer felt Luo Chunxin's presence in this space, so perhaps Shui Yu had succeeded. He stopped abruptly and froze, a look of fear appearing on his face as his clone in the form of Li Jian appeared behind him and called him Bai Shu. Li Jian asked if the boy's heart could bear it, since he used devilish methods even though he advocated righteousness. When Li Jian declared that he had changed and was no longer the coward he had been before, Bai Shu turned around and asked what he meant by that. A sinister smile appeared on Li Jian's face before he responded to who he was in his previous life. He declared that he wanted to get his body back, and then jumped up and swung his arm to attack Bai Shu. The battlefield was filled with a bright yellow light. Li Jian and Bai Shu clashed fists, measuring who had more strength. Bai Shu called Li Jian his inner demon, which he must conquer, and asked if he really thought that demonic tricks would save him. Li Jian replied to Bai Shu that they were the same person, so there was nothing wrong with them teaming up. But Bai Shu was against it and tried to attack Li Jian, but his opponent jumped back in time. Bai Shu declared that his path was out of Li Jian's reach and prepared to attack the boy with several magical blades at once. Li Jian was about to do the same, but before doing so, he asked his opponent why he was there and told him not to resist. According to Li Jian, there is no great path in the world. There are the strong and the weak, and one day Bai Shu will become the one he hates with all his heart. The boy became angry, shouting that Bai Shu knew he had no ability. So why did he continue to bully him? Bai Shu looked at the other half of his personality with concern when Li Jian stated that he had no other choice. The blades emitting a bright purple light struck Bai Shu, causing him to lose his balance and begin to fall to the ground. Li Jian, having won the victory, invited Bai Shu to join him. Only in this way would they punish their enemies and not allow them to rise above them. Bai Shu replied that he was sorry that Li Jian had to endure so much pain in the past, and he still had something to say to the boy. He found all the strength in himself to burst out with his energy again and declared that his past and the injustice of the world from which he suffered were much more painful than what Li Jian had. Li Jian became wary as Bai Shu summoned his magical blade to continue fighting back against the sinister clone. Having gotten rid of Li Jian with one swing of his dagger, Bai Shu concluded that it was all over. The guy turned his back on the defeated Li Jian, who was lying on the ground, but he asked him to stop. Li Jian asked Bai Shu why he didn't want to destroy him completely, since the guy didn't need pity towards him. Bai Shu replied that he had already taken over his body and would one day find Li Jian in the other world to seal his soul and save him from reincarnation. A look of peace appeared on Li Jian's face when he heard these words from Bai Shu. The boy was finally at peace. Li Jian's body began to emit a warm, pleasant light. He looked down and thanked Bai Shu for this. The young man in green robes recited the soul technique spell, and the light around Li Jian grew brighter. Bai Shu was confused as a stream of yellow energy began to penetrate his body through his chest. He didn't understand what was happening. An enthusiastic smile appeared on the long-haired boy's face, and he felt as if he was ascending. Dr. K continued to observe the experiment. He looked at the capsule that contained Mrs. Mu and said that this was fantastic. The mad doctor clung to the glass with adoration. This experimental object had become his favorite. The protagonist, in the form of Mrs. Mu, began to move, and air bubbles began to fill the liquid in the capsule. San was scared when he noticed this, and immediately shouted at Dr. K to be careful. But it was too late, because the next moment the capsule shattered, glass shards flying in all directions. The stunned Dr. K and his subordinates stepped back, seeing a stranger in front of them. They asked who he was. The protagonist, having regained his normal appearance, replied that he was the one who would give the mad doctor his just desserts, and San immediately stepped forward to protect his boss. Dr. K ordered his favorite not to let our hero get away. The red-haired guy with a toothpick in his mouth demanded an explanation. He asked who this stranger was, and where he had put the eldest daughter of the Mu family. The main character did not want to be frank with him and told the guy that he had no right to know. San prepared a flame-charged fist and said that he didn't care who he was, But since he was here, Li Jian would not get out of here alive. Trying to attack the red-haired guy was useless because Li Jian activated his protective dome. A wary look appeared on the red-haired boy's face when he noticed that his attacks had no effect on Li Jian. Dr. K was only happy when he saw that our hero had protective powers and offered Sun to take this guy for himself. San charged his fist with renewed fiery strength and told the protagonist that they would now see how he could parry the next blow. The red-haired boy rushed forward and attacked Li Jian, who was still protecting himself with a magical dome. Sun managed to slightly penetrate Li Jian's defense with his fist because cracks appeared in the dome after the impact. Lai watched him and saw that the technique was similar to the Kunlun sect's Flame God Fist technique, concentrating the fierce flame spirit into his fists. Without stopping, San said that he would see how long our hero could last like this, his fiery power filling everything around him. Unleashing a furious flame spirit, Sun launched a renewed attack, wishing for Li Jian to be gone from life. The red-haired boy was taken aback when his fist was effortlessly stopped by the protagonist's hand, and the flames dissipated. Li Jian criticized Sun for his rough approach, as the true flame deity technique does not rely on brute force. San only had time to look at the guy in fear when Li Jian attacked him with his magic blade, but after the attack, Li Jian saw no one in front of him. The red-haired guy had disappeared somewhere. Only tongues of flame remained. The protagonist looked around warily. He realized that San had disappeared, so there was no need to relax. A swirl of flames swirled above Li Jian's head, but our hero was still unaware of the approaching threat. The red-haired boy, whose eyes glowed with a red, demonic light, was at the epicenter of this whirlwind, ready to attack Li Jian. But he didn't manage to do this. Our hero also suddenly disappeared, and the boy didn't understand where he had gone. A look of fear appeared on San's face when he noticed out of the corner of his eye his opponent, who had already swung his blade and was about to attack. The red-haired guy turned around in time and jumped to the side so that the protagonist's magic dagger did not hit him. The two cultivators increased the distance between them. The protagonist even praised Sun for holding up well. San was shocked that this Li Jian could also teleport. He indignantly asked who he was and what he wanted. The protagonist answered the question with a question, asking when San managed to learn the Kunlun sect's flame technique. The guy squinted and said that San would have to show everything he could do today because Li hadn't played enough yet. Our hero's words angered the guy, and he gritted his teeth and accused Li Jian of still daring to look down on him. Dr. K told the idiot to stop or he would destroy his entire lab. Sun replied that they could build a new one, since Dongfang had a lot of money. A powerful flame began to erupt from San's body, reaching up to the ceiling, and the lab technicians began to run away, fearing the fire. The scientist asked her colleague why she was standing there instead of running away. The girl replied that she didn't know why since Sun had an obvious advantage. The guy explained that in the last battle, Sun killed everyone without blinking an eye, and he goes crazy when he releases all his power. Releasing all his firepower, the red-haired boy rushed forward, claiming that no matter who Li Jian was, he would still die. Li Jian was not averse to accepting this challenge. He allowed Sun to attack first and was prepared to repel his opponent's attack. Sun began launching fiery discs at our hero, which landed on the ground and caused deafening explosions. In response, the protagonist multiplied his magic blade and launched it at the enemy, bypassing all the fire projectiles. The red-haired boy froze in place in thought when he saw bright yellow swords approaching him. He calmly placed his fingers together and released even more fiery energy. The henchmen of the Mad Doctor and the Dongfang family began to become noticeably nervous when he started having problems with his technique. The boy snapped his fingers and wished for Li Jian to burn. Streaks of flames began to surround our hero. After San used the flame tornado technique against the enemy, the thin streaks of fire turned into a raging tornado. But in response, our hero only laughed arrogantly and asked San if he really called this pathetic trick a technique. Li Jian counterattacked, using the sword technique, the Moonfrost technique, which began to literally freeze Sun's legs. San was shocked to see that this guy could also control ice and asked why Li Jian was better than him. Looking menacingly at the guy, the protagonist demanded that he report where San stole the techniques of the deity of flame. The red-haired guy's clothes began to turn to ashes under the influence of the flames. He replied that it was hilarious that Li thought that the truth would prevail over him. Transforming into a fire monster, Sun declared that Li was the only one who forced him to show his trump card. The protagonist noted that this was quite interesting, since San was already at level 5 of the flame deity technique. So Li Jian decided to let this guy see the Yang Yan techniques he possessed and drew magical symbols in the air. The cultivator summoned the true form of the flame deity into the arena, and behind him, however, a giant in red armor appeared. San immediately fell to his knees before the deity of flame. He was in shock and could not believe his eyes. The red-haired guy, who had been turned into a fire monster, started screaming and getting indignant because he thought it was very unfair. The true flame deity raised the glaive that spewed flames above its head to attack San, standing by Li Jian's side. One swing of the glaive was enough for the fire deity to get rid of the careless guy. A worried Dr. K ran up to his pet and began repeating his name, seeing how cruelly he had been dealt with. The protagonist informed the crazy elderly doctor that his henchman had passed away, and now it was the scientist's turn. K told the boy that he shouldn't think he had won if he got rid of San, and suggested that he watch his biggest failure while he was alive. Neither of them had yet noticed how a creature in this laboratory opened its eyes and saw Li Jian and the doctor in the heat radiation. The monster opened its mouth and growled loudly, revealing its sharp teeth. It was bound with chains from which it was trying to break free. The experimental subject of the Dongfang family's laboratory managed to free himself from the shackles without any difficulty after waking up. The monster had long hair, phenomenal-sized muscles, and 6 holes on its back that emitted red light. The protagonist glanced back warily when he heard the monster smash the wall and the stones fly in all directions. When Li Jian turned around, he saw in front of him a terrifying monster, the result of the experiments of the mad Dr. K. Dr. K recognized this monster as Zero. He turned to him and ordered him to get rid of our hero in order to protect the scientist. The protagonist immediately realized that this monster was the one who made him feel threatened when he was driving through the tunnel. The giant obeyed the doctor's order without question and immediately attacked the boy, but Li Jian protected himself with a dome. A look of concern appeared on the boy's face when he saw that one blow from the giant was enough to break through his defense. The huge monster managed to easily smash Li Jian's magical dome into many pieces and strike our hero. The main character was attacked with such force that within a second he found himself on the other side of the laboratory, having broken through the wall with his body. He realized that this battle had to be ended as soon as possible, as he was already running low on spiritual energy. The bloodthirsty giant monster gathered to attack Li Jian from the air, waving its arms with long, sharp claws. Watching the enemy's actions, Li Jian tensed up because the monster moved phenomenally fast. But Li Jian was still faster, and he managed to move to the side at the last moment so that the monster would attack the wall instead of him. While the monster was not seeing him, our hero immediately used the Haori sword technique and Changhong sword chi to attack the enemy. A bright flash occurred in the laboratory, but the giant managed to stop the protagonist's special attack, and it did not harm him. The young cultivator then became even more tense, as the giant monster's abilities left him dumbfounded. The toothy, red-eyed monster hissed ominously as it managed to stop Li Jian's powerful blade with one hand. Dr. K stood to the side and rejoiced, shouting and calling Li Jian a damned scum who he better pray not to fall into his hands. Armed with our hero's dagger, the result of Dr. K's experiment growled and prepared to pounce on the guy again. The monster threw Li Jian's sword straight at its owner. The boy jumped up to block the attack. The main character only managed to cross his arms in front of him to prevent the sword from piercing his vital organs. But still, an explosion thundered, which caused the cultivator to lose his balance and begin to fall flat on the ground. The defeated Li Jian had not yet found the strength to rise, and the giant, with his arms spread out to the sides, smiled ominously. Fear appeared on our hero's face as the monster caught up with him and attacked him again as he lay defenseless on the floor. Dr. K laughed and shouted that it was the work of the experimental Zero that he was most proud of. The crazy doctor immediately stopped laughing evilly when he didn't see Li Jian in front of him. The guy had disappeared somewhere. Our hero appeared behind the monster and said that it was truly a pity that this monster could only rely on instincts and fight like a puppet. Having saturated the body with his energy, the protagonist declared that he was going to show mercy and free the monster. To do this, the guy decided to use the Haori sword technique. He moved the blade behind his back, and 4 fiery whirlwinds appeared in the air. The protagonist cast the 9 Sun spell, and 9 fireballs surrounded the cultivator and were ready to carry out his command. Afterwards, these balls turned into magical firebirds that began to fly towards Li Jian's opponent. Meanwhile, Li Jian held his sword at the ready, his eyes completely filled with a bright yellow light. Experimental subject. Zero began to run headlong towards our hero, with an instinct to destroy the target. But he didn't have time to do this, because the 9 suns turned him into a sieve, depriving him of the opportunity to fight further. Having lost its life, the huge monster fell face down on the floor. Li Jian looked at it to make sure that the end had come for it. The boy looked at Dr. K with disdain and said it was his turn now, while the older man hid behind the table. Smiling madly, K advised the cunning bastard not to get ahead of himself, because his proudest project could not be defeated by this guy. The crazy old man turned out to be right. Null's body regenerated quite quickly. He woke up and was already starting to get back on his feet. The monster stood up and was ready to fight again with renewed vigor, its red aura erupting from every orifice in its body. Experimental subject. Zero bared his teeth again and turned his crazed gaze on his opponent. The giant jumped up and pounced on our hero, preparing to strike him with his sharp claws. Luckily, Li Jian managed to jump up in time to dodge the blow, and the blow landed on the floor, shattering it. Armed with his sword again, the protagonist cast a spell to return the 9 suns to 1. After this attack, the monster suddenly froze, and the main character, having successfully completed the move, landed back on the ground. He gave the monster a cold look and declared that that was it. Zero was defeated by the magical sun, which went straight inside the body. Li Jian bid farewell to the monster, after which the fiery power of 9 suns began to erupt from the monster's chest. The raging flames devoured the monster, and the experimental subject could now only stand in one place and scream loudly. As the monster collapsed to the ground, the mad scientist screamed at him to use his self-healing system. Li said it was useless because that sword technique could suppress regeneration, and self-healing was unlikely to work here. Dr. K panicked. He didn't understand how this could happen, and was ready to release other test subjects who would definitely deal with Li Jian. The old man didn't have time to press the button on the remote control because Li Jian deprived him of this opportunity using a dagger. The distraught scientist screamed in pain as his arms were torn off, turning pale and fear and panic piercing the doctor's mind. When Li squatted down and asked where all these subjects came from and whether he had taught them these techniques, all K could do was yell in response. K begged to be released. He said that the Dongfang family told him about the super transference technique, and that was all he knew. Li Jin replied that the innocent victims who lost their lives at the hands of the scientist required an explanation, so his excuse was not suitable. Having prepared his sword, the protagonist asked the elderly man not to worry. Having dealt with him with a deft swing of his sword, the cultivator declared that he would soon send the entire Dongfang family to hell to accompany him. Now that the Dongfang family's laboratory was safe, the opponents had been defeated, and the protagonist looked at each of them. The superpowers here are very strong, which the guy noticed. It seems that Dongfang has found some unusual opportunity. He looked irritably at the piglet from his magic cauldron, who immediately began demanding to be given a brain. The protagonist said that defeated enemies could become food for his pet, which was already useful, and decided to look around here. The guy walked towards the exit of the laboratory, and the boar acquired its demonic form and greedily pounced on the long-awaited food. Coming out into the tunnel, he noticed that the laboratory was very ancient and was unlikely to have originally belonged to the Dongfang family. The protagonist didn't know where the Dongfang family found the demonic cultivation technique, so he went further to investigate. Li Jin stopped a few steps away from the abyss that led to a deep shaft from which a blue light could be seen. The little pig returned to his master after eating and hugged him tightly. Li Jin asked if he was not full yet. The pet looked at his master with wide eyes when he heard that his owner would not mind feeding him again. The monster tirelessly repeated that he wanted a brain. A blush appeared on his cheeks, and his mouth spread into a satisfied smile. Li Jin, meanwhile, only sensed a faint sign of life in this mine, but still decided to go down and explore it. Together with his faithful pet, the boy treacherously jumped down to figure out what was stored on the upper level of the laboratory. The guy landed safely below. He found himself in a room where there were pipes on the walls, and wooden carts were standing nearby. People wandered around the basement lifeless, their skin pale, their faces emaciated and emotionless. Li concluded that the people who had lost their vitality were being controlled by someone. Most likely these were failed experiments. He noticed that the bodies, which were already completely unusable and lying on the floor, were being carried away somewhere by those who could still be useful. The main character noticed something that illuminated his face with a green light, and the piglet looked at it with delight. Before the guy's eyes appeared a magical cauldron that emitted a bright green light. This is where the zombies carried the bodies. The magical cauldron was similar to the one our hero had, but much larger. It devoured the bodies of people who were no longer useful to the laboratory. Li Jian saw before him the 100-soul refining furnace, a magical artifact associated with the demonic sect that purifies souls and turns them into a source of power for practicing demonic techniques. The hero glanced sideways at the boar and asked if he had really brought him here to help him absorb it, and he began to make excuses. The cultivator said that his current status as a pet meant little to him, and he could easily give it up, so it all depended on his abilities. Spewing out its magical power, the monster became angry and was ready to pounce on the magic cauldron, wanting to absorb many more brains. Transforming into a huge demonic monster, Li said that he would keep an eye on the zombies, and that he should concentrate on the battle for now. The 100-soul purification furnace seemed to notice the appearance of the aggressive monster, its eyes shining even brighter. The stove transformed into a stone monster, which was an order of magnitude larger than a boar with horns, and was ready to defend itself. She opened her mouth and showed another green eye in her mouth, angry at the monster that disturbed her. Our hero's faithful pet also opened its mouth and began to bare its sharp teeth, looking with hatred at the furnace of 100 purifications of souls. The two monsters locked in combat and began to attack each other simultaneously, using their superpowers. The battle was not easy for the giant demonic boar with horns, but the 100-soul purification furnace managed to land blows. The battle continued, with the 100-soul purification furnace still in the lead and spewing out far more energy than Li Jian's pet. The greenstone monster pounced on the boar and grabbed it, attacking it not only with its hands, but also with its teeth. Our hero's pet couldn't hold back his tears. He grunted, looking at his owner, and tried to tell him that he couldn't cope. The protagonist asked him if he really started begging for mercy after his first face-to-face encounter with the enemy. Li Jian stated that the path was eternal, and there were many dangers along it, and the monster must give it its all in every battle. The protagonist added that even if he is an artificial creation, he must also cultivate his Taoist spirit. The giant boar with horns was pierced with fear when his owner asked if he thought this was the last fight. Sitting on the mountain of zombies, Li Jian advised him not to be like those dead people under his feet who were in the shadows. Mr. Li's wise words inspired his subordinate, who screamed with renewed vigor, opening his mouth wide, which frightened his opponent. The boar took a bite out of the 100-soul purification stone furnace, taking the lead in this difficult duel. He looked at his opponent with hatred as the furnace looked around in confusion and lost its ability to resist. The protagonist looked at his subordinate with a smile. It seemed like he no longer needed to interfere in the fight, and the huge demonic boar continued to devour the soul purification furnace. He was practically the winner. When the monster finished, his body changed significantly. He introduced himself as Lao Guyi, and he had a human-like torso. Lao Guyi turned around and looked at Li Jian as he praised him for consuming the furnace quite quickly, and his strength could be considered worthy. But then Lao turned into a little pig again and began to cry, complaining to the master that he almost died and he was very scared. Having defeated the furnace, Lao, whose intelligence Li Jian noticed had also grown, handed the master a soul-cleansing pill. The protagonist looked at the strange green pill. Lao warned him that he would die from pain if he took it. A day later, events were again unfolding near the ill-fated tunnel. Now there was a whole crowd of people standing near it. Grandfather Gu reported to Master Li that he had sent people there to take control of the tunnel and gather evidence of the Dongfang family's involvement in the terrible crimes. Li Jian praised the old man for doing very well, and then looked up from his book and said that he had something to warn Gu about. The protagonist told him not to try to repeat these experiments because he didn't want the Gu family to become a second Dongfang family. Grandfather Gu laughed awkwardly and asked Li Jian to rest. Assured that the old man knew what to do, the phone in our hero's pocket vibrated. He answered the call and asked Shui Yu what had happened. The girl screamed at her Taoist friend to come quickly to the Mu family's house because something very important had happened. At night, in the family home, Mu Feng screamed at her father that her brother sent her to be experimented on by humans to please the Dongfang family. Madame Mu was extremely indignant and said that if it weren't for Li Jian, she would have been dead long ago. But the elder brother, in response to all his sister's accusations, simply turned around, gave her a contemptuous look, and ordered her to shut up. Mu Hogan listened to his daughter in silence and did not say a word in response for some time, looking at the girl sullenly. Madame Mu was pierced by the pain of betrayal and asked if her father knew about all this. The brother explained to his dear sister that the father not only knew about these experiments, but also gave his consent to send her there. Hogan explained that he was doing everything for the Mu family, and Dongfang's experiments would help their family develop. And as a member of the family, Feng should be proud to die for her. The girl indignantly asked why Mu Mitsun had not decided to sacrifice himself then, and whether it was because she was a woman. In response to the girl's questions, her father said nothing, but grabbed a whip and hit his youngest daughter right in the face. Hogan declared that he had also made a sacrifice and sent his wife to the experiment. He ordered that this ungrateful daughter be caught so that he could personally send her to Dongfang's house to make amends. The bodyguards immediately began to carry out the order of the head of the family. They went forward, intending to seize the girl. Shui Yu, who was hiding under the ceiling, watched all this with interest. She decided that she needed to tell her boss about this funny situation. The cat girl immediately called her owner and said that something serious had happened at the Mu family's house, and then hung up. A grin appeared on Shui Yu's face when she completed the task and told the master to come to Mu's house immediately. The purple-haired girl wondered if she should help Lady Mu first before Li Jian arrived, but Mrs. Mu decided that this time would be different, and she unleashed all her strength to fight back. The girl defeated the bodyguard who grabbed her with her magical power and declared that she would not allow them to humiliate her anymore. She instantly got rid of the two guards, who were thrown in different directions, and they screamed in pain, being pierced by the wood force. Hogan was furious with his daughter for rebelling, and Mincy asked his father to let him teach his sister respect for her elders. The older brother attacked his sister with streams of wood power. They quickly approached the girl. In response, Mrs. Mu decided to use superpower, the energy spell. She placed her palm on the floor, charging it with green energy. The girl instantly dismantled the floor into tiles, each of which she turned into an evil chimera subservient to her. Having gathered a formidable army of chimeras, Lady Mu concentrated the wood power onto them to use as a shield. Her brother just laughed, saying that after meeting Li, her strength had increased, and asked if she and Li Jian were somehow related. Madame Mu shouted, telling her brother to be quiet and not to dare insult Mr. Li, and declared that she would definitely defeat him today. A multitude of chimeras created from floor tiles turned into a giant monster clad in metal armor. Deciding to use his trump card, Minky activated his ice power. He chuckled arrogantly, asking if Feng really thought she was that strong. The man dressed himself in ice armor, His hair turned blue, and his ears became pointed like an elf's. The girl was stunned when she saw her older brother's metamorphosis because he previously possessed wood-based superpowers. Armed with an ice crystal, the elder brother now invited his sister to look at the difference between him and her. Having transformed the ice crystal into a real ice axe, the boy jumped up and shouted, insulting his sister as very stupid. He tried to attack the giant metal monster with this weapon, but the enemy turned out to be significantly larger. However, the icy force affected the girl's chimera. He froze and lost the ability to move. The same spell was cast on the girl, and she panicked when she realized that she too could not move. Madame Mu's brother landed back on the floor, and the metal giant was completely enveloped in ice, so it was useless now. Mu Feng tried to attack her elder brother with wooden roots, but he easily cut them down and said that she was too weak. The boy used his superpower Wooden Spike to attack a metal chimera encased in a thick layer of ice. This caused the metal giant to break into thousands of iron pieces, and the girl lost her balance and began to fall. Minqi proudly stated that this is what they can offer to the Dongfang family, and he is a role model. Hogan stated that his daughter's strength was weak, and that participating in experiments could fix it, so she should sacrifice for the family in order to strengthen her bond with Dongfang. The defeated girl sat on the floor and did not want to look into the eyes of her father who betrayed her. She thought about it when he called her a child of the Mu family. Looking at the floor, Mrs. Mu asked Dad if she was really part of this family. Recalling her childhood, the girl complained that her father never loved her the way other fathers love their daughters. No matter what success the girl had achieved in the past, Hogan still saw only her older brother and praised only him. The girl still didn't give up. She diligently studied and trained on a daily basis. She naively believed that if she worked hard for her family, she could attract her father's attention and become his pride. Looking at her father, Feng said that no matter what heights she achieved, it could not compare to her useless brother, who was willing to sacrifice others for the sake of his abilities. Mincy asked the bitch who she had just insulted, and Hogan turned around and said that women were too petty and incapable of great things. With a sinister smile, Minky, having received permission from his father, said that he should first freeze his sister and then cut off her limbs. But the villain's plans went down the drain because he didn't have time to do anything before our hero grabbed his hand. Minky and his father stared at the protagonist in shock, and Feng was also surprised by the guy's appearance here. Without letting go of Mu Minky's hand, the protagonist gave him a cold look and said that he had made it. Madame Mu was worried about Li Jian and warned him that her brother was too strong and he should run away from here. Mu Minky shouted that he didn't expect the protagonist to come here to die himself, and swung his ice axe. The guy was stunned when it turned out that our hero only needed to use one finger to stop his weapon. Minky didn't understand how it was possible that this guy could stop his giant ice axe with just 2 fingers. The protagonist not only stopped the weapon with 2 fingers, but also immediately shattered it into numerous ice shards, depriving Minky of his axe. Only the hilt remained in Minky's hand. After Li Jin called Shui Yu, the cat girl immediately rushed here at his command. He ordered his companion to take Mu Feng away from here and leave the rest of the affairs to him. But Mu was still worried about how Li Jian would cope alone. The protagonist looked at his opponent with contempt and replied that he was nothing but pathetic trash. With a sinister smile, Minky replied that these were big words because he was the only one out of 10,000 applicants. Without wasting a second, Lord Mu's eldest son used the Icefall spell to cause sharp chunks of ice to attack our hero. In response, the young cultivator extended his hand and summoned the Blazing Sun Sword, specifically its first form. The Sword of the Shining Sun, its fiery, mighty power allowed the guy to get rid of giant chunks of enemy ice in a second. The protagonist cast a spell to make the sword cut through the rainbow and attacked Minky, after which the opponent's expression changed dramatically. Minky immediately used his wood superpower, Substitution, to temporarily transform into a woodman after he was injured. Once again transformed back into a human, this time without any injuries, Minky recognized that this Li Jian was not simple, and Hogan realized who exactly stood before him. Mu Feng noticed that Li had become even stronger, and Shui Yu was glad that thanks to her advice, Li had broken through again, and his control of his spiritual energy had become more precise. Mu Mingxi entered the arena again against our hero. He acknowledged his strength, but asked if he didn't understand his current situation. Out of the corner of his eye, Li Jian noticed a whole crowd of guys in green suits. Minky called on his clan for help. He shouted that these guys were the best of the best in his Mu clan, and now he would see where Li Jian would run away from them. At the command of their leader, the squad of boys from the Mu clan simultaneously attacked Li Jian with wood energy. In response, the protagonist used the Blazing Sun Sword, Zero Form, holding the flame-charged blade in front of him. The guy pointed the tip of the blade at the floor and it began to form a fiery whirlwind in it, which grew larger with each passing second. This whirlwind of flames began to affect all the boys from the clan who were aiming at it. They screamed, circling uncontrollably around the whirlwind. Hogan and his son were stunned. The superpower was instantly reflected back. They had never heard of this type of superpower. While controlling the fiery energy, the protagonist looked at the father and brother of the Mu family and said that this was an immortal technique. The head of the Mu family decided to protect his beloved son with his back because he was not strong in defense. The old man erected a wooden wall in front of himself, using his superpower, wooden spikes, to protect himself and his son from Li Jian's attack. But the wooden wall was useless against the immortal technology of our hero. The old man screamed in pain and collapsed backwards. Li Jian said that at Hogan's age, and with the support of the elixirs, he had not yet reached the golden core stage, so his abilities were very weak. Hogan knelt down and admitted that he and his son were blind. He declared that his clan was willing to provide double what Mu Feng had promised him. The protagonist looked at the elderly man with disdain, but fell silent for a moment, thinking about his proposal. Minky was indignant when Hogan said that he could also hand over the Mu clan's medicinal fields to Li Jian to ensure cooperation. The head of the family hit his beloved son in the face when he began to protest, demanding that those fields be given to him. Hogan called his son a scoundrel who did not understand the current situation and told him to apologize to Li Jian and Mu Feng. The guy replied that there was no need to apologize because he had one more trick to deal with Li Jian, and the old man asked our hero for forgiveness. A grimace of horror froze on Grandpa's face when Minky snuck up behind him and said that he would have to sacrifice his father a little to achieve this. The old man, with the last of his life force leaving him, glanced sideways at his eldest son and said his name. Madame Mu was afraid for her father. She screamed and wanted to run to him, but Shuiyu stopped her because it was dangerous. Having transformed into a tree man, Minky called his father a foolish old man who could have still enjoyed life if he had given him the Mu clan earlier. He boasted that he had used a hidden technique of wood superpower, and the guy had finally reached the peak of the Golden Core stage. Li was an old friend of the head of the Kunlun Eternal Spring sect, so he recognized the wood spirit incarnation. He knew that he was a close combat master with excellent recovery. Minky tried to pounce on our hero, but Li Jian was faster and jumped up, readying his sword. The cultivator's superior speed allowed him to strike the enemy first, and Minky's face was shattered into pieces when Li kicked him. Mu didn't understand why he still couldn't keep up with Li Jian's speed. Even though his body's strength had increased greatly, he felt like his head was about to explode from the pain. Minky, who had been transformed into a tree form, did not want to surrender. He wanted to continue the fight and was determined to attack again. But the protagonist didn't just stand there idly. He pushed off the floor to strike Minky again with his magic sword. Li Jian swung his weapon deftly, striking his opponent in different parts of the body. But it did not harm the woodman in any way. Minky decided to use his ice superpower. He turned his hand into ice crystal and rushed forward, threatening Li Jian. The guy's speed was not enough to successfully attack our hero, because he managed to dodge in time. Mu was shocked when he saw that his opponent had become even faster, and Li Jian armed himself with a sword to attack the enemy. He used the Bright Moon Sword and the Mountain Ringing technique to turn Minky's spiritual wood form into a piece of ice. Our hero's dagger, turning into a sharp ice weapon, struck his opponent, who groaned in sharp pain. The frozen Minky screamed, asking why he was receiving damage from Li's ice when he had the same technique and his body couldn't heal. Li Jian didn't answer the guy's questions and finally used the Bright Moon spell, and the space was decorated with shards of blue ice crystal. And then Li explained that he had long ago mastered the techniques of the 5 elements, and Minky was just an impudent trash who had forcibly merged with the power. Mrs. Mu was stunned by our hero's abilities. This was the first time she had seen what absolute suppression of the strong was. Shuiyu approached her master and congratulated him on taking another step towards ascension, and reminded him that cultivating together could speed up the process. The protagonist looked at Feng and said that from now on the Mu clan belonged to her. The girl did not mind.